Story starts with a genius who was exceptionally talented with a knife. The light would glint on the blade of his weapon and there was nothing that he could not cut through, nothing that would not yield to his blade. A blade so mastered that it could even slice cleanly through a droplet of water in a really cool fashion. The blade master worked so hard that his palms were covered in calluses, and after dropping out of high school, he spent 20 years in the knife business. He had become the best knife master in the country. In the present day, Table 3 calls for another course. It was coming up and more orders were made, one for special tuna platters for tables 5 and 7. The people cheered, saying that it looked delicious. They had heard that the chef there was really skilled with a knife, and they added the VIP course to table 4 and thanked each and every customer for dining with them. One of the customers noticed something going on in the kitchen at the back. Even the chefs paused when they noticed that something strange was happening. It was the masterful chef and he glared at the fish in front of him with a serious expression on his face. One of the other chefs informed him that his phone was ringing. The talented chef paused in surprise because his phone was supposed to be on vibrate. However, he was surprised to get a notification from a game that he had already deleted before. He wondered if his phone was broken, but he did not have long to ponder it before someone called him. They inform him that they have customers waiting. However, the customer is to be told that they do not have the course that they are looking for, and he clenches his fist. However, the customer stepped forward, telling him not to lie since it was obvious that the master chef was not telling the truth. In strode a sleazy-looking mafia boss with blonde hair and 2 bodyguards. Mr. Sleaze said that he had come because he thought that it was time for the talented chef to give him an answer. Sleaze said that he believed that he had given the MC more than enough time to think it over, and that for someone who handled the same things every day, this should not be too difficult for the guy. The mafia dude laughed and said that he must have been too ignorant. In situations like this, it was the one asking the favor who should make a gesture, and he snapped his fingers, presenting a suitcase of dollar bills, saying that he would make sure that the talented chef would not be disappointed. The mafia boss grinned, saying that he would pay him $3 billion as an advance payment, as long as the job was done properly. However, there was suddenly a lot of sharp slicing and a lot of quick and clean cuts were made. The MC had unleashed his knife and done a little bit of slicing. He then spoke to the obvious mafia boss, saying that this was a kitchen where cleanliness was their top priority, so someone as dirty as the mafia boss had no place there. With a stern look of disgust on his face, the talented chef asked the mafia boss to leave. His cleanly cut fish fell threateningly on the floor before the mafia goons. They were shocked, but Mr. Sleaze would not back down so easily. He laughed, saying such skills were expected of the sword master. The blonde mafia laughed that the guy was truly not someone who should be slicing fish in a place like that, so the boss asked him to hurry up and switch professions. However, the talented chef just grabbed his knife and the mafia goons panicked, scared he would fling it at them. They left, but Mr. Sleaze laughed that he would not give up that easily, and he swore to be back to be the bane of the MC's existence soon enough. Then, the mafia boss asked his goons to go with him and the other chefs nervously watched him leave. Everyone turned back to work after that incident and time passed. The sky began to darken as the business day came to an end. The chef said that an advance payment of 3 billion won was amazing, and if it were him, he would have accepted the deal right away, so he had no idea why his gifted colleague had refused. The colleague in question took a happy puff of his cigarette and explained that he had spent his whole life slicing fish, and that he knew nothing about dealing with gangsters. The other chef pointed out that the mafia just wanted to use the talented chef's reputation as the sword master, and that surely they would not make him take someone's head off. The chef naively said that the mafia just needed his colleague to scare the people a little, take their money, and then buy a house or open a shop. The other chef insisted that his colleague deserved to live like a human too. However, the guy kept puffing at his cigarette and said that he would turn it down even if he got offered a fortune. The other chef then noticed that his colleague kept getting notifications and he asked what was going on and if he was dating someone. However, it turned out that it was just a game. The chef then asked if his colleague was still playing the game called Diaper Blessing. However, that game had not been played for ages. Suddenly, someone yelled out for Jubang and demanded where everyone had gone without cleaning everything up. The other chef groaned that their boss was here, so he would be leaving first. So, the guy kept smoking and admitted that honestly, after his family had gone bankrupt when he was a kid, all he did was work. He had also once considered what it would be like to live as a real human, and he had definitely been too focused on just moving forward. Finally, he groaned and fished his phone from his pocket, wondering why on earth his phone would not stop ringing, and that it was getting ridiculous. The MC wondered if he had reinstalled the app when he was drunk, and he even considered deleting it again. It had been so many years since the Demon King's invasion in the game, and the talented chef tapped on the notification on the screen by accident. He cursed when he opened the app and music began to play. The screen showed a smirking girl with waterfall blue hair as the music got louder. The flashy background music was just as the MC remembered even after all this time, and he admitted that the female characters were still as pretty as ever. Suddenly, something weird started happening with his phone, and he noticed that his phone was glitching. Suddenly, he was then consumed by a bright light, although he was greatly confused by all that was happening. The other chef popped back outside to call his colleague and tell him that the boss wanted to see him. However, much to the chef's surprise, his colleague was nowhere to be found and all that remained was his glowing cell phone. The chef looked around and wondered just where his colleague had run off to. He wondered why his colleague had left his phone behind and he called out to him. Then he reached the conclusion that he had gone to the toilet. So, the chef walked away, leaving the phone behind, unaware that the phone screen had a new display that said that the transfer was 100% complete. There is no backstory to this tale, and it starts with 2 fingers reaching for a phone. The game was a typical pay-to-win model with an auto-hunting system, and the advertisement stated that the storyline was surprisingly worth checking out. It was a generic mobile game that needed no further explanation, and it was called Miracle Blessing. The game instructs the player to please click on the screen, and the narrator figures that we wonder why he even played that game. The answer was as simple as ever, and there was a blue-haired girl with golden eyes smirked cockily at the front. Beside her was another brunette with a blush and a smirk, and a feisty-looking girl with blonde hair. Obviously, the MC had played this game because the appearance of the female character was to his taste. The main character had ended up swallowed by the game, and he had never spent a penny of in-game purchases or played through multiple cycles, and had not even finished the game. However, the unfortunate guy had not ended up in the game as a playable character, and he had not even manifested as an NPC. The unlucky main character instead found himself getting reborn into the body of a background character whose location was unknown. The suffering protagonist was born into the body of a background character. He bit harshly at the hand of fate that had dared to place him there. As the background character, the dude's name was Kang Jeong-ma. As the MC walked past, he ended up bumping into the shoulder of another person. The Virgin was shocked to have bumped shoulders with a woman. However, he explained that the situation was not how it appeared, and that anyway, even as he asked the young lady if she was okay, she stammered that she was fine and that she was sorry for the inconvenience. Fortunately, the setting of the Miracle's Blessing was in Korea. Names, locations, geography, even the speaker announced on the train that the next station was Mapu Mapu Station, and the polite dude explained that there were only minor differences of 1 or 2 characters, but it was still similar. Thanks to that, the MC was able to adapt easily, and he had been just a normal teenager. At least, he had been for a year, and he lived there, forgetting whether the world he was in was reality or a game. Experiencing an ordinary teenage life that he never had in his past life was all that he dreamed of, and he enjoyed living a very ordinary secondary life. That was until he had returned home to some devastating news. He announced that he was home, and heard someone call out to his mum. Suddenly, someone declared that he was the pride and joy of the Seori Kang clan, and his parents excitedly held up an acceptance letter showing that he had been admitted into the Hawakin Academy. Our guy was absolutely stunned to see such a letter and laughed nervously, asking his parents to kindly not bring out such a letter, but they scolded him and asked what he was talking about. His parents went on excitedly yammering about how no matter how many times they read the letter, they were super proud of their son and they thought that they had done a great job raising their child. His parents went on to happily inform him that the entrance ceremony was the next day, and they asked if he had already packed up all the things that he needed. Stunned, the MC could only mumble that he would finish packing everything up soon, and his parents encouraged him to go immediately. That was it. His modest dream of living an ordinary life was completely destroyed by that one letter. The talented chef sighed in his chair and realized that it was tomorrow already. With everyone so excited, he could not go back to his normal life by rejecting that letter. There was sighing and then some pondering on how many times he had asked to leave. But it had not made much of any difference. Just thinking about it made him feel tired, exhausted in fact, and he glanced at a picture on his wall, knowing he was exhausted because of the person in the picture. That person was the background character whose body he was now stuck in, and the MC could not understand how a background character had managed to get accepted into that prestigious school. However, what happened was that, before our boy had possessed his body, the background character Kang Jeong-ma manifested his blessing by immediately passing the entrance exam for Hawakin Academy. The situation was confounding, and the talented genius could not help but wonder if the background character was some kind of genius or something. A blessing, a bright power, often used by humans as a special ability, and it had the same concept as a game skill with it manifesting in various different forms. However, not all humans had divine protection, because it was mostly genetic. Getting a blessing heavily depended on the presence or absence of blessings in a person's family line, and the society itself was divided into ranks called noble, commoner, and privileged. This was created to maintain the power of the elite at Hawakin Academy. Although the academy was founded under the pretext of hero training, in truth, it had long been a school exclusively for the upper-class hero families. Until recently, a special admission system was introduced for non-heroic families, and the dude, who was stuck in the body of Kang Jeong-ma, was accepted as one of those special admissions. However, this of course begged the question of why heroes were needed in the first place. Well, the answer was simple, and a bright red light hovered in the sky casting dark shadows of horrific creatures over the earth. Heroes were usually needed because of monsters, otherworldly beasts that possess powers far beyond any human skill. It was a probability, but the MC has to make it clear that such a thing is not his reality. A hero training school is to prepare for war. It sounds different, but if he had to go through re-enlistment, that is exactly how he would feel. He groaned as he considered the misfortune of his body getting a blessing. He tried to check it out, but the status window still looked pretty weird, saying it was a painless blessing that could be activated in 30 seconds with a 12-hour cooldown period. Still, he focused and tried to figure out his body's manifested ability, which was stated to be painless. My guy did not completely understand what that was supposed to mean. The lazy dude groaned and wondered how he had gotten accepted with something like this, and he got depressed just looking at it. Then, he figured this was the blessing that he received when he possessed this body, the blessing of the sword god. It had an infinity activation time and 0 cooldown time. It activated only when the sword's length was 30 centimeters or less, and the width was 5 centimeters. Our guy was kind of stunned at the ability and wondered if someone was playing a trick on him with this. It was an ability that he had not seen in the game, and the content was so simple when compared to elaborate nomenclature. The status window said that it would cut if he struck, and writing something that obvious as an ability seemed weird to him. However, what stood out the most was the weird activation condition. It spelled out the exact sword length as well as the width, which was the perfect size for a sashimi knife. So, the MC wondered if there was a fencing game here too. He groaned, having no idea what the heck the game wanted, and life just did not always go the way a person wanted it to. Finally, the reluctant student was done packing. Then, his eyes snapped open as he recalled that he almost forgot to pack his equipment. Come to think of it, when he played the game, the character's equipment was as expensive as ever. Even the lowest E-rank gear cost millions, and an average C-rank gear was worth hundreds of millions. While S ranks were treasures in their own right, the tuition alone was exorbitant, and the dude did not want to spend money on an entrance that he was being pushed into. For the entrance screened, it was written there that if he did not pack something, then he would be marked from the first day. The lazy MC sighed heavily as he pondered his options, and he decided to go to Dexo. Placing his hands in his pockets, he stood and walked off. He recalled his first teacher's habit of insisting that Japanese knives were worth over 100. Now that the nostalgic dude was thinking about that old geezer, he recalled how the old man would say that a master did not blame their equipment. Time passes and someone calls out to the black-haired dude, calling him a new kid. Our boy is dressed in a uniform and unimpressed by the people calling to him. The other speaker is a big guy with a mohawk and an angry look on his face, and he is completely offended by the weapons that the MC submitted. The black-haired new student had brought with him a nice assembly of sashimi knives, all freshly bought at a great discount. It was the day of the entrance ceremony and he was going through a weapons screening. Every year, the instructor knew that there were pranks from upper-class children, so the instructor needed to establish authority from the start. The mohawk guy yelled and asked if the students thought that the academy was a joke. He yelled that it did not make any sense to use a kitchen knife as his equipment for the class placement test. However, the MC said with a serious face that this was his equipment. The mohawk dude was confused, and then he yelled once again. However, someone called out to the instructor. It was the black-haired new student, of course, and he explained that he was just a special admission student from an ordinary family. The tuition alone must have been a huge burden on his parents, and now the instructor was asking him to provide expensive equipment. He pointed out that he would never do such a disservice. The instructor noted that the color of the guy's name tag did indeed mark him as a special admission student, and it was true that the academy's tuition must be a significant burden for students who are not from the upper class. The instructor was shocked to think that someone affiliated with an institution meant to be a level playing field for education was using such prejudice to target a deeply devoted student. So, the 30% off was meant to convey that. Then the MC added that lastly, blaming the equipment was something only amateurs did, and the instructor was stunned. An expert did not blame their equipment, a really powerful quote. A pubescent teen was certainly not someone to be taken lightly, and this was exactly what he wanted, and it was as if the guy had reached the pinnacle of a field. The genius's words of wisdom and unyielding spirit was overwhelming and completely blinded the instructor, who looked at him in awe with tears in his eyes. To the instructor, the boy was the greatest of all time. The talented former chef then called out to the instructor, and the instructor agreed to allow the special admission student to use his sashimi knives. Our guy ignored them and happily thanked the instructor, and some hater purple-haired girl at the back cursed at the special admission student, and other students agreed, asking how someone like him had even gotten in. The snobby jerks even complained that he stunk. The instructor yelled at the rest of the students on the line and asked them to be quiet, and once the evaluation was over, the students were ordered to move. The MC was rather stunned at the tenacity of the instructor now fighting for him. The instructor yelled that he could be an angel or devil depending on how the students acted, and he asked if they understood, to which they replied yes. Meanwhile, our guy raced away in fear that this might give him post-traumatic stress disorder. With a deep sigh, the MC admitted that he needed a break, and he rested on a bench. As expected, it happened, but experiencing it firsthand feels awful. At least, the equipment evaluation was done, and he had made it through the entrance ceremony. The only thing left was the class placement test, and he was already exhausted. He paused to think for a moment, but he had come this far and it was too late to give up now. This was the school that he would be attending for the next 3 years, the Hero Training School, Jokwon Academy. Just as suspected, the school was completely different from what he saw on his screen. If he was to exaggerate a bit, then he would say that the school was about the size of a small city. It was pretty cool and it was a great and privileged opportunity to study at a school attended by the upper-class people. Thinking back to his past life in the district, he'd had to drop out of high school due to family circumstances, and he wondered if this was really happening. The placement test would happen soon and the announcement reached our guy where he was lounging. New students were told that they must assemble at the training hall by 3 in the afternoon. It is surprising that such an announcement was made so soon. The entrance examination had already been passed, but the placement test was important. A test was a test, so the MC had to get used to it, and he held up his sashimi knife with pride. Now that the genius thought about it, he had not used a knife once since he had gotten there and there was nothing he could do. His former trainer had once told him that he must never let go of his sword, and that he must sleep with it in his hand if it came to that. It was another of his teacher's habits, and the stuck-in-the-past clown smiled as he recalled 20 years of living by the sword. A year of rest could not possibly dull the student's skills, and the sharp dude rubbed at his sashimi knife, testing the weapon. The talented fighter unsheathed the knife a little and tapped on the blade to test that out too, and he smiled at what he had found, saying that it was not bad. He then decided that he would try cutting a leaf, and he slid his knife out of the sheath as it began to charge with power. The equipment he held in his hands met the conditions to activate his special power, and the sword god blessing was then activated. There was a blinding flash and a large explosion, with the status window then informing the MC that his physical body had a level that was too low to withstand the power of the special skill. He was shocked by this announcement, as he heard that the level of the equipment he was to use was also way too low. The status window then told him that it would use suppression to synchronize the equipment with the user. He was shocked since he had just drawn the sword, but that was enough to activate the special ability, much to his horror. Level 1 activation was now complete, and the status window told the gifted dude that the blessings of the gods would be with him. The MC's eyes widened in horror, and there was a sharp charge as the blade in his hand suddenly flooded with overwhelming power. He cried out as he was flooded with energy, and he panicked, knowing that at this rate he would die, and dying was unacceptable. His eyes widened in panic as the charge of power flooded his body, and then there was a bright blinding golden light. Shattered images fell around the MC, who found himself transported to an odd domain of red lines and line spaces. The black-haired genius was so confused about the whole situation that he cursed, and he realized that he had no idea what had happened. The sashimi knife fell from his hands, and he stared out in front of him, dazed at the cracks that hovered around him. Suddenly, the vision dissipated and his eyes widened when he realized that he was back at the academy, safe and sound. The moment he let go of his sashimi sword, he returned to how things were before, and he wondered what was going on. He groaned and he rubbed at his head, finding the whole experience very painful. Finally, it was understood that his ability got activated. But the sword god's blessing surely should not have made the entire world seem torn apart. It was hard to understand how and why such an intense pain had come about, to the point that he felt it in his head and he wondered if it could be a backlash. The painless blessing only caused a mild muscle soreness after use, and if every activation felt like this, then this might be a skill that the dude just could not use, and he glared at the fallen knife with great disappointment. Once again, the announcement rang out for new students to assemble at the training hall immediately, and the MC sighed. He wondered if it was okay for him to even try to pick up the knife again, since he could not just leave it lying on the ground. Perhaps it had hurt like that because it was the first time, and the dude continued to gas himself up to touch the knife. He told himself that it had to be okay, but his hand trembled as he reached for the weapon. He finally grabbed it in his hand, but then screamed that it was not okay when once again sparks began to fly and the dude felt electrocuted by his own ability. The other students turned in surprise to hear the man loudly cursing. Later, at the training hall, all the new students were gathered and were in awe at the giant auditorium. They walked around, admiring the place and murmuring with their various acquaintances. Even the big guns and parents talked to each other, boasting about the cost of enrolling their children. Suddenly, the green-haired man with an ugly bob turned and was surprised to see someone who had made it through a difficult journey. That person was the Lord Sword Emperor, a tall and proud man with white hair, and he was the 7-star hero Sword Emperor, Siegfried von Nibelung. The Sword Emperor was the direct descendant of Aaron Nibelung, the apprentice of the legendary hero, Balor Håkon. The ugly green bob guy hailed the Sword Emperor as the strongest human, and the dude with a big white mustache suggested that they return to their seats. The Sword Emperor laughed to himself as the nobles walked away. Then his eyes opened as he felt a disturbance in the force, just for a green-haired lady with glasses and a smug smile to appear. She greeted the Sword Emperor and called him Sieg, saying that it had been a while since they had met. She was the 7-star hero sage, Media Poison, and she laughed, asking if it had already been half a century. The old man greeted her without even turning to face her. Sieg could not believe that Miss Poison had come dressed like she was the head of the academy, and he mocked that he had thought that turning 70 would be a great excuse for her to let herself go. However, she said that it was every woman's desire to remain beautiful until the very end. She smirked and said that all the Sword Emperor had to do was to say a word and then she would make him look 10 years younger with her blessing. However, the Sword Emperor responded that even though she was turning 70 in a few days, she still had not grown up and that people should value their character above all. The Sword Emperor was very stoic, and Miss Poison giggled, calling him an old fogey. She even laughed, asking how he could be the same as he was half a century ago, and he called her an old hag out of annoyance. Miss Poison snickered, saying that she must say that he was an old bore that had changed a lot, since he was even coming to a place like this. The old man had used to despise mixing with people of that elitist mindset, and the Sword Emperor did indeed look down on the boasting nobles who were yet to take their seat. Miss Poison smirked and teased, saying that the old man's granddaughter must be quite beautiful. The old man said nothing in response, refusing to respond to such a taunt. Besides, it seemed like the placement was about to start. Many students had gathered and were just casually chatting with themselves. There was a lot of getting to know each other and mixing and matching, while the dude stood awkwardly in the center with no friends whatsoever. He then wondered if he was the only present with black hair, and he stood out like a sore thumb. To make things worse, he was also a special admission student, and 100% an outsider in this crowd. The MC still remembered how all the nobles had mocked and sneered when they heard he was on special admission back in the line. He wondered if this is what people meant when they said someone was of humble origins. He walked on through the crowd, unable to properly blend in as the people muttered around him. Suddenly, the sharp MC took interest in the person that everyone was looking at. It was a lady with flowing blue hair that caused blush to blossom on cheeks as she passed. Just as he had suspected, that girl studied in this academy as well. As she walked, the sound of her shoes made a tapping sound and all eyes were drawn to the lady with long soft blue hair and a hard golden glare. She was none other than Abel von Nibelung, the granddaughter of the Sword Emperor, and the game's main heroine. She was also the reason the MC had spent so much money on this game. Subspace was created by the legendary hero, Ballard Joquin, along with the establishment of the academy, and it is an alternative space from reality. The damage and pain experienced there feel real. But the good news is that the damage sustained in subspace does not apply to reality. Since there was no intervention from reality, even murder could be overlooked if it happened in the subspace. The old Sword Emperor noted that they would be using a subspace battle royale, and Miss Poison agreed, saying that it was a tradition at their school. But this year they tried to apply the battle royale format a little differently than before. This time the new students were divided into groups of 10, and they were ranked based on who survived within the subspace the longest. It was a survival game, and there were no restrictions on armament. The Sword Emperor pointed out that if there were no restrictions, then it was like saying that the elites could have it all. However, Miss Poison asked him to not even mention that, as this was also a compromise as much as possible. Like it or not, the academy was funded primarily by the nobility's money, and she just went through a lot of trouble to introduce that system, and the old man asked Miss Poison what she was talking about. Of course, she meant the special admission. The MC dude blushed when he got to see his crush in real life, and he admitted to himself that she was incredibly pretty. Honestly, he had thought that the game was only two-dimensional, but now he could witness her beauty in real time. The guys around her were immediately trying to strike up a conversation with her, and if he did not know better, our guy would have joined those poor guys and would have also tried to talk to Miss Gorgeous. However, he had played the game to some extent, so he knew what they did not. Abel von Nibelung was a player of the Miracle's Blessing M. In other words, the protagonist of the game was connected to her. In the end, beautiful people would always have someone they match with, which was often other beautiful people. Furthermore, as a special admission student like him, he was not suited for this. The gloomy protagonist would rather avoid getting involved and ending up with a noisy school life. The goal, after all, was to stay safe, ordinary, and secure. His self-imposed motto for the future was to complete his studies smoothly, to obtain a regular job, and to lead a normal and very secure life. Suddenly, the negative Nancy protagonist paused when he saw a job opening for a hero. Of course, he sighed that it was a joke since he could not even use his power properly, and just using the knife gave him the creeps. His body trembled just thinking about it. The MC was going to leave the protection of the world for the main characters, while he was going to focus his energy on a few more comfortable jobs. Now, the rules for the 783rd class assignment test of Joquin Academy were going to get announced. Suddenly, it was announced that the test was about to start, and the announcer said that this year's assignment test would be a battle royale. Among the 10 cadets, the top rank was Star, and the second to third ranks were called Dragon. Rank 4 to 7 were called Wolves, and the ranks 8 to 10 were ranked under Ordinary. Based on these results, the students would be assigned to different classes, and scores were automatically calculated, and there was no time limit. Our guy realized that the test was just like a game, and the goal was to finish it quickly without drawing attention as an ordinary student. The spiritual occurrence device was activated and the exam started immediately. The announcer wished the blessing of the hero to be with the students, and the main guy got serious as the transportation began. He told himself to avoid drawing his weapon as much as possible. Meanwhile, the 24th group's review had been completed, and a few students threw up and groaned from the intensity of the battle that they had just faced. The first place was announced for that group, and the 47th group's review was also complete. The first place and second place were announced as well. Come to think about it, Miss Poison turned to the Sword Emperor and pointed out that the new batch included the old man's granddaughter as well as the descendants of Chang Xiang and Jiao Gang. The results of the match were practically predetermined. However, the old man scolded her for saying that. However, the lady pointed out that 7 minutes and 14 seconds was incredibly fast. Abel was already making an amazing record even with just a C-class weapon. The high-level weapon claymore that Abel used demanded a fair review, and the lady laughed that the young kids were already acting like their elders. While it was not a record as great as her grandfather's, this was among the top 10 in the Academy's history. However, the old man said that it was only natural for a descendant of Nibelung, and since it seemed that the test was ending, it was time for the old man to take his leave. Since the other students were descended from pigs, Miss Poison then points out that there was just one batch left and she asks if the old man is leaving. The old man admitted that he was indeed leaving and he says that he will see her next time. The beautiful lady also wishes him farewell, saying that she will see him in the afterlife. Suddenly, they feel a very strong presence and both the Sword Emperor and Miss Poison stare in shock. Even the people in the arena cannot help but stare in confusion with their mouths open wide. They all stand around and stare, and Miss Poison quickly turns to her friend, asking the old man if he felt it too. Even the old man had to admit that it was ridiculous, and there was a murmuring among all the students at the center of the auditorium. The old man thought that there was no place near the president where he could feel the previous feeling, but he had definitely felt it earlier. The presence suddenly returned, just as strong and as sharp as it had been before, and both the old man and Miss Poison were stunned. Suddenly, a bright sharp light like a cut in the sky appeared, and they stared in shock. The two old powerful mentors were speechless at the sudden apparition, and a crack appeared in the sky, shattering the blue and giving way to a darkness littered with stars. Then something seemed to descend from above, crashing from up to down. The others gathered stared in shock at what had appeared, and they gaped and screamed as people landed on the ground face first with a huge bang. The people were shocked and murmured to themselves, asking if people had just fallen from the alternative dimension space. Then, there was a bright light in the sky and the old man glared at it as a bead of sweat formed on his face. Then, something descended from the light in the sky, and it shot down into the ground, landing with a bang where the fallen students lay. Miss Poison immediately called out for the medical team while the old man watched in silence. The beautiful lady ordered the medical team to check the vital signs of all the cadets who had just arrived. She yelled for them to hurry, and the sashimi knife that had impaled itself on the floor still glowed with power and magic. The fallen person's face was reflected in the sharp blade of the small knife. The outcome of the test was already decided. Someone screamed out and cursed, because unfortunately, there was a lot of fighting and strangling. By nothing but sheer bad luck, the MC had manifested in a place where students mercilessly beat each other down. Our guy had ended up caught in the middle of a death match. Quite unfortunately, he had landed near the evil twins, the Iron families Mao Jun and Mao Shun. One was big enough to clobber other people mercilessly and call them weak, while the other sadistically goaded his beaten opponents to try to fight back. Despite their natural talent, the evil twins' brutal, violent, and duality was almost boundless. Those were deliberately playing with their opponents for 30 minutes, and the gloomy protagonist had the bad luck of landing near them. Jiao Ma wondered if he looked so weak that the evil twins had not even noticed him standing there the entire time. The smaller twin looked disappointed at his opponent and asked why the student was dead. He tossed the student like he was trash and mumbled that it was boring. Then, he paused to do a bit of calculating on his fingers, and the twin realized something was off. He asked his darker-haired bro if he had caught a few of them, and his bro was casually wickedly pressing his boot down on a student's neck. Then, the twin with fairer hair realized something. The bigger, darker-haired twin admitted that he had caught almost all of the students, as he crushed the one he'd been torturing under his heel. His brother protested, saying that it was so annoying. The fairer-haired brother pointed out that his brother had already caught 4 of them, and the darker-haired twin laughed, apologizing and pointing. The darker-haired boy pointed out a girl with red hair and offered her to his fairer-haired companion. The girl trembled when they set their sights on her, and the fairer-haired brother rejoiced, saying that he would give his brother credit. Jiao Ma cursed, saying that he was the one who had been staying quietly in the corner since earlier, and it looked like their chosen victim was already panicking and had no will to fight. The fairer-haired brother began to approach the shivering girl, and he made an ugly face, mocking her. He grinned and said that she suited his taste, and he laughed wickedly as he wondered if the screams that escaped from her little lips would be to his liking. It was driving the fair-haired brother crazy just thinking about it, and the girl looked terrified. Even though the fair-haired twin was a sibling, the dark-haired twin laughed that his twin just looked like a pervert. The fair-haired twin then grinned disgustingly and asked the shaky redhead where he should start with tearing her apart. Unable to take it anymore, the MC called out to them, swearing and calling them fatherless jerks. The twins turned and he yelled, saying that even if they were in the other space, there was no reason to go that far, and that only psychopaths would do what those evil jerks wanted to do. Jiao Ma ended up stepping in without thinking, even if it was the last thing that he wanted to do. The twins were surprised to see that there was another guy available, and the dark-haired twin noted that our guy was just a special student, a person with a low-class background. Knowing this, both the twins grinned wickedly, and the fair-haired twin stepped forward, saying that he would quickly take his new opponent's head off. His dark-haired twin agreed. The fair-haired twin geared up, grinning maliciously, and his twin brother spoke up, saying that because the MC had insulted them, he wanted his new opponent's tongue. The cowardly protagonist panicked as he realized that he was now in a very tough position, and he wondered if he ought to use the blessing of the void at this moment. However, the twins had been desecrating corpses for 30 minutes, and avoiding pain for 30 seconds would not make any difference for him. He had to think out of the box, and then Jeon-ma had an idea. He recalled his sashimi power, but of course, he was hesitant. After all, if he wielded a blade, the blessing would surely manifest. The blessing of the sword god, although he only had negative memories of it so far. Our guy only wanted a safe, ordinary, and secure life, and it had not even been half a day since he chose that life. If he drew his knife now, he could kiss his dream life goodbye. He cursed and the twins watched him in confusion. He reached his hand into his bag and yanked out the knife, as the twins watched in confusion and part wonder. They then cursed when they saw the temporary hero pull out his glowing weapon, and even the girl he was trying to save was surprised. The thing was that the twins did not take Jeon-ma's weapon seriously at all because it was so small, and the fair-haired twin charged, calling his new opponent funny, so he swore to make his opponent's death as painless as possible. The fair-haired twin roared and cursed at the MC, saying that he would start by smashing his head in. The fair-haired twin leapt and our guy stared up at the jumping giant in alarm. This was not the kind of situation where the indecisive protagonist could be picky, and he only had 30 seconds, so he needed to hold on. He figured that this would at least work for something. He placed his hand on his sword and activated his power. The painless blessing had an effect of only 30 seconds and a cooldown of 12 hours, and it had to be used very wisely. Then, he activated the blessing of the sword god when he pulled his sashimi knife, and the no-pain blessing helped to neutralize the amount of pain he felt while using his other ability. The fair-haired twin laughed, mocking his temporary opponent and asking what he could possibly do with a kitchen knife in battle. The fair-haired dude cursed at the MC, and our guy knew that if he could not cut his opponent, then he would surely die. He had to use his small knife against his massive body charging at him, and he gritted his teeth as he prepared to fight. The black-haired dude braced himself, knowing that he fought not a fish but a human being. He had wondered before why gangsters always used sashimi knives in movies, and he wondered if sashimi knives could really cut people like fish. His old trainer had yelled at him and told him that this kind of thing only happened in movies, and that even if a god was to do it, cutting people with sashimi knives was impossible. His old trainer had told him that if he cut people with sashimi knives, then it would turn into something else. Then his eyes widened as his magic power activated and a bright light shone around him. The fair-haired twin was almost on top of him and the big gross dude yelled at our guy and told him to die. However, his recharged opponent suddenly focused and sliced. He had used the god's protection. The fair-haired twin looked up in shock when he saw his hand fly away from his body. The counterattack of the Mao brothers was now with Jeon-ma, and the hand of the fair-haired twin dropped to the floor with a sickening thud. Once the president had been asked why gangsters ate sashimi, and the chef had barely managed to dodge a knife that had been thrown at him. The very sharp knife embedded itself in the wall, much to the chef's fear and horror as he realized that the president was utilizing it. Our dude's old trainer said that he had instructed him to call him master, and he asked the young nonchalant chef why he even cared about that. Jeon-ma's first mentor had been an ex-gangster, and he had hacked off one of his own wrists as a kind of atonement. To make people happy with a knife, the mentor had founded a sushi restaurant, and the mentor had demonstrated great capabilities. The gloomy protagonist pointed out how in movies, criminals were constantly flashing sashimi knives, and the MC wondered if it was like that in real life. The mentor said that someone who claimed to have survived by the sword should not ask such a question. The mentor then asked the black-haired dude to think about it, saying that if someone was stabbed with a wide kitchen knife, the skin would rapidly contract and it would be hard for the knife to come out easily. However, sashimi knives were thin and allowed a person to stab and withdraw several times. This was surprising and very informative information. Then Jeon-ma asked why his mentor had said stab and not slash when it was easy to slice a fish, so it should be easy to slice people. However, the mentor yelled and said that the fish were sliced since they were already lying down. Standing, a person could not even cut a loaf of bread in one go. The MC was still adamant and said that even after watching cartoons, a slash made everything go away, and he complained that his boss just lacked talent. The old ex-gangster pounded our dude's head in anger, saying that his old boss had been his mentor. The ex-gangster went on to say that even if the god of knives appeared, it would not work. However, the fair-haired twin stared in speechless shock as his arm disconnected from his body. The fair-haired boy gaped as his hand went flying away. Even his brother and the girl who had been rescued were speechless. Then, the dismembered arm hit the ground, and the fair-haired twin screamed his agony. He cried and cursed and writhed in many languages, and the fair-haired twin grabbed his arm and cried out for his brother. Tears gathered in the brute's eyes for he was in so much pain. The boy kept crying and sobbing about the pain, and the MC stepped forward. The fair-haired twin panicked and told our dude not to get any closer. He fell on his ass and waved his arm around in fear. Still, Jeon-ma advanced, and then the coward turned behind him, shouting out for anyone who could help him. The fair-haired twin ran blindly with tears in his eyes as he cried for anyone to come to help him. His twin brother was so shocked by what had happened, and the fair-haired twin called out to his brother, stretching out his hand and begging for assistance. The fair-haired twin cried and cursed the MC hard, and he shouted, asking his brother to hurry and help him. However, before he could reach his twin, there came another deadly slice, and the fair-haired twin lost his head, right in front of his brother who was still very stupefied. There was a large splash of red as the fair-haired twin lost his head, and his body hit the ground with a thud. The dark-haired twin began to sweat with a mix of fear and horror. He stared at the blown wide eyes of his sibling as his head lay gruesomely on the floor. The dark-haired twin was speechless for a moment. Then he yelled out his brother's name in horror. He had been in so much disbelief that he had not been able to move, and as he screamed, the genius MC caught his breath. The redhead was stupefied at her hero's skill, and the dark-haired twin made himself calm down. This was the void space, and nothing that happened there could affect reality, so there was no way that his brother had died by the knife. Even so, the dark-haired guy had no information on our guy who had just attacked them. The dark-haired twin was not sure what that attack was, but it felt like someone was clumsily using a knife for the first time on a human. The dark-haired twin had to steady his heavy breathing and trembling, as he reasoned that it could be a coincidence and that Jeon-ma had just gotten a lucky shot. The dark-haired twin was now sure that he just needed to be careful when facing the knife. He was sure that his twin's loss had been caused because the fair-haired twin had been too irresponsible. So, the dark-haired twin was going to take things seriously. The dark-haired twin fired up, yelling that his weapon displayed its true might when he used it with 2 hands. The dark-haired twin fixed the machine hand that belonged to his brother on his own hand, and he used the blessing of resolution, defense, and amplification. He also used the blessing of intervention, increasing his jumping ability by 200%. The spiritual blessing led to increased fist power, and the dark-haired twin grinned wickedly as he had successfully activated a manifestation that had 3 benefits simultaneously. The dark-haired twin shouted that these were rank benefits that even the gods could not imagine. The dark-haired twin grinned and said that he did not know where our guy had gotten his magical cutting knife, but even an S-rank weapon could not pierce his new fists of power. The dark-haired twin laughed that he was different from his brother. Meanwhile, the main character was silently counting. The dark-haired twin yelled that the MC had been standing about like an idiot before a few moments ago, and he launched at his opponent with a wicked punch, shouting a question on whether the gloomy protagonist was mumbling about his will or something. The dark-haired twin grinned maliciously as he decided to just smash Jeon-ma's head while his back was turned, and his body thrummed with energy as he prepared to release his punch. However, our guy kept counting down from 7 to 6 to 5, and the dark-haired twin was confused. Somehow, the dark-haired twin found himself falling to the ground with multiple sashimi knives piercing his body. The dark-haired twin groggily opened his eyes and saw his opponent was still standing above him with his knife, his eyes glowing as he continued his scary countdown. Our guy finally reached 1 and his body began to tremble. The dark-haired twin could not keep his eyes open any longer and he closed his eyes thinking of the word black. Meanwhile, Jeon-ma's countdown had finally reached 0, and the status window informed him that the effect of the blessing of immunity had come to an end. He then cried out in agony as the strength of his own power overtook his body. He was like a black ghost. When the MC managed to open his eyes again, he blinked blearily at a sight that he could not recognize. He had stared ahead in confusion as he had woken in soft sheets, and he wondered if he had woken in a hospital. He managed to sit up with a small groan, and someone opened the door as he settled himself. Imagine his overwhelming surprise to see a man who suddenly announced that our guy had opened his eyes. Suddenly, there was a bit of a commotion as 2 feet made their way to him. The lazy genius found himself looking at a face that he had never seen. But somehow the face was familiar. 50 years ago, the person who destroyed the Demon Lord's 6th Legion commander was none other than the 7-star heroes, and he had 2 of them before him, the Old Sword Emperor and Miss Poison in all her beautiful glory. The old man stared down at him and the MC recognized him as the strongest of humanity, Siegfried. Meanwhile, the bright bubbly lady who asked if he was doing okay was the Academy Director, Media Poison. Our guy was horrified as he wondered why these very important individuals were in his room. They asked him for his name, and he introduced himself as Jeon-ma. The old man then said that it was time to get to the point as he repeated our boy's name, and then asked what on earth the hospital victim had done. The sensation at the time that the MC had used the weapon, although the sensation did not belong to Jeon-ma, it was obvious that the sensation had come from him. Jeon-ma was silent and then he glanced up at the 2. He looked specifically at the strongest of humanity who wielded a mighty sword, and the MC reasoned that there was nothing good to be gained from being targeted by that monster at a time like this. Even though it was a void space, the genius protagonist said that he had judged that some of the actions of the other students had gone too far. Nevertheless, he believed that his actions were excessive and he would accept any measure or treatment without complaint. The old man glared at him, but our guy stared right back. Then, the Academy Director sighed as she groaned at the old man, saying that he did not need to be so harsh with a small child. She smiled and said that even when Jeon-ma spoke like that, the Sword Emperor had cleaned out his clogged meridians while the student was unconscious. The Academy Director chuckled that with more age came more stubbornness, and she smirked, saying that he should at least look at her for her face's sake. The old man complained, saying that he had warned the academy director not to say anything like that, but she just squealed as she inappropriately cuddled a student, laughing that the old man was acting all shy. The sleepy genius was truly surprised to hear that the old man had helped him, and he wondered why. The academy director kept inappropriately fawning over our guy's body, thinking that it was no surprise that Jeon-ma's body was light as a feather, or rather, moist and heavy like a feather saturated in water. The academy director beamed and told the lazy dude that although he had been unconscious, they had reviewed the video of what transpired in the void dimension with the staff. The image of the genius made hurting himself just to defend an underprivileged female student was truly the lovely prince that the academy director had always dreamed of. The academy director gushed and said that Jeon-ma was the hero himself. Meanwhile, the old man finally cleared his throat in protest. The academy director fumed, but she gave in while the old man just pointed out that he was advising her to keep her dignity. The academy director gushed that she was just stating that she would not make an issue of the MC's actions during the test, so he did not need to worry. To be honest, the twins were admitted after currying favor with the academy's elders from the Mao family, and they had stated that they would withdraw themselves. He was surprised to hear this, but that was a great relief, since it appeared they would not have to share school life together. Then, the academy director said that they had come to tell him, and the grateful protagonist thanked them for the information. However, the academy reactor was no one, and she informed him that he was now the top student, and they happily congratulated him. However, the MC was horrified to hear this news. He gasped in horror as his dream of a peaceful, safe, and secure life had once again begun to crumble. The great big prestigious academy glowed in the afternoon sun. Chilling in a room, the beautiful academy director let out a sigh. She smiled, saying that she had been the head of the academy for over 2 decades, and yet this was the first time that something like this had occurred near her. The position as the top student was instantly rejected, much to the shock of Miss Poison and the old Sword Emperor. They had advised him to rethink, of course, asking if he understood what it meant to be in the star class. The Sword Emperor had even been sure that he had not heard our guy correctly. Even the elders had been furious that Jeon-ma was made top of the class. The top student was determined based on the subspace's direct results, and the MC paused to consider it for a moment. However, after a while, he confessed that he still did not want the position, much to the shock of the two once more. The old man was perplexed as the beautiful academy director kept trying to convince him otherwise. However, the academy director then called to the old man, snapping him out of his thoughts in the present time. The academy director asked the old man if he was upset that he had taken the top rank instead of his granddaughter when the old man had seen the video too. The old man laughed and said that was immature. There was nothing more immature than challenging the grading performed by the subspace imbued with the will of the founding hero. The academy had chosen our guy as the top pupil, and they simply just followed. The old man pondered the situation more and figured that if his skills had been outstanding, then this might have been comprehensive. If his physical abilities had been great, that would have been fine. If Jeon-ma's experience had been better, it would have been believable too. However, from a male till in his teens, our guy had displayed an exceptional amount of skill and precision when he had taken down his 2 opponents. It was a blast of power like nothing they had ever seen before. The emotions that the old man had seen were like the MC had embodied the notion of the skill, and the old man wondered what he had been pursuing all of his life. The old man thought that the large display of power represented the ultimate of swordsmanship. However, the old man had also sensed incongruity when he had unblocked the boy's acupoints, and the teen's feeble body had not yet received proper physical training. It appeared as if something was stored, something that should not even be stored within the young lad's body. The old man sighed at his deep thinking, knowing that at this age, he was still quite competitive, especially towards a boy of the same age as his beloved granddaughter. The academy director was still talking, and she mentioned how the MC was also quite attractive, and the way he killed opponents to save a woman in danger was extremely astounding. The academy director was baffled and wondered if she could ever pull off something like that even when she was 10 years younger, and it seemed impossible for her to do at her current age. She then grinned and asked the old man what he was thinking about. The old man was silent, and then he pondered on what college students nowadays named women like her. She was curious, and then she smiled and told him to go ahead and to open that fancy smart mouth of his. The academy director asked what people called ladies like her, and he said a cup down. A blush came to her face, and the old man began to speak some very dangerous sounding words that sounded like the word used to refer to a female dog. The academy director was furious, and the drink within the cup began to rumble. Meanwhile, our guy had climbed up some stairs to a building with brown walls and brown staircases. He saw the signboard for the wolf class, and he stared at the final compromise that he had managed to obtain. So, he would be in wolf class, even though the MC had expressed his desire to be in the tiger class. The headmaster had insisted that the top student could not be in the tiger class, and the lazy protagonist had argued that the top student should be able to be a tiger at a school that valued fairness. However, the director was not having it, and she explained that it was not permitted for the sleeping talent to be a tiger. In exchange, the academy director would keep the situation a secret, because she knew that if she sent the talented student to the tiger class, then the elders would cause even more of a fuss. The gloomy protagonist was confused, but the idea was to complete studies securely in a lower class rather than battling and straining a higher level class. He sighed as the wolf class still fell without the predicted range, and he planned on still living his peaceful life. However, when he walked into class, the door slammed loudly behind him and he was shocked to see the students all staring at him. They all stared with bored looks in their eyes, assessing Jeong-ma, who had just walked into class. Our guy had the special green badge on his chest, so they immediately identified him as a lower class student. Then, the other students in wolf class started laughing and mocking him. Unbothered, the MC walked further into class, noting that his classmates seemed to be ignoring him. He figured that was a relief, and if they were going to ignore him, then they could at least quit gazing at him. Since they were ignoring him, it appeared like the academy director had kept everything under control. Jeong-ma beamed, thinking that an outcast like him would surely have a tranquil life, so this was a positive thing, and he happily hummed to himself. Suddenly, he noticed something. He looked up to see a fidgeting girl nearby, and it was the redhead, thanking our guy for saving her regarding what previously happened in the battle against the twins. He stared at her in silence for a moment, and she stared back in silence as well. She then blushed and explained that this was regarding what had happened during the test, and our guy then recalled what she was talking about. He had wondered why she was using honorifics to address someone her age, but he told her that she did not need to thank him, and he smiled, saying that in such a scenario, anyone would have behaved in the same way. It appears the coincidental hero had ended up saving the redhead, and she told him again that she truly appreciated his help. The MC had however done that to save himself too, and now he felt like a hypocrite receiving her thanks. Come to think of it, Jeong-ma realized that he had yet to introduce himself, and he told her his name. Then the redhead happily introduced herself as Chloe. He smiled and said that it was nice to meet her and that he did not anticipate them being in the same class. She admitted that she had also not seen that coming and that it was good to meet him. Jeong-ma however wondered who Chloe was, as he could not remember her name from the game, and he had even played the mini-game. It seemed, considering that the core narrative involves combating demons in the latter meeting, that introducing a new character at this time felt a bit too soon. Our guy then noticed something again. He reached the conclusion that there was a high possibility that Chloe was just a support extra, just like he was. He then beamed and asked her to kindly keep the incident from the exam a secret, and she was surprised by his request, but she agreed. Then, Red said that if it was not too much trouble, then she would like to ask for a favor. However, before she could ask, a teacher came in and asked all the students to please take their seats, shocking Red. Jeong-ma smiled and said that they would talk later, and Red shyly agreed. The book was slammed on the table, and the professor said congratulations to all the new students who were being welcome aboard. It was the instructor from the gate, and he told them that they had all been chosen to take on the legacy of their brave forefather, Valor Jokwon. By standing here now, the instructor told them to embrace their pride, and then he introduced himself. The instructor was Lee Won-bin, and he was the wolf class instructor. Since it was the first day for many of the students, the instructor would begin with some basic physical exercises. The instructor grinned and told them to put on their workout gear and to meet at the training area in 30 minutes. One student raised his hand and asked what the instructor's physical training program would be. The instructor said that it was simple and that they would just do 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, and 100 squats. Then, they had to go 10 laps around the training area, and if they had no questions, then they should change into their gear and proceed to the place. Then, they were dismissed and the students agreed. Our dude wondered if the exercise had been designed to make them bald, as this was more strenuous than he had expected. Then, the MC called out to the instructor, and the instructor asked how he could help the student. He was surprised that the instructor knew his name, and then he said that he was not feeling too good. The lazy protagonist needed to find any means to avoid such tedious training. The instructor hummed as he considered our dude's words. Then the instructor replied that with a superb student like him, this routine was unlikely to make him even break a sweat, and that the unfortunately talented protagonist should have gained instruction in the star class on his first day. The academy director had specifically instructed the wolf teacher to look out for her top star student, and that he had to attend classes from all the different levels. Jeong-ma was horrified to hear this news, of course, and he cursed internally, calling the academy director a wretched woman. He had told her to keep it a secret, but she had gone ahead to blab to the teacher. However, our guy was not the kind to give up easily, and he groaned, saying that on second thought, it felt like he needed to use the toilet immediately. Given that the MC was already feeling stiff, it was pretty coincidental that the teacher's instruction was so well timed. He laughed sheepishly, but the instructor responded that the noodle-limbed protagonist was direct and outstanding, as one should expect from a great student. The instructor expected to meet Jeong-ma at the training area, and there was no getting out of it after that. He ended up showing up at the training area, puffing and panting. The gloomy protagonist ran as he was instructed to, his feet working up some dust into the air. As the class ran, the instructor yelled out 1 and 2 after them. Some of the students could no longer feel their legs, and the instructor told them to hurry up and move it, and to go faster. Our guy ran behind everyone else, and he cried and groaned from exhaustion just trying to keep up. The instructor kept yelling at them to go faster, but the MC felt like at this pace he would surely die, and crawling like a snail behind him was the redhead girl he had saved, also puffing and panting. Red was worried and asked him if the training was too much for him since he did not seem to be doing very well. Jeong-ma was surprised by her question, but he laughed nervously that it was okay and that he would be alright. Then, Red asked the black-haired dude how many laps he had managed to complete. He admitted that he had covered about 5 laps, and he asked how many laps Red had completed since she seemed to be lagging. However, it turned out that Red was doing way better than expected as she was already on her 7th lap, and he was shocked to hear this. Red beamed and encouraged our guy, telling him not to give up and that he could accomplish anything as long as he kept pushing. She also encouraged him, telling him that he should do this. Then, she sped off ahead and the exhausted protagonist watched her go. He huffed and panted as he ran after her, cursing the test that put him in the wolf class. It was an evening at the prestigious academy and the building was bathed in the golden glow of the night sky. There were bottles strewn all over the floor inside of a room, and the bottles rolled idly, sweating water as they lay. Suddenly, someone slammed a bottle on the table, knocking off the other lazy bottles, and our guy groaned heavily, gasping that he was famished as he lay in his room. He had consumed so many bottles of water and their empty cans were lying around his room. It was already 1 week into the academy and Jeong-ma had already faced some unexpected problems. In the great hall where the students gathered, he had groaned that he was famished and crazy hungry. The starving protagonist had called out for the cafeteria to give him spicy pork rice and that he would take 1 serving. Please. However, the cafeteria chef had zeroed their eyes on him and had shown our guy the glorious light of the ticket machine. He was surprised to see one, and he realized that the meal was not free. Broken. The MC said that he would come back later, but for now, he was ordering 1 spicy pork rice in advance. However, his smile faded away as he realized something. Spicy pork rice was 50,000 in price. Now that Jeong-ma took a second look at the menu, he realized that a lot of the food started from 50,000 and above and there was not a single affordable option on the menu. The gloomy protagonist had landed in a rich people's school without rich people's funds. The poverty-stricken hero felt humbled by the huge wall of prices, unable to believe just how much a small bowl of food costs. A tear fell from his eyes as he stared at the board, and he consumed his last drop of bottled water. Then, he angrily tossed the bottle of water aside and cursed furiously. Jeong-ma could not get a single plate of food because the price of said food was way too outrageous, and he was so famished. It was daylight robbery to pay that much for 1 plate of food. He was almost out of living expenditures, and he should have accepted the money that his father had offered before leaving home. The emaciated protagonist had been surviving thus far on the cheapest water from the campus shop for days, and now he greatly missed the complimentary dinners they used to provide them. He grabbed the blankets and lay all curled up in bed. He needed to think seriously about something else and forget his hunger, and he wondered if there was a blessing. The exhausted protagonist checked out his blessings, and the status window informed him that his physical level had risen recently to level 12. The MC read through the list and he realized the more his physical level increased, the more the constraints on the sword would be relaxed. The blessing would only activate if the sword was the size of a sashimi knife, but he already knew that. Just thinking about his blessing summoned his status window, and he sighed with a small smile. The newly burly and muscular protagonist stood to admire himself in the mirror, as he realized that his body had become significantly more toned, so perhaps all of the training was not entirely a waste of time. The suffering protagonist wondered if he had magically bulked up thanks to the sword master activating his pressure points, and at this point, it was essentially evolution. However, the sword god's blessing had yet to spread beyond the confines of a sashimi knife, and our growing guy wondered if he could manage even a small sword if he kept developing. Then, the talented hungry genius glanced at his small sashimi knives, and he vividly recalled being afraid of holding a sword before the admission ceremony. However, now when he was not carrying a sword, his hands itched and he wondered if this was also a result of the blessing. He then rubbed his head and wondered why he was suddenly feeling so proud. Then, our guy turned when he heard a noise behind him and he asked who it was. The MC opened the door to his room and found Red standing outside the door. The flustered girl flushed to see the built guy's muscles, and she apologized, asking if she was interrupting him on his break. He was surprised to see Chloe outside his bedroom door, but he smiled and said that she did not interrupt anything since he had simply been lying down. Jeong-ma then asked why she was there. She smiled and said that she noticed that the MC had not been to the university cafeteria that week. Red asked if he had been feeling unwell, and he just laughed, saying that he normally did not consume meals prepared by others. In truth, he truly enjoyed meals cooked by others and he was starving. She was surprised by his words and he assured Red not to worry about him. Then, Red said that if it was fine with our guy, then she was thinking of getting some things from the campus shop and having supper together. However, the protagonist quickly agreed, suddenly all dressed up, much to her surprise. He was, of course, happy to do anything for some free food, and he asked if she was suggesting that they eat supper together. She admitted that she was indeed suggesting that, and then he smiled that he was genuinely decent at cooking, so he would manage that aspect. Red raced after him, shocked by his behavior. He went to ask Red if her dorm was across the street, and since it was, then he would happily go with her. Later that night, the two had a very hearty meal, and little shy girl gasped in shock, saying that the meal was so delicious. Ma smiled and said that he was delighted to hear that. It was not even something that a person just threw together, but it was really quick. The shy girl admitted that she had only ever cooked fish before, so she had not anticipated anything like this. Meanwhile, our guy stared down at the empty tray and then suggested that they check the refrigerator, which Red immediately agreed to do. By the way, the MC realized that the shy girl had really enjoyed the fish, and Red admitted that she came from a beach region. The gloomy protagonist said that was excellent because preparing fish was his expertise. Red was surprised and asked if this was true, and since the MC's hands had been itching to do something, he would refresh himself by slicing some sashimi. However, he only had one problem with this brilliant idea, and that problem was the sword god's blessing, which activated every time he touched his weapon. Ma asked if Red owned a longer kitchen knife, and she repeated his question with surprise. The MC said that as Red knew, all of his weapons resembled the swords in her kitchen, so using something else seemed a bit awkward. The little shy girl said that he understood, and then she called our guy as she somehow presented a sword and asked if this would do. The fish-slicing protagonist was rendered speechless at the sight of the katana, and he decided that he would just take the risk and use the kitchen knife. He would finish the chopping in 30 seconds before the pain activated. So, he pulled out his sashimi knife and Red watched him in awe. The blessing of painlessness was activated, and Red watched nervously as the MC used his ability. The talented genius had once been called the greatest swordsman in the country, so this was conceivable. The star chef protagonist then activated the sword god's blessing, and he got to slicing at the speed of light. It was a masterful work, and Ma got it done quickly because his life depended on it. He ended up completing the work in 21 seconds, and that was how long it took him to scale the sea bream, split the bones, remove the guts, and fillet the meat. The successful protagonist then beamed with pride, and Red gushed at the delicious artwork that he had made. The slicing of the fish was so brilliantly done that he was proud, and he would even call it a masterpiece. He was happy that he still got it. Red asked the MC how he was so adept at cooking, and our experienced guy smiled that he had formerly worked part-time at a Japanese restaurant. Red was surprised to hear that he worked part-time, and we had to pause as he recalled he was in another world, and she did not know what a part-time worker was. Red apologized for her ignorance, and the polite protagonist said that there was no need for her to apologize, and the poor protagonist figured it was because of the difference in social position. Anyway, he was nice and fed, and he was happy to hear that Red loved the lunch. It made him very pleased. The shy Red had beamed, and she was overjoyed that our guy had cooked. She offered to wash the dishes, and he said that he would leave it to her. He crossed his arms all smug as she did the dishes, and he was happy that he was full. Our satisfied guy looked out at the moon, and he smiled that it looked so stunning that he could not help but hum a tune. Suddenly, he heard a crash behind him, and Red yelled that she was sorry. He had been scared by the sudden noise. Then, there were more loud accidents followed by more loud apologizes from Red, and he laughed nervously as he realized that she had probably never had to clean dishes before. The MC had been able to do that when he had been her age in his past life. Suddenly, something caught his attention, and he noticed a book flipping on Red's desk. Our gloomy protagonist was curious and went a little closer, and he saw that it was a diary. The diary said that Red had received assistance from someone throughout the class placement test, and that she would absolutely return the favor eventually. He thought it was such a rounded, cute handwriting with stickers, and he shamelessly picked up her diary as he considered putting it back in its proper place. After all, Red was simply a typical girl for her age. Suddenly, more diary pages flipped, and the MC was surprised that it turned. He then found that Red had written more about the dude who had saved her, which was him, and about how her heart was pounding and she could not bring herself to talk to him. The talented idiot smiled and thought that she was so cute, and realized this was the reason Red had been shy when talking to him. Ma then sneakily thought that he could keep reading the diary to see what else it said. Suddenly, the idiot then saw his name and then repeated pages and pages of Red's love declaration for him. The virgin was absolutely stunned by what he had seen, and he stared at the pages in speechless shock. Then there was a scream behind him, and our dude turned to see that Red had given up on doing the dishes, and she had in fact caught her rude guess going through her diary. Red then asked the colossal idiot if he had read her diary. Continuing on, we learn that the heroes in this world earn respect by defeating demonic beasts, and they increase their standing by gaining a global reputation. However, within their stagnant ranks, certain factions abuse the weak in the name of authority. When the law is unable to punish them, one of the hero families takes the lead and prefers to work in the shadows. The family name is the Auditor of Sicily, Auditor da Sicilia. They were a family that maintained order and carried out assassinations, working in the shadows to help the light. Those born within the auditor family had mental retraining before reaching adolescence, and their emotions were restrained and they underwent severe training. Little Red was one of those tiny auditors, and she often stared as others were trained under a strict master. Little Red was brought before an exhausted bound man and her eyes widened as she realized exactly what her master expected her to do. The little assassin shook with the sword in her hand as she approached the bound man who was beaten and tied to a log. Little auditors were formed into cold-blooded assassination machines, and the age at which the girl first soiled her palms with blood was 15. She was Chloe Auditor de Cecilia, and she was told not to underestimate her abilities as an assassin. She had heard those words long before she became completely conscious of herself, and Red had accepted those words as a part of her. Dutifully, she would pull up her mask and engage in unrelenting training, distorting her nature and casting a gloomy shade deep within her heart as she was stained with the blood of her enemies. So, by the time Red's identity had been worn down, leaving only traces of emotion, she had reached the age to enter the prestigious academy. The academy was of course Jokwon Academy, where the students were placed in classrooms according to their aptitude. Though each student's talent was at least at the level of a dragon or higher, the members of the auditor family who thrived in the shadows were assigned to the common class by their family's decree. This was the agreement between the family and the academy. Red had been excited about starting her first day at an exciting new place. However, she could not forget that she had been instructed to reprotagonist undetected. And nevertheless, even throughout their 3 years of childhood, the family eliminated every individual's liberty. Red accepted her fate as an assassin and did not protest, saying goodbye to her happy school life. Ultimately, nothing would alter her path, or so she had believed until she had met a boy. Red had been surprised on the day that our guy had stood up for her. The gloomy protagonist had yelled and cursed at the bullies that tried to beat on her, and he had yelled for the monstrous twins to keep their hands off her. Even if death in the subspace battle royale was fake, it did not mean that there was no fear of experiencing death for the first time. However, Red had been shocked when a boy appeared from hiding. Red had been prepared to quietly face death and her predestined fate, and she had long since given up on meaningless struggles. Red had been trained to do so, and she had always acted in such a manner. Ultimately, nothing was supposed to alter her from her path, not even the sight of the ugly bully charging at the boy who tried to defend her. After all, it was her fate to be in the shadows like a proper little auditor. Of course, that was how Red had perceived it. It was as though the sun had broken through ominous clouds in a mind whipped by frigid gusts, and her eyes widened as a burning sensation swept through her. Red witnessed for the first time a sword that was used voluntarily, a sword for self-defense. The lad before her brandished his sword in her honor, and then Red recalled the children's fairy tale that she had read aloud under her pillow in secret. She had read a book about a brave warrior with a sword, a story that told the tale of the imprisoned princess in a castle. The story had also told of the prince that had come to rescue the princess, and Red could only see the MC as a prince. He was the prince from the narrative, a figure that appeared to save the captured princess. Red's chest tingled and her cheeks became crimson, as an unidentifiable vague feeling surged through her. Chloe had then pondered as this was the love that she had always read about, and her hands rested on her cheeks as she watched the gloomy protagonist in adoration. In the present day, Jeon-ma was now looking very awkwardly at Red, not knowing how to respond to this very difficult situation that he had just found himself in. No matter how he looked at it, she had definitely seen him going through her diary and she was furious about it, with a dangerous aura surrounding her. The gloomy protagonist tried to nervously laugh it off. However, the awkward silence remained between the two of them and hung very heavily in the air. The idiot then knew that he had completely messed up and that he was in big trouble. Our guy panicked and wondered why everything went so wrong so fast. They had been having a great time just earlier, and the gloomy protagonist wondered if that had been the first time that he had taken the pure sentiment of a teenage girl. He then wondered if it was perhaps from the moment that he had foolishly followed her about because she was feeding him. The MC gulped and then he tried to play it casually, saying that the moon was very lovely that night. He continued to talk about how she had made him the tastiest supper that he had eaten in a long time that night. Then, Jeon-ma happily said that he would see her tomorrow and that he was heading out now, as if he would have a tomorrow. Then, Red suddenly asked the gloomy protagonist if he had seen it. He decided to play dumb and asked what she meant by her question. However, she took off her soapy gloves and asked again if he had seen that. He then glanced at the table and noticed something else on the table. Then, the MC laughed and asked if Red was talking about the reference book. He went on talking about how she had put so much effort into studying, but she darkly corrected him, saying that she meant the diary. Jeon-ma wondered if the girl had eyes on the back of her head because how had she seen him checking it out. Now, Red was even abandoning the formal speech in favor of a more relaxed one. He was internally panicking. Red now appeared to be an entirely different person, and the gloomy protagonist quickly said that he did not see it. Red asked if he truly had not seen it and our idiot insisted that he really had not seen it. The girl told him not to tell lies and he caved, finally admitting to having seen it. She fell silent and he fell silent as well. Honestly, was not the best policy. Then, the gloomy protagonist became alarmed when he saw Red slowly begin to unsheath her katana, and he was very alarmed. He had no idea why the heck she was suddenly pulling out her weapon, and he was not digging the surprise attack. Our guy tried to look for an escape route, but it was difficult considering his location. He was on the 4th floor, so he would definitely shatter his body if he jumped from the window. There was only one way out, which was the door, but Red just happened to be blocking his path. Now, the MC had a problem, and he was stuck in there for sure. He then heard Red ask what he was talking about since he had been mumbling to himself, and a chill went through him as she scraped the tip of her blade against the ground. Red walked menacingly towards Jeon-ma, who watched her approach with a shiver as he realized that she was really coming for him. The idiot protagonist tried to gaslight himself, saying that perhaps the girl was not feeling very well, which was why she had suddenly turned menacing. The gloomy protagonist had some knowledge about how to handle this type of situation. He recognized the unmoving pupils and the eyes tinted a dark crimson. Yes, our idiot was very certain now that what he was up against was a yandere girl. It made sense considering her sudden shift from a bubbly and puppy-like personality to a suddenly fierce tone and attitude. He was shocked to encounter someone with a dual personality this early into the game. Managing the yandere characteristic alone was difficult enough, but adding dual personality disorder to the mix made things even worse. It appeared that the change in personality was brought on by opening the diary. Our guy noted that this situation could be very harmful, and he was sure that she would pursue him till the day that he passed away. In order to secure his safety in the future, he had to take the initiative immediately. However, the aura in the room was even more intense than the Mao brothers, and it was downright wicked. Gosh, living in the academy was way more difficult than he ever expected it to be. First, he had to make his way out of this predicament, and he had little time because the danger was approaching menacingly on her home turf. Jeon-ma then began to consider the situation. Thanks to how quickly they had cut the fish and how fast they had eaten, he had only 9 seconds left on his no-pain ability. The sashimi knife was still in his room, but the kitchen knife that he had used earlier was still lying on the counter. However, if he went that way, Red would intercept him, and there was no way that he would not lose arms or legs from that kind of encounter. Red's eyes were honed to kill, and she got ready to slice, alarming the gloomy protagonist, who knew that he had to act immediately. He bumped into a desk in his attempt to dodge, and then our guy noticed a salvation on the desk in the form of a temporary weapon that could serve as his tool. It was a knife cutter. Red charged at him with her sword swinging and guns blazing, and he noted that she was definitely coming. The gloomy protagonist seized the knife cutter, cursing because he would have preferred to resolve this through conversation. However, he no longer had the luxury of that option anymore, and the idiot protagonist cursed as he pulled the very short weapon. The status window opened, informing Jeon-ma that it was exerting resourcefulness, which raised mental resilience, and that words and actions temporarily gained intimidation, and that it was initiating adjustment to suit the user with restraint. The blessing of the Sword of God was then activated, and the protagonist sliced with the small box cutter. As the MC prepared to battle, the same wish came up that the blessing of the Sword God be with him as he battled. The gloomy protagonist braced himself to meet the stone-cold yandere assassin, and Red's eyes widened as she approached our guy, who faced her with a very small weapon in his hand. He called out to her, saying that she had somewhat long hair, and Red's eyes widened. He said menacingly that he would chop it up for her, and he slid forward, cutting beautifully in very well executed and precise strikes. Red found herself waking in a bed, feeling all groggy as she regained consciousness. The little assassin managed to raise herself from the bed with a gentle hand on her head as she groaned and pondered on what had happened. Red looked around, wondering where our guy had gone, and she called out to him, acting all sheepish and shy. The last that Red recalled was him looking out the window while washing the dishes, and she remembered sneaking a look at his form and blushing about it. Then, she gasped and swept the sheets away as she recalled her katana. Naturally, she had to find that immediately, and she glanced at the blade propped up by her bedside desk. Red was surprised but very relieved to find that her sword was still in place, as she had often lost consciousness whenever she held a katana, so this was normal. Suddenly, Red heard the voice of her grandfather in her head, telling her that she had done a good job. Then Chloe panicked internally as she tried to recall what had happened and why she was recalling such a thing. But her inner voice told her not to worry about it. She only recalled that she had been told to not deny her talents as an assassin. Then, Red glanced at her blade again as she tried to put 2 and 2 together. The girl was a little baffled. Then she leapt into the bed, burying her face in the pillow as she gasped and called herself a food and an idiot. Red had suddenly recalled everything and was mortified that she had fainted at that moment. The assassin's thoughts instantly flew to our guy, and she panicked internally, calling his name over and over again as she blushed hard. Red flushed as she wondered if she had said something wrong when she lost her memory. Then, Chloe glanced to the side and saw a little object on the floor of her bedroom. Red was surprised to see a utility knife on the floor, and she picked it up in confusion. Suddenly, Red realized that her hair did look a little shorter, and she wondered why that was so. The assassins wondered if he had used a utility knife to cut her hair, and it looked like our guy even cleaned it up before he left and neatly disposed of the hair in the trash. Red blushed, thinking that Jeon-ma was really just too kind, and she gushed over him. She decided that she just had to write this down in her journal before she forgot. So, Red got out a pen and went straight to her journal, happily jotting away. She had documented exactly what she wanted in the simple words that declared her love for our guy. Meanwhile, the boy in question was leaning on a tree and groaning in a forest. He also spat out a rainbow of barf from having overexerted himself. Somehow, the MC had managed to get through that situation, but the effect of the painless blessing quickly ended and the gloomy protagonist had temporarily been in agony. He had barely managed to get past the first 5 seconds of the 9-second mark and he still felt like this. He groaned as his body went through various levels of jelly belly and he worried that he would end up throwing up everything that he had for dinner, which was not good since he had worked hard to get that dinner. Finally, our guy collapsed on a bench from exhaustion. He did indeed end up throwing up everything and now he was severely hungry. As the MC stared up at the night sky, he thought of Red, and he had no idea who she was. Her swordsmanship had been exceptional, the kind of style that involved cutting off the opponent's life with a single strike or at least subduing them. However, the way Red had wielded her sword, she had persistently aimed for his vital spots. It was as if her technique specialized in assassination. If Red had caught him off guard, he would have certainly lost his head in her room. Feeling that his life was being threatened, the protagonist had instinctively aimed for her neck, slicing a hard slash toward her vital area. Fortunately, the knife was too short and he had only managed to cut her hair. Our guy had managed to clean up the mess, so he hoped that there would not be any problems later. He was glad that nothing serious happened, and keeping things on the peaceful and safe side was not as simple as it looked. Apparently, being ordinary was the hardest thing, but that was far beyond that. To be honest, when Jeon-ma had first gotten thrown into this disgraceful game, it was not that he did not have ambition. Utilizing only a sashimi knife, having reached the zenith, it was not an easy decision for him to give up on a man's romantic dreams. All people, nevertheless, had a part to perform. Miracle's Blessing was the name of the game and a special favor from this world's protagonist whom our guy had not yet met. In addition to the benediction of Valor Jokwin, the legendary hero, it was one of the 2 legendary blessings in the game as he recalls. The blessing's contents were somewhat similar, and they just had to save the world from the dangers of the Demon King. The true protagonist was a legendary sword whose name translated to wound, and it gave the user incredible skills. Yet the sword was known to pick its own master. On the other hand, the MC could only use this sashimi knife, so he had no reason to explain further on how his skills could never grow in that direction. He slapped his cheeks and decided to pull himself together. Ever since he landed in the game, he had to remind himself that none of the characters or the things that happened here were real. Jeon-ma had even forgotten his goals. He understood all that, but come to think of it, there had to be at least a single ordinary person in this world. Our guy had stopped trying to figure out who the true protagonist game players were, but at least he knew how to get his way around the game. It had been a week since he had started studying at the academy, and based on the storyline, it should be around that time that the true protagonist just manifested the divine blessing, and was now late for the registration process. Now, the game's story was really progressing, and he knew the general plot, but he had not seen the ending. Our guy regretted that he had stopped playing at some point, and of course, understanding the official plot halfway through was definitely a plus. No matter what happened, he would follow the official plot, and if he let himself get carried away, he would lose even the few advantages that he had to live his quiet and happy life. If Jeon-ma remembered correctly, the story would take a dark turn starting from the 2nd semester of the 3rd year. The demonic tribe who noticed the birth of the hero was led by the core commander and joined forces and took action, threatening the academy and the hero as well. The scale of the conflict grows and eventually, a world war between demons and humans begins with the hero in the middle. As a result of this, the game's storyline evolved in the genre cliché, and he recalled being irritated by the abrupt turn in the story back when he still played the game. Our guy had sought out the delightful aspects of teenage life that he had never had the opportunity to experience. Jeon-ma had been shocked about the weird turn and wondered if all the characters were going to die like this, and that the situation appeared to be deteriorating, so he had deleted the game back then. However, what gave him the creeps was that this horrific war happened in the world that he was now stuck in. A war sounded like the pits, and he could not help but fear that he would perish in the war if it started. However, the MC rejected that fate. There were still about 3 years remaining before the war started, so he needed a realistic goal instead of a fantasy escape. Jeon-ma refused to accept his death in silence, so he resolved to get stronger and survive. Since most mass-produced game storylines have a happy conclusion, he believed that the protagonist would save the world nonetheless. So, all he needed to do was to gather the strength to defend himself. He could not live with a fate that was as fragile as a fly, where he may perish at any time amid war. So, the gloomy protagonist was going to train himself to survive as discreetly as possible. If our guy stood out too much, he would end up summoned to confront evil forces, and such situations should be avoided at all costs. Furthermore, it seemed necessary to restrain the use of his blessing of the sword god. The MC had always used the sashimi knife out of necessity, but the stress on his body was excessive and it was starting to wear him out. With the protection of the sword, he would be able to cut him in one strike. He pulled up his status window to look through the perks of his ability once again, and he found that a few of the unlocked conditions had not yet been met. However, Jeon-ma said that the performance seemed to be solid. Then, he rubbed his chin and he wondered why there was so much new content. The gloomy protagonist could now see the possibility of growing his body, mind, and even his equipment. The numbers currently seemed to be a level concept. Then he looked closer and saw something called assimilation rate. However, he had no idea what that was nor why it was rated at 1.5%. He then randomly clicked on the status board and was shocked when a pop-up came up and told him that the conditions had not yet been met, so the MC's access was blocked. Our guy was surprised, but he figured that was not important right now, and another question had arisen about this mysterious gift that he had. The most important thing to him right now was physical training and the fact that he needed a new weapon. He could not rely on painless blessings for 30 seconds forever, and he needed to train in swordsmanship with a blade that did not satisfy the God of Sword requirements. Unfortunately, there will be a practical extermination training next month that will replace the midterm exams. The training reward for that exam was Mirasama, which was a B-grade weapon. Gyoma figured that if he could handle that skillfully, then it would be enough for graduation. The specs did not meet the conditions for activating the God of Sword blessings, so it would not be a burden as a protagonist weapon. He sighed in relief and realized there was more to do than he expected. Suddenly someone called to him and our guy turned. He found beside him a girl with hair like a blue waterfall, and she said that he was on her spot. It was of course the beautiful granddaughter of the Sword Emperor, and he stared in confusion to have run into someone like her. The girl stared at him with her golden eyes, sweating a bit from her workout. The gloomy protagonist stared back speechless, and for a moment they both just stared at each other with not a lot to say. Then, she spoke again and asked the MC to move over. The dude gasped, as he had been too mesmerized by meeting his favorite character to properly respond. Our guy was shocked to see Abel, and he thought it was all rather unbelievable. He had not meant to stare at her like that, and Waterfall Locks informed him that he did not have to go anywhere, and she just wanted him to move over a little. Gyoma was silent but compliant. Then he wondered what she meant by calling the place her spot when he was sitting on a public bench, and he wondered if this was a class hierarchy thing. He groaned internally and decided to avoid any connection with the heroine or now. However, she adjusted her sweaty clothes and his pervy eyes could not look away from her as she got comfortable. A blush filled his face as the MC thought that the heroine's appeal appeared to have captivated his attention. He thought that she was so pretty, and she beamed that she had found the finest place to watch the stars. Our guy had been struck by Waterfall Locks suddenly speaking, but at least he now understood what she meant by saying her spot. He glanced over at the girl who was only focused on the beautiful stars in the night sky. Gyoma wondered if Abel was the granddaughter of the legendary swordsman that he knew. Even the handsome protagonist had started off as a rough guy. Then, Waterfall Locks suddenly asked the MC if his weapon was a sword. He was surprised and asked her how she knew. The genius noble explained that her grandfather had told her that swordsmen had varied expressions in their eyes. Gyoma blushed at her intense gaze, and then suddenly Waterfall Locks offered her sword to him. Abel beamed and asked him if he wanted to test out her sword. The gloomy protagonist looked away and mumbled that it did not really thrill him. Waterfall Locks pouted at our guy's rejection, and they were both awkwardly silent for it. He wondered why she was acting weird and wondered if she had hit her head or something. He was not used to this version of her, and he wondered if she was truly the same character that he knew. However, her eyes had darkened at his rejection, and she asked the gloomy protagonist if he even knew who she was. Abel's face had darkened at his rejection, and she raised her head, asking Gyoma if he was even aware of who he was dealing with here. He was shocked and speechless, and he wondered if Waterfall Locks was questioning him because she was suspicious of him. Of course, he thought that she was not, since there was not a single person in the school who did not know who she was. Then, he admitted that he did know her, and she said that she had no idea who he was. He wondered what her point was. The girl laughed and said that it was a big cliché. She laughed that he knew her name, but she did not know his. He then asked if he had to give his name to someone that he had just met, and she admitted that one can never know. Ms. Waterfall Locks over here pointed out that our guy could be a spy for the Demon King who infiltrated the academy as a student for all she knew. Then, she sighed and said that she did not think that there was any reason to be alone this late at night. The MC fell silent and wondered how she had said that to him when she was also alone with a hand on her side. He felt like there was no rhyme or reason for her words, and then he asked the girl why she was there. She laughingly replied that it was obvious that she was out here to exercise and train. After all, she was with her weapon and she was covered in sweat. Gyoma continued the chat by saying that he was exercising too, so the girl questioned him further on the specifics. The MC muttered that he had been breathing, considering the wild night that he just had. Somehow, Ms. Waterfall Hair was really stunned by his response. Her finger dropped in confusion, which is when our boy took note of the wounds on her hands. He watched in confusion as the girl's crazy hair went crazier, feeling flustered. The MC did not know what to say as he took in her weird and strange behavior. Finally, he commented that the girl hair was really diligent. The girl replied to that. She was diligent, but that people did not know what it meant to bear the blood of the Nibelung family. You see, the weight of her grandfather's shadow followed her everywhere. She had to be perfect at all times, and even a sliver of weakness would be jumped on by others. She mentioned how she was not the top student of the year, and that everyone knew it. To be honest, it was the first time that she had lost to someone, and Gyoma remained speechless because the conversation had entered a dangerous territory. Waterfall then asked if our guy knew, and she smiled with a happy blush on her face, saying that on one hand, she was very relieved. He still said nothing as he looked like he was stuck in a very awkward conversation. The girl went on to say that on one hand, she was very curious about who it was that had defeated her. She wanted to know who they were. The MC was getting more and more terrified the more this conversation went on. Then, she added that it was her desire to crush the top student the next time, and he nearly passed out from the fear that quickly flooded his soul. Our guy spat really hard to mask his shock from the alarm her words filled him with. He nervously asked the girl if she really had to go that far, and she insisted that it was a matter of pride for her to take such an action. She had begged her grandfather for details, and he had said that the top student was not even one from her class. Of course, the girl was offended, and as if that information was not enough, the top student had the nerve to skip the oath. At first, she refused to live in second place to that. But then she calmed down and said that she was sharing this with someone she didn't even know. He also asked why she was even telling him all this, and the girl cocked her head as she thought about it. She then pouted that it was because Jeon-ma seemed weak. Well, I don't really need to elaborate that my guy was offended by her words. Waterfall Hair happily went on to say that to be firm with the strong and merciful to the weak was her family motto, and all of her classmates were good at what they did, so she did not have any friends since she had to be firm with them. He could not believe this girl, and he realized this was why the main heroine had been so distant. The girl stretched and said with a satisfied smile that she was going to turn in for the night. The MC bid his farewell, and then the girl paused as she considered something. Suddenly she yelled that he had not told her his name, and my guy mumbled that he did not want to do such a thing, which the girl didn't like at all. Later in class, all the students were gathered at their desks and ready to study. His life at the academy was a lot calmer than he thought it would be. Chloe quickly befriended others and blended into class as he worked hard to ignore her. Meanwhile, he was busy avoiding eye contact and avoiding ever running into her. In the instance where he did meet eyes with the Sky Assassins, the ice gaze of her new friends helped to discourage him as they laughed at him being a special admissions student. Our guy couldn't care less about their dismissive looks just because of his background, and he ignored them too. Also, he was not the only special kid in the wolf class, and there were not many of them, but most of them were reluctant to interact with one another, and he guessed it was from feeling entitled. Thinking about it this way, the MC figured that it was a good thing that he was not in any of the upper classes. That was because right now was the season when the Star and the Dragon classes would form political factions. They would leer at each other like dark demons as they started politics in the middle of school. The MC had felt like it was clowns were en masse even back when he played the game. If he was in the class, he would get dizzy just thinking about what he would have to deal with. He was managing to eat well at least, and he happily hummed as he wondered what he would eat that day. The academy director had beamed and told the MC that he should have gotten it sooner from the top student perk, and she apologized for the wait as she handed Jeon-ma a MasterCard key. The faculty member card enabled Jeon-ma a smooth passage through feeding in school, and he realized that bowing in the academy director's direction 3 times a day would not be enough to express how thankful he was to have that card. He closed his eyes in sudden worship of the black membership card, and he thanked all the fates and the academy director so much. He had also been fulfilling his duties as a faithful student, and it did not hugely impact the main scenario either. Our guy beamed, and he decided to just spend the next 3 years living a life of peaceful and quiet bliss. If he just did that, then he smiled in triumph, sure that he could achieve the future that he had imagined. 700 years ago, after the first human-demon war, the hero Jaquin Baylor, who felt the need to cultivate the next generation of heroes, established the academy with his 7 disciples. The teacher explained that this story would also be on their exam, so they had to take care in familiarizing themselves with the information. Jeon-ma knew the basic story more or less, so he was not really paying attention. He knew about the founding hero, Jaquin Baylor, and for 20 years, the hero had fought against the commander of the First Corps, and against the commander of the First Army, as well as against the Demon King's right hand called Lycan. The hero had fought with such tenacity and strength, and he had emerged victorious in that mighty battle. However, a bright light had shone, and crashed into the earth, casting a huge glow upon the world. In that tense battle, Jaquin had lost an arm and could no longer participate in battle. The whole place had been filled with screams. It had been a war that was soaked in blood, with no clear victor. Fortunately, the humans and the demons reached a truce in the midst of the first human-demon war, and the hero Jaquin established the Jaquin Academy to nurture future generations. So it was that the first human-demon war led to the establishment of the non-aggression treaty between the two parties, leading the next 700 years into an era of peace. There were whispers around the class about if there would be a war in their generation. However, another student laughed that there could be no war in the 21st century and that they were more worried about what they should wear to a party the next day. The MC had no comment concerning the matter. After 700 years of peace, Jeon-ma was the only one who knew that the beginning of the first crack and said peace was not far off, and that it was only natural that everyone was used to the serenity. As much as he would like to tell the academy director what would soon happen, he did not know what consequences that would bring, so he refrained from doing so. Our guy sighed, and although the academy director did not hide the fact that she wanted to leave her position as dean as soon as possible, as she often brought up in ditching in regular conversations, the director Medea was the first person in the story to catch a whiff of the abnormality thanks to the poet's lord. Also, she was the first of the 7 heroes in the story to step up to protect the students from the incoming danger. The MC did not play much of the game, however. He had indeed looked it up and he had found that the beautiful academy director had also been the first to get sacrificed to the Demon King. He had stared silently when he had seen the info from the game, and he had been horrified to find that she would die. Jeon-ma now thought in the present as he was now in the game, and he thought of the academy director, thinking that if he did not know then he wondered if things would be easier. Then, the lecturer informed the class that the lessons were over for the day and he asked them to study hard for the exam that would happen in 2 weeks' time. The students were happy as they left the class and started talking to themselves as they headed out. Our guy noticed there was a bit of a commotion that excited the students and he wondered what was going on. Then he wondered if the protagonist had finally arrived. He checked the date and it was indeed the 5th of May, which was about the right time for the protagonist to show up. He did not expect the true protagonist to pass by their class, and many of the other students expected that he would go to the star class where he belonged. If memory serves the MC right. Then on the 5th of May, someone important would enroll in their school and he eagerly joined the students to gape as well at the door. The world's main character walked into the school with flashy blonde hair and a tall and proud gait. His name was Leon Van Reinhardt, and the 700 long years of peace would have its first crack. The main character's beautiful and handsome face was basically the whole plot, and in the game, every woman seemed to fall for him. If this were an adult-rated game, all sorts of things would happen and our guy tried not to think about that and instead channeled some good, kind and positive thoughts into his brain. Even women who were drawn to the main character like Rachel Myroam, the niece of the Spear Saint, Seiki Ryozo, the daughter of the Bowmaster, and of course Abel von Nibelung, the grandfather of the Sword Emperor. The so-called protagonist party members were all impressive, and Jeon-ma watched him. It was annoying, but the main character, Leon Van Reinhardt, was the protagonist of Miracle Blessing M, and he would be among the first to get drafted in 3 years once the war began. Though, calling it a draft was putting it nicely and he grit his teeth as he recalled it would be his second time of getting plunged into military service since he had done his time in his other life. The war in this world was a mandatory enlistment. Also, even Baylor Jokwin only managed to seal the 1st Legion commander, so our guy wondered just how strong the Demon King was in that case. It was morbid just thinking about it and he considered how the game would end if the protagonist lost, and that would be insane. The happy blonde protagonist went to greet all those who approached him, and then he turned his gaze in the MC's direction. He was absolutely shocked to see the protagonist looking directly at him, and the protagonist then smiled like a happy golden retriever. Jeon-ma stood there speechless for a hot minute as he processed what had just happened, and then he recalled that the game was the Miracle Blessing M and that the protagonist would handle things one way or another. Honestly, he found the protagonist's face very inspirational, and it convinced him before he knew it. Suddenly, someone called out to him and the nonchalant main character turned to see who had called. Later, in the training grounds of the great and prestigious academy, the dedicated protagonist stayed practicing his moves so that he could one day actually use his ability for his own good. He groaned after a long hard practice, and as expected, exceeding the constraints would not activate the blessing. First, he was determined and he would need to at least have some swordsmanship skills as he could not swing a sword without them. Suddenly, someone called out to him, and it was of course Little Red, who asked our surprised protagonist if she had done anything to him. That's right, the little assassin had noticed that he had started avoiding her, and he could only think back to when his head nearly bid farewell to his neck. Of course, the terrified coward had no idea how to respond to his new Yanderbo since he could not tell her the truth, but they would spend the entire year in the same class so he had to think of something fast. So, he lied and said it was nothing. Redhead was not really buying it, but our guy insisted that it was fine. He wanted to keep things civil and thought that there was no need to make unnecessary enemies, especially dangerous ones. Little Red was relieved by Jeon-ma's response, but he still could not figure out who she was and why she was so good at killing. Despite her being unconscious, he had been observant and had noticed that her sword was strangely filled with a lot of sorrow, and it was as if the blade was pleading to be saved. Yet, the killing intent radiating from the edge of that same blade was so intense that it made his skin crawl. The sword whisperer was able to deduce that the blade was for the purpose of killing and that Red was likely more dangerous than the twins that he had fought off. Then, the shy girl added as she called out to Jeon-ma and asked if it was fine if she could treat him to dinner tonight. Our guy was of course rather skeptical about it considering how the last dinner had ended. However, the shy assassin insisted that she really wanted to treat him, and even if she was not as good at cooking, she still wanted to try. Of course, the wary main character could not jump into a decision as he could still clearly visualize the moment that she had unsheathed her sword to take his head. However, Little Shy was not about to give up so fast and she hit him with the irresistible power of puppy dog eyes. Red's eyes made it really difficult for the black-haired MC to say no, and he would feel bad for refusing, even if accepting her offer could end with him waking up in the fridge the next morning. However, the sudden optimist figured out a way he could do this, and then he decided that instead, he would ask the little assassin for a favor. She was surprised and Jeon-ma went on, saying that she was the only one that could ask. This of course made Red feel very special and a blush appeared on her cheeks when she felt like the only one. Happily, she asked what he wanted. The smart guy then laughed and asked her to kindly teach him some swordsmanship. He needed an instructor anyway, and she just happened to have a sword, and she was pretty good at using it. After all, Chloe was insanely strong. It seemed a pretty good excuse to the MC, and he had been watching tutorials on how to handle Yandere types before bed ever since that day. It was important for him to learn how to survive a Yandere, and it had given some helpful tips. So, their training began and Red called out happily to him. Beaming and gushing, she asked our guy when he had gotten to the training grounds, and that she had been waiting at another entrance. Her new student greeted her and explained that he had just arrived. The giddy girl happily said that she had just arrived as well with a happy smile, and the timekeeper had to confirm when she had gotten there. She explained that she had arrived around 6:30, which was almost 2 hours before they were to meet, but she just laughed sheepishly. By the way, the observant main character took note of something, and Red blushed, asking if she looked weird in a very cute outfit with her sword strapped to her side. The girl did look lovely, but the blind idiot said that she just looked fine. Our guy had not noticed before because he had only ever seen her in a school uniform. But in her crop, he could see that the redhead had very solid stomach muscles. Now, he could see why she was so strong. Regardless of all that, the virgin admitted that he found her rather cute, and now he has the rare chance. So, he handed her a wooden sword, and she was surprised that they would not use real murder weapons for practice. It was not like Jeon-ma wanted to get his head chopped off by a Yandere, so he pretended that he had not hurt her well. The coward had no intention of fighting with his life on the line, and he explained that it was just a training session, so of course they would not be using real swords. Besides, they needed to use wooden swords to avoid getting hurt. Then, Red laughed all girlishly as this had somehow not occurred to her at all. The girl giggled that our guy was so nice and he had to act like he was not terrified at her malicious expression. Then, Red focused as she tested out the weight of the weapon that she now wielded, and then she swung it around easily with one hand, looking so unbothered. The coward was shaken by the feat of strength being displayed by a weak-looking young girl, and he wondered just how strong she was when she was making even the air tremble. Jeon-ma decided that it would be best to err on the side of caution before she broke him like a watermelon, and he would use his blessing as a last resort. Our paranoid guy checked out his status window and his blessing, making sure that everything was the way he needed it to be. The sword's length was not an issue and his body was still growing steadily, so everything was ready to go. However, the cautious protagonist then wondered if the blessing was usually like this. While it was not uncommon for a blessing to upgrade with experience, he was confused and wondered if it was normal for them to come with additional effects. Suddenly, it seemed like the blessing's terms were changing a bit and he could not remember such a thing happening before. He wondered how much more he had to grow for his blessing to adapt better, and then Red called out to him because to her he'd just been staring into space for a while. The little assassin asked what was the matter, and the swordsman in training apologized and realized that he was the only one who could see his status window. He also realized that he must have looked like a crazy guy just spacing out. So, he then begged the shy girl to please go easy on him on their first lesson, and she nervously agreed. Then, he gripped his wooden sword and was just about ready to swing. It was time for them to start their lesson and the gloomy protagonist raised his weapon with pride. For a moment, there was tension in the air when she also picked up her wooden sword. In our guy's past life, everything that he had learned was through hands-on experience. So, as far as the MC was concerned, seeing was believing. To truly master a field, one could not just give a piece of themselves, and they had to be ready to sacrifice their entire being. The reason why the genius had adapted so quickly to the academy was because of the training that he had dedicated himself to. The redhead swung her sword, a fiery red aura gathering around her as she took a warrior's stance. Jeon-ma had learnt from a young age, and he closed his eyes, noting the sweat clinging to his palms and how his stance flew toward. The final stroke of the sword must always strike the opponent. He knew that much. Red charged, and in a burst of speed she flew at him, and determined, he raised his sword in alarm. He thinks that her attack was sudden, and he grits his teeth as he tries to block it. However, she moved too fast and he barely managed to dodge the wooden sword that left a small bruise on his cheek. Our guy cursed, shocked at how fast little Red could be. It seemed he was biting off more than he could chew, even though her student had begged for her to go easy on him. However, the redhead still had that detrained look on her face and she cracked her fingers, adjusting her hold on the weapon, and charged again. Jeon-ma was stupefied as she came running, but this time he was able to knock her sword backwards. His arms trembled in terror and it was not exactly the kind of strike he'd been hoping for, but he comforted himself with the knowledge that he had at least been able to block Red. However, the little assassin was not even anywhere near done and the MC watched in horror as she launched at him yet again. He did not even know when she had taken to the sky. He cursed as he realized that she was just going to keep on getting faster. Just now, the genius had realized that Little Red had held back on one of her attacks. He managed to raise his stick and block her sticks. Their pieces of wood danced together in hard combat. However, a crack began to appear in our guy's wood. It was not hard enough. Jeon-ma began to get pushed back because the onslaught just would not stop. Red was on him like a barrage of demons from hell. Forget the demon clan. The hero could get started on training, just fight her because she was relentless. All of her strikes were heavy, and he knew that if he got hit even once, he might actually die immediately. So much for taking it easy on him. The panicked MC was finally reaching his limit for deflecting. He could not find any opening to counterattack this red demon, and his wood finally snapped with a mighty sound. It went flying, and he could only gape at his broken weapon. For some reason, Red gaped too, like she had not been the one to break it. The girl gasped and apologized profusely, shocked that she had broken his weapon. The assassin explained that he had been trying to fight our guy as gently as possible, but she had ended up breaking it. Then, she called out to him when she realized that he was no longer responding. Then, her eyes widened as she realized something that he had already realized. The broken sword had been cut at the exact size required for the MC's blessing, and his power informed him that the weapon conditions had been met. The weapon was damaged, so an error occurred, and the power was supposed to fit his current personality. So, it was that our gloomy main stood in the center, flooded with more power than he could contain. Geoma's humanity level began to vastly decrease, and the sword god's divine blessing was activated. The conditions for the weapon had been met, and the system gave a caution warning as Red jumped back. The weapon had been damaged. The assassin stared at her opponent with eyes wide with surprise, and the system had begun initiating the user's personality adjustment using coercive power. A deadly aura had begun to build around Geoma, and his humanity quickly began to decrease. Try as he might, the panicked student was not strong enough to fight against his fast awakening hidden abilities. The blessing of the sword god had begun to activate. We take a break from the shocking turn of events to give you Kim, who is confused and wonders where he is. Kim blinks and finds himself facing a kitchen, and wonders if everything before had just been a dream. Then Kim recalled that he had just been preparing fish, and that he had to get back to work. Focusing on the task at hand, the fish cutter looked at the selection of knives and wondered if he should use the Chinese chef's knife today after a long time. However, a warning came up, and the fish cutter was informed that he could not choose this weapon. The guy was confused, but he could not use it. So, he selected the katana, but again a warning popped up, informing the groggy Kim that he could not use this weapon either. Now, Kim was getting a little frustrated and was more than a little annoyed that he could not use that weapon. However, the system popped up and told him not to worry about it, and to keep doing what they were doing. Then, there was only the knife left, and it was a sashimi knife, so Kim reached out and selected that. The blurry haunted system said that he could use this weapon, and all he had to do was pick it up. Still, the fish cutter was hesitant and pointed out that holding a sashimi knife would be extremely painful. However, the system asked if it truly felt that way. The fish cutter picked up the knife and was surprised to find that he felt perfectly fine while holding the sashimi knife. In fact, Kim even felt rather refreshed. The system gently coerced the fish cutter, saying that he could use the knife just like that. The fish cutter just needed to leave everything to the system. Our guy had become nothing but a puppet in the system's hand as he quickly lost consciousness and control of his own body. The system told him that it was time to create an incredible masterpiece today. The heat was activated, and he emitted so much of it that he might as well be an oven. Red was shocked and worried, asking if he was okay. However, the burning main character was not okay and could not even give a response to her question. The burning oven suddenly turned in the assassin's direction, with light shooting from his eyes. Suddenly, he moved, much to the redhead's alarm. Bro was moving at the speed of light. They could barely make out his form with how fast he was zooming. The human oven appeared before the redhead, his broken sword sharpened to look like a dagger as he attacked the girl with a great force and intensity. She tried to call out to him, telling him to slow down and to wait. She even tried to tell him to hold on, but she suddenly slipped. The human oven swung his mighty sword and tossed the redhead far. She blew away like the wind, putting some much-needed distance between the both of them. Red had not expected the large strength the MC had used to attack her, and she floundered in the air. She spat out blood in pain, shock, and confusion from the intensity of the attack. Suddenly, our guy felt like a completely different person from just moments ago. Red was shocked, and she squealed when her opponent immediately came rushing at her again. This time, he was the one with killing intent. The assassin slid back, knowing that more than anything she had to keep out of the reach of Mr. Dark-haired and crazy right now. His eyes were totally covered in blue. It was like he was not even human anymore as he searched for his target. The attack had thrown the little assassin as he had not expected something so intense. It was even hard for her to move, and she clutched her chest in pain. She had no idea what happened to her kind and sweet crush, and she did not understand what was going on. But the match had to stop for now. If only the burning oven could hear or comprehend her words when she told him that they needed to stop. However, the killing machine was completely out of it as he dove for her with his hand outstretched like he was going to take her out. Red knew that she would be unable to avoid his killing strike, and she stared at him with shock and confusion. The little redhead called out to him, calling to Geomat, telling him to get a hold of himself. A bright light shone in a straight line as the MC swooped in with a killing chop, his eyes still glazed over with the intent to kill. However, the little assassin had not given up, and she clutched her chest as she cried out to him and called his name. Suddenly, in the other universe, Mr. Kim blinked as he noticed that something was off. The fish that he intended to cut kept wiggling away and making a weird noise. The fish was surprisingly quick, and he had never seen such a fish before. It was noisy, and this sort of irritated the fish cutter, who wanted to quickly fillet the fish. However, it felt like the fish was speaking, and the chef wondered if that was an illusion. The more he listened, the creepier it became as he realized that the fish was saying a name. The wiggling fish was calling out to Geomat, and it cried out over and over again. Then, the fish cutter saw his reflection in the blade of the knife that he held. Yes, that was him, and the more that Red called out his name, the more his consciousness returned. Soon, the chef's outfit became a school uniform, and then the MC realized with horror that his opponent was not at all a fish. It was Red, calling out to him and crying for him to pull himself together. The gloomy protagonist instantly recognized the adorable but kinda creepy Chloe. She called out to him again and his sword hit the ground. The unfortunately gifted genius had tossed his weapon at the last minute, and it was charged with so much energy that it embedded itself in the wall. However, he was back, and the little assassin opened her eyes shakily to see him. Her eyes widened with tears leaking, and she found Jeon-ma sweating but smiling down at her. The little shy girl was surprised, and the smooth MC agreed that it was best that they stop there for the day. Red blushed as she stared at him and asked if he was alright. The smooth and polite genius just waved and thanked her for helping with the practice. He was going to head out first and give her time to collect herself after that traumatic experience. Red watched our guy walk away. It was evening time at the school and the swordsmanship training lesson had ended. Red strolled her way down the street as she recalled that ever since the class assignment test, her crush's skill was not just raw strength but it also carried an eerie feeling. It was not just skill but a raw red and deadly instinct. Even though the blessing unconsciously manifested, the assassin was still no match for her crush. It was impressive that the MC had managed that with a half-hearted training sword. Red knew that her gifted classmate was strong but that was on another level, and she was so lost in thought that she did not notice the guy creeping around in the shadows. The shadow dude pointed out that she seemed to be enjoying it. The little assassin was immediately on high alert, and she found someone dressed in ninja garb with red hair just like hers. The shadow ninja called her by name, and he was Nox's auditor, a second year in the round class. Red was shocked to see her big brother just skulking around in the shadows like he had nothing better to do. Her brother adjusted his mask and asked if this was all she was doing after entering the academy, mingling with lowly people. Red was confused for a moment, and then she told her shadow brother not to refer to her crush with such an awful term. However, now the shadow ninja had marked her crush's name, and he added that if she kept trying to associate with our guy, then the assassin family would surely eliminate him. The redhead said nothing and simply bowed her head in thought. Then, she said that even if the entire auditor came, then they would not be able to handle her man. Then she walked away, leaving her brother in the shadows whence he came. Her brother thought about her words and repeated Jeon-ma's name like he was also developing a crush. Meanwhile, Jeon-ma needed to clarify something and something had gone weird. The power that he had been given was not a divine blessing or a favor, rather, it felt more like a curse. To avoid relying on the blessing of the sword god, he had set out to find new equipment. However, the power that had overtaken him like demonic sinking sand seemed to mock his efforts, following him and taking control of his body. There had been no pain, but worse than that, not only was there no pain, but there had been pure pleasure and a feeling of debilitation that went on endlessly. During that time, the curse had manipulated the lazy and talented hero like a marionette bound by threads, and it had whispered sweet words in his ears like a poisonous lover. The system had told him to cut more, to cut deeper, and to even destroy more. The gloomy protagonist had ended up falling for those sweet words, and he completely surrendered his virgin body to the touch of that vicious ability that used him like a tool. However, the assassin's scream had cried out to him, mixed with her desperation. Then, our guy had been able to see the desperate and terrified girl as she had screamed out the name that he had come to recognize as his own. Jeon-ma, the background character with a new overwhelming malicious ability. In that cry, the fragments of the world were brought together and the gloomy protagonist was sharply pulled back to consciousness. So, he had thrown away the training sword that had clung to him like a parasite infesting his own skin. The genius had realized that if he had not detached that sword at that moment, then he would have lost himself forever. Until recently, the redhead had been nothing but a yander who just wanted to kill him. However, at that moment, Chloe had become the girl who had revived his fading conciseness. Then again, our guy did recall that he had been the one to originally break the sword and cause the whole issue in the first place. He was kind of irritated but mostly grateful. So, he had decided to let it go without anything much. Besides, the girl already looked terrified. Jeon-ma had ended up leaving in quite a hurry to avoid the possibility of the sword god's blessing manifesting again. The lazy protagonist wondered if he could really avoid this kind of problem for the rest of his life. The sword was God's blessing, a talent that weighed so heavy that it felt like a curse. The talent was manifested by trading one's lifespan, and it was a talent that he had to bear, as an alien who had been cast into a magical world. The gloomy protagonist sure had a lot of burdens to bear, and he did not wish for much in this new world. However, he only painfully wanted to live a normal life. Lightning struck in the sky, and as our guy thought, he could handle minor incidents as they came. Defeated, he trudged to his room, and he thought gloomily as he had only now realized that there was something inside of his body, something malicious that was trying to consume his reason. The gift that the MC had been given was in no way any form of blessing. It was definitely a curse solely intended to devour him, and it was a sickening and twisted art of the reverse heavens. 3 days after our guy got the very shocking revelation about his cursed powers, all the students are gathered in class as usual, and they are all prepared to take their lessons. Red is seated with her friends who inform her that something wild happened the other day, and that she should totally check it. The assassin smiles pleasantly and assures her friend that she will definitely look it up. However, she then falls silent and glances to the side, noting that her crush is not in class and he is not seated where he usually stays. Now that the redhead thinks about it, she realized that he did not even have the contact information for the gloomy protagonist. She now feels silly for never asking earlier. She had even gone to visit him at his dorm, but the only thing that had responded to her knocks were pained groans. It was rather eerie and foreboding, and the little assassin was rather worried. She had been worried that the lazy genius would hate her if she broke the door down, so she simply walked away. Now that he was no longer around, the redhead thought wistfully of how she had enjoyed watching her crush from afar. She would always find our guy lost in thought with his chin resting on his hand. Red could not even count how many times that she had secretly glanced at him in a single day. She had been careful not to talk to him, afraid that he would find her an annoying girl. At first, she had thought that she was drawn to him because he had risked his life for her. However, as time went on, the little assassin realized that could be an excuse. In truth, she really missed the MC. The next day arrived at the academy as usual, and the wolf teacher called for silence when he strode into class. The wolf teacher told everyone to be quiet and loudly yelled, asking them if they had come to a prestigious school just for show. He also yelled that since there was rain that day, they would have a study hall instead of the usual physical training. However, the wolf teacher had noticed that Kang Jioma was missing from class, and he had been missing for 3 days. Knowing the lazy genius, the teacher was sure that our guy had a reason for it. So, the teacher would trust in him and patiently wait for him like a true educator would. The teacher screamed at the other students to start studying, and they hastily complied. Suddenly, they heard the sound of the door closing shut, and the wolf teacher turned to the door with rage, asking who would dare to come to his class late. However, the wolf teacher paused in surprise to see none other than a dark shadowy figure striding down the stairs. His foot hit the stairs with each step he took, and his baggy eyes looked even more raggedy than before. It was the MC, and he looked like he had aged 5 centuries with a strand of white hair on his head. Red leapt to her feet when she saw him and even called out his name like she was the female protagonist. However, Jioma just opened his mouth and croaked out in a very deep and gravelly voice that he apologized for his lateness. The teacher was a little alarmed and told our guy that he had no reason to apologize and just asked the gloomy protagonist to just sit down. Bro looked like a walking shadow, and all the students immediately started gossiping about him. They knew that he was a special admission student, and they wondered if he had always looked that raggedy. Now that they mentioned it, some of the other students agreed that their usually average classmate did look a tad bit more handsome than before. The classroom was abuzz with whispers and gossip, and the gloomy protagonist just took his seat like he could hear none of it. After class, the students filed out, all of them eager to eat since they were starving. Red called out to Jioma with hesitation in her voice since he looked rather weird and his waist was newly snatched. However, he answered her and called her by name, so she asked what had happened. The gloomy genius replied that it was nothing much, but she pointed out that he had not been in school for a while, so he was really worried that something might have happened to him. Red asked if our guy's new attitude had anything to do with their crazy duel the last time they had interacted. Jioma fell silent, but then he turned to her with a smile on his face as he explained that he had just fallen a little sick. He thanked her for worrying about him since he was fine now. The red had blushed since the MC was out here acting like he had not just gone through a revenge body transformation. The shy girl admitted that it was a relief and she averted her gaze. As the ML protagonist expected, it was a little difficult for her to believe his lie. For the past 3 days, Jioma had in fact been fighting his demons, and he had gone through something similar to extreme withdrawal symptoms until he was mentally exhausted. The gloomy tortured main character could not get out of his room and eat anything as he buried his emaciated body in bed whilst praying for his cursed convulsions to go away. The MC had suffered through pain far worse than anything he had ever faced before. It was a price that he had to pay for holding and using that broken weapon. And that was not the only thing that had happened. When our guy glanced at the mirror, it looked like his appearance was the same. That was a lie from the pits, as his expression was far more sunken and even some of his hair started turning white. It could not be more clear that this situation he was in was a penalty from the cursed god that had given him a cursed gift that he wanted nothing to do with. Jioma thought about how Red felt guilty because of what happened, and it kind of was her fault. Well, considering that she had last seen the gloomy protagonist at the training grounds, it made sense that she was worried. So, our guy had to let go of his grudge. He brought up the fact that she had once invited him to dinner, so he was going to take her offer today. At first, the redhead was confused, then her brain caught up and she gasped in shock and wonder, asking if the MC truly meant it. She was going to get to take her crush to dinner. He said that he would like to eat her cooking though, since he was not eager to touch a knife again, and Redhead leapt at the chance with joy. The little assassin was so excited and she promised to do her best. Jioma could not help the smile that came to his face, and he was happy that Redhead liked his suggestion. The shy girl happily promised to make everything that he wanted to eat. She happily asked him what he would like, and the MO protagonist said that he would like to eat fish since it had been a while. The last time he had eaten in her room, he had thrown everything up. Then our guy had to pause and deflect because he had almost confessed to something dangerous. Instead, he said that fish was too expensive for him to try. Then, the sharp genius detected something weird and murderous aiming for his neck. He whipped around and eyed a suspicious-looking bush as Red continued to gush and squeal. The black-haired MC wondered what he had just detected, and then he whipped around with his hair like an Oreo biscuit. Oreo biscuit turned and Red turned as well with a smile, wondering if something was the matter. Then, they both noticed the red assassin standing by the doorway. The red assassin had a wicked glint in his eyes and he reeked of killing intent. The little assassin was horrified to see her brother in her class, and our guy noticed. He asked her if she knew the weird red ninja, but she did not immediately respond, so he raised his eyes to study the new red in town. The MC marched forward to where the red ninja leaned casually, and they both made dangerous, challenging eye contact like two wild animals in a forest. He had finally gotten to him, and he told the red clown that if he had something to say, then he should say it instead of staring like a creepy stalker. The creepy stalker stare got even more intense from Red the brother, and our guy wondered what was up with the assassin's eyes. Suddenly, Red spoke up and she had a lot to say, telling him not to concern himself with the creepy jerk. Then, she yelled at Nox, who was her appa, saying that she had told him not to come. Then the gloomy hero was able to connect the dots in the red hair, but the creepiness helped too. The little sister asked why her brother had come, and he noted that Red suddenly sounded snappy but with some hesitation. Actually, her voice was outright shaking. Nox then said that our guy did not look like much and that his sister had really thought that a pathetic-looking twin like that was worth breaking the auditor's rules. His sister yelled back at him that she had nothing to do with them anymore, and maybe she would not break the rules if the rules did not suck. Her brother glared down and said that he could not wash the blood from her hands, and that one was an auditor from the day they were born till the day that they died. Meanwhile, the gloomy protagonist watched the whole thing go down, noticing that the little sister was speaking like a rebel while the big brother was speaking like he was in a historical drama. They were both rather embarrassing and he wished that they would tone it down. However, the creepy brother was very to it and he told his sister to get rid of the MC and to return to being a proper auditor. However, his little sister bit her lip and then she yelled that her brother should not describe her adorable crush like that. Our guy did not even want to be part of this conversation and now everyone was alarmed since she had screamed. The gloomy lazy protagonist really wondered why they could not do this in moderation, and everyone went out to eat so this silly squabble was going to turn into a mess. He was used to this nonsense by now, but he suddenly gave pause when he finally figured out what family they were from. Now, he got it, as he just remembered that they specialized in infiltration and assassination, and they were a group of shadows that appeared in the middle of the game. It was said that the auditor group was weaker compared to other heroic houses, but our guy knew for a fact that they were unrivaled in assassination. All members of the auditor clan were ridiculously strong thanks to their abusive training regiment that they forced all their children through. They molded kids into cutting-edge assassination tools before they had even truly grown up. Chloe was from that kind of family, and if that was the case then the MC had to admit that the creepy brother's hardened expression was much more normal and expected than Red's happy face. Her brother's expression was one that showed no hesitation when it came to killing. It was an expression that was used to killing. The MC was sure that the auditor family were probably chasing and vanquishing their enemies in order to maintain order, and it was not like he was against killing when necessary, and he thought it was justified if anything. However, now that he looked at Red's trembling form, the gloomy protagonist was starting to think otherwise. Chloe was shaking so much that she bit her lips until they bled, and he realized that she might have wanted to live a normal life. However, just like the MC's blessing of the sword god, the environment of the auditors was one that Chloe had been in since birth and it would not ever allow her to change. Red was destined to live a life of emotionless murder. However, it was so clear that he wanted anything but that, and it was very unfortunate. Our guy was no hero, and he had no intention of ever becoming something like that. While all of that was true, he could not stop laughing at himself. The lazy protagonist could not save the world, but he could try to save a life, so he stepped forward and offered to talk to the creepy brother. He had to admit it, the power that he carried was 100% a curse, but it would not let him taste defeat. So, he asked the assassin boy his name, acknowledging that he was called Nox. In the end, the Oreo biscuit had tried to escape the sword god's blessing, but he could not. In cartoons, they always say that there is no paradise in running away, and they are right. If he cannot run away regardless, then he will take a step forward, and he would declare himself as Kang Jeong-ma, someone whose name consisted of a sword and a demon. Grinning demonically, the gloomy protagonist asked the red assassin boy to follow him, saying that he would cut Red's brother. He was someone who fought with a knife. Meanwhile, the wolf teacher was just chilling in the faculty room. But he was deep in thought, noting that something must have happened to Jeong-ma, since our guy's expression had been void of any emotion. Suddenly, someone threw open the door and called the teacher Seonbi. The person asked the teacher if something had happened since it looked like the wolf teacher was going bald. The teacher glared and said they must not talk about his baldness. The other person laughed and apologized. Suddenly, the phone rang so the wolf teacher picked it up, saying that he was Lee Wonbin, the lead instructor of the wolf class. Meanwhile, his colleague watched him, thinking that the wolf tot was bald from the start and was wearing that weird thing around, which they found kind of cute. Meanwhile, the wolf teacher asked what had just happened, and was shocked that someone had suddenly called for the subspace. The teacher asked which cadet had requested it and who was the opponent. The cadet who had requested it was Kang Jeong-ma, and his opponent was none other than Nock's auditor. The teacher was stupefied. A light shone from an ajar door, and it led to the subspace arena. The time of usage was currently set at 0 because it was not in use yet. However, it had been booked by Jeong-ma. In 15 minutes, the battle inside the subspace area would begin. Our guy took a moment to think, as he had thought that the process for booking the subspace room would be a lot more convoluted. Surprisingly, it had gone very swiftly. The academy director had even told the Oreo biscuit that if he had to do this, then the least that he could do was to take care of himself. The gloomy hero reassured himself that this should be fine, since it was not like they would be fighting in reality, and there would not be any physical injuries, but there was still the possibility of suffering mental injuries. However, none of that would matter as long as the MC won. He could hear all the noise from the waiting room, and he got that watching a fight was exciting. But he had not expected such a large buzz from the viewers. The situation was hilariously ironic, since the lazy Jeong-ma had been trying his best not to stick out not long ago. Yet here he was, and now all of his attempts felt pointless. Shaking even more than him was Red, who was very alarmed by the situation. Our observant guy was shocked to see her crying, as he had already lost the battle. The cute assassin called out his name, and he realized that she was probably blaming herself. He tried to reassure her, saying that it was not her fault, so she did not need to worry. Red had even been so sweet as to lend the MC her gear, and everything would turn out okay. Still, the girl sobbed a little. They fell silent for a moment, just sitting in the room. Then, little Red spoke up, saying that her brother was really strong, so she was worried about him. However, the gloomy protagonist just smirked all pompously and pointed out that he was strong too. However, the assassin was not convinced and added that her brother was a genius with unmatched talent in the entire history of their assassin family. When it came to the dark arts, there was no one up to her nasty brother's level, and at the age of 14, he had been dubbed the pinnacle of dark arts. Jeong-ma was frightfully shocked at that very awful and lame title. He wondered who was in charge of creating those. This was how it had always been now that he thought about it. No matter how hard our lazy guy tried to avoid it, this was ultimately a choice that he had made. He gripped the rose knife as he recalled his mentor grinning and telling him that he was destined to wield a blade for his whole life. The mentor would have probably never expected that the MC would still be running around with a sashimi knife in his next incarnation. It was not time to proceed with the subspace duel, and the participating cadets were instructed to make their way to the grounds. The announcement rang out, and Red got even more nervous. The Oreo cookie stood up nonchalantly, and he said that he was off, so the assassin had to wish him farewell. She blushed nervously as he left, and then he called to her, much to her surprise. He said that the world was filled to the brim with all kinds of geniuses, and that was why he gripped his knife tighter when he said that he was going to win. The confident protagonist waved his hand and strolled out with a casual wave. There was a light in the middle of the dark, and as the MC grew closer, the light grew brighter. It grew brighter and brighter, and our guy stepped in to cover his eyes. He found himself outside with the big blue sky above him, in a coliseum that was packed with seats. The students cheered when they saw him, saying that they knew the special student would not run away, and they cursed and said that they believed in Jeong-ma. The students got anxious just waiting for this duel to happen. The MC suddenly had a lot of fans, and it made him feel like a gladiator from the Roman Empire. He had not thought that things would be this intense among the crowd. Then, he looked up and spotted something. He was horrified to see that the entire star class had come as well, and seated at the top row was the protagonist, surrounded by all the hot babes that he was supposed to bag. Of course, the waterfall hair girl was there too, and she watched Jeong-ma silently with a determined look on her face. The gloomy protagonist wondered if the star students really had nothing better to do that they had showed up to watch his match. Things were going to get awkward, and he sighed. However, he did not have time to sulk for long, since the red-headed bully pulled and yelled, asking if our guy was trying to mess with him. The angry assassin said that it seemed his opponent could not tell the difference between courage and arrogance, and his aura leaked with disgust as he asked the wolf student how he dared to come to battle with a pathetic excuse of a blade like that. The Oreo biscuit was a little mystified by the intensity of the assassin's hatred, and he noted that the crazy jerk had a supreme killing intent. However, he confidently played it cool and said that a true master would never blame their equipment. This of course made his red opponent curse at him, but the angry red had quickly regained his cool inside. The assassin then said that he should deal that insolent tongue on the MC first, and the angry red had unsheathed his wicked blade as his murderous intent only grew. Our sharp guy smirked because he could tell that Red the brother was way too reliant on his equipment. However, he did note that his opponent carried the S-rank blade called the Hongrian Blades, and he carried 2 of them no less. On top of that, Mr. Pinnacle of the Dark Art had one of the best auras in the game, which was the Blessing of the Crow. Jeong-ma could feel how difficult it was just for his opponent to suppress his killing intent. With S-rank equipment as well, it might sound ridiculous, but he had also prepared himself to deal with the redhead. In our guy's hand was the Daiso Sashimi Feet Rose blade from Chloe, and it was of an unknown rank. The two fighters stood facing each other as the wind blew and the air was tense with their individual aura. The battle would start now, and the subspace barrier began to form as the two warriors locked eyes filled with malice. The subspace barrier was deployed and everyone watched, from the girls to the flashy protagonist. Then the announcement said that may the hero's blessing be with them. But the two opponents had already sailed from their standing positions and flew to attack each other before the barrier had even fully formed. The MC's painless blessing was immediately activated, and the sword god's blessing was also activated, along with the prayer that the blessing of the gods would descend upon them. Then the two fighters were gone. The students whispered amongst themselves after the subspace descended, asking if they had all seen the same thing. Some of the students complained that they could not see anything and that it was way too fast. Some of the students questioned if Jianma was really in the wolf class, and they had expected it to be an easy match. However, for the longest time, all some students could see was darkness. As for the students that could see, they saw flashes of lights of pink and blue as the two sliced at each other with their special powers, bobbing and weaving and dancing at the speed of light. The redhead had not gotten any less angry, and the wolf student was starting by playing defense. A blonde girl from the star class was intrigued by how fast they were moving, and she thought things were getting interesting. Waterfall Hair watched the fight with an intense look on her face, and she was surprised that the weakling that she had met the other day was a very good fighter. Our guy was doing great, holding his own against the dangerous assassin dude. The genius had to stay on top of his game, of course, because the other guy had every intention of killing him, even if it was just while they were in the subspace area. The MC slid around and blocked every violent attack. Redhead gripped his sword tighter and slashed with even more killing intent than before. The redhead kept slashing and slashing and slashing like a dark purple tornado of hate and violence, and he made so many marks on the floor as he fought. However, the wicked cool protagonist kept dodging, and it was frankly driving Mr. Pinnacle up the wall with rage. So, the red guy tried a different trick that he was sure the MC would not be able to avoid. The red guy used the three-legged crow and sliced with the murdering capacity of a monster with 7,000 grievances. Even Jianma was kind of thrown off by just how badly the red guy wanted to kill him. The slashes all came flying at our guy, and the red guy laughed, feeling very sure that his opponent was done for. However, the Oreo biscuit was not out of tricks yet, and he swished out of there, much to the absolute disgust and horror of the red guy. He could not believe that our guy dared to dodge and get out of the whole thing unscathed. The wolf student glanced back at the shocked red guy looking all cocky and all. One of the watching students said that he did not really see these kinds of things often, but he had to admit the sophomore's strength. Freshmen were always too busy running from these things, and another student agreed that sophomores were dominating, but they could not underestimate the freshmen's experience either. However, the waterfall girl knew that there was more than that, and only those who could clearly see what was happening would understand. All those aggressive attacks were coming from the sophomore, but the MC was able to dodge every single attack. He was not even trying to fight. The red guy got angrier and angrier as he recalled that his sister had said that Jianma was not a normal guy, and cursed. He had even used the blessing of the crow, thinking it would annihilate his opponent, but he had dodged it like it was nothing. The red guy was furious, noting that our smart guy had been too focused on speed. Seeing how skilled he was, the assassin had to be more cautious when fighting the Oreo biscuit. Mr. Pinnacle decided to aim a powerful strike that could slice through a wide area in one go. The more he saw the MC, the angrier he felt looking at his nonchalant gaze and watching him hold his lousy-ass kitchen knives. Then, Jianma suddenly dropped his weapon, and the red guy was alarmed. The assassin could not believe that the talented protagonist would drop his weapon in the middle of a duel. The red guy asked the wolf student exactly what he was scheming, but our talented guy just held out the rose blade that he had gotten from Chloe. The wolf student got serious and pointed the blade forward, his eyes going dark as he lowered his head. The air got tense when the suddenly serious main character pointed his blade right at the assassin, and the red guy was confused. The look in Jianma's eyes was lethal, and the red guy screamed internally, wondering if the genius was mocking him with that stance. But nobody like the gloomy protagonist had the nerve to act the way that he did. The red guy was furious and tightened his hold on his swords. The angry redhead made a pledge to cut down his opponent with a single killing strike. The red guy charged up with energy, and he asked the fool just what he could do before the blood-soaked hungry young blade. Suddenly, the genius leapt, intending to show the idiot assassin exactly what he could do. The red guy was speechless as his opponent flew forward in a straight arc of righteous precision. There was a bright glow of light, and his movement was so flawless that it was blinding. The MC had only wanted to live a comfortable life, and he had tried not to stand out. He had stuck to the rules as much as possible, so this all felt like a curse, and like something was chasing him and trying to take over his body. It was as if something deep inside the nonchalant protagonist was telling our guy to hold back. So, the MC gave his body up, and if he could not run away regardless of the sword god, then he would accept its blessing and its curse. The light shone even brighter as our guy dedicated to cutting his opponent so cleanly. The light was blinding when his opponent's sword arm fell away from his body, and the angry redhead could only stare in shock as his arm got detached. The assassin's eyes widened in shock as he was cut so fast and so clean that he had not seen the attack coming. Our guy had basically zoomed past at the speed of light. All the watching students were shocked, and even the protagonist was beyond intimidated. The wolf student had slid past like an anime character, and the world around the angry assassin had gone dark. Jianma would use anything, regardless of it was a blessing or a curse, and it was time to say goodbye to the peaceful future that he had always dreamed of, and the end was marked by the neat slicing of the arm of an angry red assassin. Jioma had neatly sliced off his opponent's arm, but that was not where it ended. Twirling around, the MC launched at the speed of light at the dark and evil energy that was the angry redhead. As the wolf student sliced and sliced and sliced, the redhead panicked and cursed. The redhead cursed as more of himself was lost to our guy's cutting-edge technique, and it became so graphic that things went dark, and the subspace barrier was immediately turned off. There was a burst of smoke from the center of the fighting ring. The students were silent and no victory cheers rang out from the sheer intensity of the gore that they all witnessed. The red-headed assassin collapsed to his feet in shaky defeat, and the MC very calmly sheathed his knife. The blue light from it still lightly glowed, and the students from the star class watched in awe and slight fear, as well as newfound respect. The MC had successfully sheathed his weapon and the smoke cleared. The subspace duel had come to an end, but the entire Colosseum was silent. Jioma nervously scratched the back of his neck as he wondered if he should have expected this kind of reaction. Well, there was no turning back now, and the Oreo cookie had done all this with a knife that was made for gutting fish. It was something that the gloomy man has always felt, but cutting a person was ridiculously unpleasant. The only consolation that the crazy genius had at this point was that both the Mao brothers and the Nox were in the subspace when they had fought. The specs of the subspace were pretty impressive, and thanks to that, the Oreo cookie had never actually killed a person. Though Nox seemed majorly traumatized and his body was covered in sweat. The angry red assassin had been just as strong as Red had described. The red guy had an incredible battle sense that had been honed through experience. However, anyone would sense him thanks to his intense killing intent, and it had been an ultimate blessing for the MC. The duel winner was the freshman from the wolf class, Kang Jioma. Instead of cheers, there were just gasps of disbelief and shock from the students who could not believe that a freshman had possibly taken down a sophomore. They were in such heavy denial that they almost sounded outraged. The gloomy protagonist cursed and thought that companies could learn a thing or two from such shameless publicity. Well, there was nothing that he could do about it at this point, and this was the path that he had chosen. Our guy was determined to endure the coming days using only sheer will and grit. He stalked away from the battle center. The school was still bubbling and buzzing with the news of the fight, and they found out that the angry redhead was from the auditor family. The students said that explained why he had been so strong, but they could not believe that even a strong guy like the angry red had gotten taken down by a special support student. Everyone was whispering the MC's name around the class like he was a forbidden spell. Waterfall Locks was also deep in the gossip, and she wondered about our guy, musing on his name. The beautiful swordsman was thinking about how the MC's name followed her everywhere she went, and he was the only person that everyone wanted to talk about. Yesterday, the fight had been quite shocking, to say the least, and she still recalled the time when the red assassin had lost his arm. It had shocked everyone, and the girl recalled how she could not believe what she had seen. At that moment, as her golden eyes widened in shock, she had seen the talented protagonist display such remarkable swordsmanship. Whilst using only 2 kitchen knives, Jioma had sliced and diced with such precision. The talented lady had prided herself on her knowledge of swords because she was the granddaughter of a sword master, but she had been hopelessly naive. To think that someone could be that strong with those kinds of blades was almost unbelievable. Suddenly, the girl paused when she realized something, and she said that on the other hand, she was still curious, and she had wondered who had defeated her. The talented swordswoman had wanted to know who they were so that she could crush them next time. Then, Blue Hair also recalled that she had called our guy weak to his face and how she was firm with the strong but merciful to the weak as their family motto dictated. Waterfall Hair also recalled how the year's top student was not in her class. All of her memories came flooding back, and the genius swordswoman was in shock as she realized that the lazy protagonist just might be the top student of her set. Based on what she had seen in the fight, she was sure of it, and she fumed that he was much stronger than she was. Now she wondered what was going through his head when they had that conversation, and Blue Hair was embarrassed thinking of all the shameless gloating that she had done. She yelled out, wondering what our guy had been thinking of her. The blondie of the class seemed to be zoning out, and she groggily asked what was going on. Waterfall Locks laughed nervously and said that it was nothing. But the blonde girl called Rachel smirked, and she asked Blue Hair if she was sure, since it was certainly something that bothered her. However, the talented swordwoman deflected and said that she had not been able to work out these days, so she felt a tad sluggish. The blonde girl smirked and asked Blue Hair what was up with the pouty face, immediately knowing the talented sword lady was trying to hide something. The girl asked what the blonde girl meant by that, but the blonde pushed and asked the blue-haired girl to tell her. She guessed that the snobby noble was just hungry, but the girl denied that assumption. Then, Blondie guessed that the brunette had left her equipment at home. But that was not it either. Then the blonde asked if it was the bathroom, and the noble girl yelled that she had already said that it was nothing. Then, the blonde called Rachel cute as she had finally figured it out through the process of elimination, as he guessed that little Miss Blue was having some boy troubles. The snobby noble was shocked and speechless. The brunette flushed in horror and the blonde grinned, with her lip twitching. Then, the blonde burst out with laughter and pointed as she guffawed at the noble lady. Rachel had thought that the noble lady Abel would never be one for romance. The blonde laughed so hard and loud at the poor noble that she blushed with shame, and she yelled that it was not what the clown thought that it was. The laughing hyena was skeptical and then asked the blushing sword lady what the issue was. Rachel wanted to know the man who hit the jackpot, and the brunette went silent. However, the blonde was not about to let it go, and she pushed, wanting to know who had stolen the heart of the normally stoic lady. Since she was not getting a response, the blonde started playing a guessing game. She sharply guessed that it could be Leon, the glowing and perfect protagonist, since he had such a handsome face. However, the brunette looked so disgusted by such a suggestion that the laughing hyena had to rule it out. The blonde thought it was strange that the waterfall hair girl was still apprehensive regarding Leon, and then the hyena guessed that it was surely the special student from yesterday. It was just a guess, but the jolt that she got from blue hair was all the confirmation that she needed. The hyena grinned like a laughing clown and hearts fixed into her eyes at this news that was worth more than gold. She was going to have so much fun with this. So, the blonde grabbed the waterfall hair girl and told her that it was time for them to go. The brunette was shocked, but the blonde was already on her way and racing off. The noble lady asked where they were going since the other girl was dragging her along, and the hyena laughed at her question, because obviously they were skipping away like characters in a romance novel to go to the wolf class. Meanwhile, at the wolf class, the blonde girl happily waved and said hello to all the wolf students in class. She asked them to excuse them for a moment as she dragged behind her the blushing noble. The wolf class was abuzz with shock to see the popular students in their class, and they could only gape in adoration. The noble felt nervous, but the hyena strode through like she was on a red carpet. Then, she got it, and the blonde hopped onto a table, and she beamed, declaring that they were looking for a fellow with black hair. Of course, she meant our guy. There were hearts in hyena's eyes as she searched like a predator, looking for the new joke of the day as she searched for anyone with black hair, since the MC was the only one with that hair color. Then, a busybody student came over and said that their high status did not permit the blonde to climb on their desks and make a ruckus. Rachel was not even slightly threatened by the dude, and she just flashed her good looks his way, using her pretty privilege to knock him flat like a bowling pin. The student was overwhelmed by her beauty, and the noble was horrified by the blonde shamelessly abusing her privilege. However, the blonde made the most horrifying face of success when she finally located our guy. He was dozing in his seat with the familiar redhead buzzing and gushing around him. Hyena immediately clocked the female assassin as Jeon Ma's girlfriend. Well, it was not like that mattered to the blonde, and she thought it was better this way since it made things even juicier. This was going to be fun, and love blossomed in her eyes. Red was busy gushing over the lazy protagonist as usual, but then she froze when she felt a weird killing intent coming their way. The blonde had suddenly appeared by their side, and she blew a kiss to Jeon Ma's sleeping head. The audacity of that man snatching the clown. She was so daring that her kiss made Red temporarily lose all color. Waterfall Locks was also rebooting, and Red looked like she'd just been transported to the depths of hell. Then, the hyena pretended like she had made a small mistake, and our guy groggily raised his head in confusion to find himself surrounded by baddies. The hyena smirked all cute and stuff, using her pretty privilege to the max as she asked Jeon Ma if she had woken him up. The MC was confused, and she just jumped right in and asked him to confirm his name. Before our sleepy guy could even respond, the flirty clown said that he had not known who the black-haired genius was before the incident at the subspace the other day. The sleepy protagonist was just trying to figure out why Rachel of all people was in his class. The girl in question went on, and she said out loud that the Oreo cookie was quite the looker up close. Meanwhile, the MC's intuition was screaming at him that the situation he was in was dangerous. Then someone said hello, and asked if they could ask what the heck Blondie was supposed to be. It was Red, and the inner jealousy inside her had activated. Red asked the blonde hyena just what exactly she thought she was doing when she put her hands all over our guy. The yandere girl was not happy at all, and her pupils had shrunk with the white of her eyes blown wide. The confused love clown was slightly amused by the situation, and the MC realized that things were getting out of hand, and that this was exactly what his danger instincts had been warning him about. The redhead's personality had completely flipped to the point that she could not recognize Blondie as human anymore, and she somehow had her box cutter ready to go. If a knife fight broke out in class, things would get very troublesome for the lazy protagonist, so he had to put a stop to this. It was a combination that he had never seen in the game before, and he could not fathom why Rachel had even come to their class. The reason for the season finally spoke up, and the waterfall hair girl told Blondie to stop acting up in a place that was not their classroom. The blonde clown refused to budge and instead smirked as she asked the snobby noble why she would not even say hello. The hyena was truly enjoying the situation, and she grinned, hopping down from her seat on the table. She spoke to Red directly. The blonde clown ruffled the little assassin's hair and told her not to interrupt when adults were talking. The clown went on to say that it was not safe to play with sharp objects either, and of course, her patronizing actions further aggravated Chloe, who slipped more and more into insanity, and her knife hand started twitching. While Blondie had her head turned, the assassin got ready to strike, and she actually aimed a killing strike right at the hyena's back, much to the shock of our guy and Waterfall Locks. However, even with the clown turned, she whipped around lightning fast, and there was a large splash of red. The large splash was a student who complained that his classmate had spilt all the juice because he did not open it properly. The classmate whined that if he did not open the juice like that, then his senior would not even glance his way. The other student yelled at his classmate and told him to be quiet. Meanwhile, a struggle happened in the background, and Red had her hand caught by the cocky blonde who had managed to knock the knife from her hand. The hyena teased Red for being slow and said that she had thought that the little shy girl was just a short kid, but the clown had no idea that Red also had a short fuse. No matter how Red tried, she could not pull her hand away, and Ms. Waterfall yelled out to Blondie, telling her to stop fooling around with the weaker students. Blondie looked bored by now, and then she threw the redhead backwards, sending her flying into the classroom much to her alarm. Chloe found herself soaring through the air, but she tumbled in the air and easily landed on her feet with a look of rage in her eyes. All the guys in the wolf class cheered suddenly like this was some kind of girl versus girl match, but the lazy protagonist was already quite tired of it, and frankly, it was driving him insane. The clan of the Spear Saint, that's where the blonde clown was from. Skills were often useless in the face of the clan's overwhelming strength, and that was the motto of a clan that valued brute force over all else. The high-class blonde student was the niece of the Spear Saint, and her name was Rachel de Muira. She grinned with her pink heart and asked the MC if Red was his girlfriend. Our guy immediately denied the poor assassin girl, and it was so cold that she trembled with hurt and killing intent in her little corner. Still, that would not change the truth. So, Guillaume spoke up and said that the redhead was his friend, and Blondie thought about it for a hot second. Then, the MC wondered what the heck was this weird situation that he had found himself in. Now that he was taking the time to look around, the protagonist narrator noticed that Abel was there too, and he had not even noticed her at first because he had been so frazzled. The perceptive protagonist got tense and asked why the two high-class students had come looking for him, as he expected big-time trouble. The hyena girl smirked and she said that it seemed like Waterfall Locks was interested in our guy, and she wanted to see his face. Abel was horrified to get thrown under the bus like that, and she squealed and protested, demanding when she had ever said something so embarrassing. However, the blonde clown insisted that was why they had come, and Blue Hair was mortified, saying that her classmate had practically dragged her there. Blondie explained that they had come over because she had thought that Waterfall Locks really wanted to see the handsome main character's face, especially since the noble had not protested and had followed. The noble was speechless at that point, and then they noticed that the other members of the wolf class had started whispering, wondering if the guys were fighting, and pointing out how they had heard the noble swordswoman yell for the first time. The noble suddenly started acting all snobby and stuck her nose into the air as she said that they had a misunderstanding, and that they had totally come to see our dude per se. Oreo Cookie Your Hair did not care and wished they would just leave. The Oreo Biscuit sighed and said that if they had nothing to do, then they could go since he was sleepy anyway. The brunette was crushed to be dismissed, and the hyena girl could barely hold back her laughter. The clown thought that the gloomy protagonist was really interesting, and she liked interesting guys. However, the exhausted protagonist said that he was happy to hear that since he was far from interesting. The blonde grinned and told him not to be like that, and then thought of a suggestion. She invited the MC over to their dorm after class and said they could watch some movies and chill together. That ambitious little brat was looking to start something, and Red yelled for her to get away from her man immediately. The hyena was confused since as far as she knew, our guy did not belong to anyone. The clown laughed out loud in a huge guffaw, mocking the poor redhead. The tired protagonist could only think of how much he missed his mom and the peace that she brought him. The blondie was still hooting and hollering, and she asked the noble lady if she had heard those embarrassing words as well. However, the clown had to stop her laughing when she found that Waterfall Locks was seething too. It was too bad that the hyena girl had to end her fun, but it had been pretty cool meeting the only black-haired kid in school, and she said that she would see him later. The MC just told them to please not come back, and the clown laughed that he was cold. The blonde bimbo gushed and waved goodbye to Guillaume while Red fumed, but Oreo Cookie Hair just ignored them and wished they would go far away from him. The Oreo cookies still felt so sleepy, and he lowered his head, with the little assassin turning to him in concern. However, while our guy dozed, the brunette had turned slightly, and she watched him from afar like a stalker. Even as she was to leave, the noble still thought of the sleepy protagonist like she was planning to keep him in her heart forever. However, the noble swordswoman hesitated as she had no idea what to say, so she turned and left. She ended up leaving the class behind and returned to her fancy class where she belonged, leaving the members of the wolf class behind. Back in the halls, as Blondie and Waterfall Locks walked back to class, the clown smiled to herself as she thought that it was one thing to have a cold attitude, but from those hollow black eyes, the clown knew that there was something faintly there, something about our guy and the strand of white hair on his head that looked like a gleaming knife, as well as his sharp gaze that was so unsettling that it felt like her throat was cut. The sleepy protagonist had gone far beyond the blonde's expectations, and she grinned foxily as she recalled the chills that she had gotten. The hidden talent in wolf class was definitely a step above the all-style no-substance students that Blonde had seen since the school started. She had only gone to the wolf class to tease, expecting the MC to be another of those jokers, but the clown might have gotten an unexpected gain. Blondie's clan was the type to pull no stops when it came to getting betrothed to only the most outstanding warriors, so in a way, our guy might just be a precious resource, and she licked her lips like a predator just thinking about it. Yes, the hyena thought that it was only natural that he caught the eye of Abel, the invincible empress of swordsmanship, and the blonde smirked at that. Little Miss Steel Yeoman suddenly whipped around to apologize to the brunette. However, the noble lady just groaned and said that the clown should first apologize to the students of the tiger class for causing all that ruckus. However, Blondie said that she was not apologizing for that. The noble's eyes then widened in confusion, and the hyena explained that she was apologizing about Kang Jeong-ma. Blondie crossed her arms with a smug-ass expression on her face as she said that he was not going to yield. Waterfall Locks looked for a moment like she could not comprehend what the blonde clown was saying. Meanwhile, in a hospital room, wheels were rolling down the halls and someone with dripping black murderous energy was obsessed with killing a dude. It was of course the red assassin guy, and he chanted that he wanted to kill Jeong-ma like it was his get well mantra. The redhead assassin dude was running through the halls like a psychopath, dragging his drip with him as he chanted his crazy mantra. His body, which had lived its entire life without knowing defeat, now had only one goal in life. The red guy was sure that he had the body of the auditor genius, and he wondered if he should charge into our guy's room at night. And since it was already night, he might as well take the opportunity and turn his enemy into a body bag that same night. All the red guy could think of was the cold genius' deadly stare, and a sweat began to form on his brow. The red guy refused to be scared, and he shoved aside a student as he ran down the halls. The redhead was determined to mobilize the entirety of the auditor household, and with the power of the clan, then they could cut off his enemy's head. The red guy marched through the halls with a newfound determination, and he planned that he would first kill the talented protagonist and then get his little sister back like a good big brother. To the red guy, his sister's potential was similar to his, if not greater. Now was the time to strike, and the murderous assassin paused by a door. With the power of the House of Order and the pinnacle of his techniques of nightfall, Knox was sure that he would definitely show our guy what for. So, he opened the door. Knox nearly evaporated from fear when he did open the door because he found Jeong munching at an apple in the red assassin's hospital room. The MC looked as deadly as a knife, and he greeted the assassin respectfully, acknowledging that his Hyung had arrived. The poor red assassin was speechless. Red bit her fingernail as she stood in hatred and rage, gnawing at it like she had not seen food in months. The Oreo cookie sort of noticed her from afar, and he also noted that she seemed upset, though she was the one who nearly started a knife fight in the middle of the class. Meanwhile, the redhead was actually muttering to herself about how our guy liked them big and how she needed to kill her competition before they successfully snatched her man. Suddenly, someone called to the little yandere, and she raised her head surprised. It was the MC, and Red switched up instantly as she became all sweetness and love, asking Jeong-ma if he needed anything. It kind of creeped the hesitant protagonist out, and he would ask after she put down the intimidating box cutter. Then, the black-haired protagonist nervously asked how her brother was doing, since he had knocked him around a bit hard the other day. The little assassin was surprised by his question, and she fell silent for a hot minute. Then, Red explained that her big brother was in the academy's medical ward, and Jeong-ma was surprised. The medical ward was surprising since our guy knew that people did not usually get injured in the subspace area. The little sister admitted that she had not really visited, so she did not know much. However, she had heard that he was admitted to the ward despite having no injuries. She went on to assure Jeong-ma that it was fine and that he had no reason to worry. While it was true that our guy had sliced up the red guy, he did not think that the talented assassin would be so weak to the point of getting traumatized. The talented genius then worried that Red's evil brother might be thinking of doing something else. So, the MC called to Chloe, and then he asked if his sweet yandere could tell him where her brother's room was. The studious protagonist had not slacked on his how to handle yandere types manual, so he knew that he needed to give her a good pat on the head. So, Jeong-ma got the information that he needed, and now the sneaky genius was face to face with the horrified red assassin guy. Looking as dangerous as a weapon, the Oreo cookie lifted the apple and asked if he could eat it. The black-haired hero was already eating it though, so it was not like the red guy could stop him. The sweating assassin was still frozen at the door, while the relaxed protagonist noted that it seemed like the auditor clan was really loaded with cash. The special student marveled at the vast room for just one person, and he noted that assassin money was no joke. The red assassin was still tense, and he asked our guy how he had even gotten inside. But then the wicked protagonist suddenly reached for a knife, and the assassin was both horrified and alarmed. The assassin feared for a moment that the MC had come to finish what he had started, and the menacing protagonist did raise the knife so it glinted in the moonlight, and the red guy got even more alarmed. However, the careful protagonist just sliced the peel from the apple to help with the eating, and the assassin kept sweating. The peel was cut so cleanly that the red guy was slightly impressed and wondered how and why the MC was cutting the shaving so well. Then, the talented genius set down the perfectly cut apple, and he explained that if the red guy could not digest regular food, then he should eat some food. Our guy stood and walked out, leaving Red's brother shocked and baffled. The masked assassin swore in hatred that his enemy dared to pity his broken body, and he slid a sword from his sleeve, saying that if it was right now, then he could definitely take down the MC. Suddenly, the smart protagonist stopped and added that if the red guy ever dared to have thoughts of taking revenge, then something would happen, and the red assassin peeked his head out as he watched Jeong-ma leave. The dangerous protagonist turned, his eyes glinting with the sharpness of a knife, and he warned that he would chew up the entire auditor family, and the red guy was both shocked and intimidated to hear those alarming words. The super cool protagonist then slammed the door loudly behind him as he made his exit, and the apple that he had been messing around with suddenly showed slice lines. Neatly, each piece fell apart like a threatening, delicious apple flower, and the red guy fell on his ass, shaking in terror. The dangerous, powerful main character had made himself clear without speaking too much, and he now casually strolled underneath the evening sky. Now, the super cool virgin was sure that his red opponent was nothing more than a little candle that could be blown out at any moment. It seemed like the red assassin's will had been thoroughly destroyed, and the smug protagonist was feeling particularly proud about that. Thanks to that, his bravado-filled intimidation had worked well. Meanwhile, he also silently acknowledged that the auditors were an incredible assassin group in this world. There was no way that our one-man army could ever take on the entire clan, and he'd just been bluffing his way through the entire meeting just to neutralize the changes of the red guy becoming a pain in his behind. Although the MC figured that he could at least take out 10 people in 30 seconds, that was the worst-case scenario. Then, the dreamy protagonist took a pause to stare at the beautiful moon. He continued his stroll, noting that he felt like he was standing in the eye of a peculiar storm in a way, and he was starting to get used to all of the weird encounters with the heroines of the story. The lazy protagonist sighed as he considered that he might have also gone insane from everything that had happened so far. As long as the red Nox guy did not stir up any trouble, the MC figured that he would no longer need to worry about him. However, the busy student still had another problem to deal with, and that was the girl that he wanted to avoid the most. The girl with the pink heart eyes and flowing blonde hair, Rachel. In the original game, the blonde had approached the main character first, which worked well for the lazy introvert as he did not want to get involved with her. However, the blonde clown had some issues with the main girl, Abel. The exhausted main character sighed deeply and figured that he could just think over things slowly because he really needed to prepare for the really important journey, the upcoming midterms. He was going to take this seriously, and a reward was a reward. The reward was the Murasama, and the talented genius needed a weapon that would let him fight for more than just 30 seconds. He looked through the calendar that marked when the midterms would begin, and he knew that the test was to subdue a demonic monster in groups of 5, regardless of class. There was a reason the school emphasized teamwork work, and this was because individual work was important. But having faith in comrades was more important on the battlefield. Although this was an annoying setup test, it was fine as long as our guy could find the right teammates. The lazy Jeonma was on level 1, but as long as he got carried by higher-ranked individuals, he'd be fine. Also, the demonic monster featured in the test was the D-ranked demonic monster, the Merman. It looked super ugly, the ugliest, creepiest mer creature alive, and the MC was going to have to see it face to face. He was not looking forward to that. Even though the withdrawn protagonist had worked hard with fish all of his life, there was a limit, and he thought that he was surely going to barf at the sight. If they were a mermaid, then at least they would be a little easy on the eye, plus mermaids were rather high-ranked. However, no matter how pretty the mermaids were, the virgin would not get nosebleeds. Come to think of it, mermaids were considered demonic humans. The main force of the demons was the demonic humans. Compared to the demonic humans, demonic monsters were nothing more than barking guard dogs. Fortunately, only mermen had to be subjugated, meaning that students did not have to deal with demonic humans. The sharp protagonist sat on a bench to ponder how it had already been a month since he had joined the school. The nights at the school were peaceful. Then, the little philosopher pondered peace. It had been 700 years since the humans and the demons had sworn a truce. Just like how human history was not without war, there had been quite a few disputes, both large and small, in this world as well. For example, Vasman, a large purple demonic creature, and half a century ago, who had been the commander of the 6th Legion, claimed that he would revive the commander of the 1st Legion and cross the line of armistice. The demon had sworn to bring back the demonic Sir Lycan, and he had caused a great uproar that led to great fighting and a lot of chaos. A lady had yelled out to Seek, who had gritted his teeth and pulled his weapon. After a week of battles that were bathed in blood, humanity of course emerged victorious, and the 7 heroes were born. Although 3 sacrifices were made, eyes widened in horror, and neither faction wished to escalate things further. Back then, the judgy protagonist had complained that the hero was named the strongest of mankind when he had only defeated the 6th Legion commander. The peace that had been won in blood had continued to this very day, with the MC now a part of the story, and he wondered if what he experienced now could be called peace. The more that Jeonma thought about it, the one who had sealed the 1st Legion commander alone, Baylor Jokwin, our guy wondered if a guy like that was even human. They only had 3 years left until the Second Human-Demon War, and its fighters included the Demon King. Thinking about the bleak future would not change anything, so the unfortunate protagonist needed to get his head out of his ass and focus on the midterms. The situation was a little annoying, but first, Jeonma needed to find some teammates. However, looking through his contact list, the Virgin realized that he was a huge recluse. He only had his family members and the academy director on the dial, which was embarrassing. Wait, now that he took the time to think about it, the lazy genius realized that he was the most famous student in the academy right now. If he used this to his advantage, then that would surely solve his problem. Besides, living 3 years under the radar was nearly impossible anyway, so Jeong-ma figured it was time to live his life to the fullest. He was going to get a good group and ace his midterms, and he switched his goals from living comfortably and quiet to living comfortably but not quiet. 1 week later, the black-haired idiot was in shambles at the class. There was a lot of murmuring and whispering in the class, but he swore violently as not a single person had invited him to join their group. He could not believe that he had shown off his perfect ninja skills for nothing, and his situation was getting really bad. The lazy student could not do anything in moderation, so the other students were probably now too scared to approach. Then, the social outcast noticed something and he realized that Little Red Assassin was just like him. He figured that the little assassin had also been considered as an outsider ever since that time, so he approached her, taking one for the team. His #1 fangirl was of course happy that he came, and then he asked her if she had found any cadets to team up with for the midterm. However, much to his glee, she was also alone. Our smart guy asked if she was doing okay, since he was used to being ignored, but she used to have a lot of friends. However, the little red yandere just laughed and said that she was okay as long as she had Jeong-ma. If that was the case, then the ambitious protagonist finally took the plunge and asked her to partner up with him so that he could then find 3 other people. Red was thrilled. The MC was not rejected, and it was a resounding success. Chloe's capabilities were nothing to sneeze at, and the goal of the test was to catch as many mermen as possible during the 1 hour given. Considering that the black-haired protagonist only had 30 seconds, to him, the crazy girl was like 1,000 soldiers, and he smiled fondly as she confessed her excitement. He was so happy that she was happy. Suddenly there was a loud noise and our guy looked up at the commotion. It was the girl he hated the most running straight at him, Blondie with the pink heart eyes. She had shown up at the worst possible time, announcing that she had come back to play. The black cat protagonist swore internally, and then he tried to play it off, asking why she had shown up. The blonde hyena pouted, saying that she had literally just told them why she had come. However, Red was not having it and she had gone full demonic mode instantly, chanting that the big ones had come and she was talking about melons, not power level. The black-haired protagonist immediately tried to do some damage control and told Blondie to beat it, and that he could not humor her since he had things to do. The clown then pretended to be so hurt by his words, even getting tears in her eyes when she asked why he was so cold. Our guy asked her to stop calling him by his first name, it was getting way too personal. However, Blondie dropped the sad act and said loudly that she had suddenly gone deaf. That shameless liar whined that he could not hear him and collapsed on the tired protagonist's desk. He was so done with her. The talented hyena whined that she had fallen, and then she popped up, beaming as she asked the talented protagonist if he had a group to take the test with. Jeong-ma was just frustrated that she did not know how to listen. He unfortunately admitted that he had no such thing, and Blondie bounced at her luck. Then she turned her heart-shaped puppy dog eyes in his direction and ever so sweetly asked the reluctant protagonist to join her group. Blondie chuckled about how lucky she was, and then she asked Jeong-ma to come along and to join her group. She even had the audacity to place her hand underneath his chin like the virgin was her little girlfriend. Of course, the picky protagonist with standards was not digging the seduction approach and he instantly smacked her hand away. He asked exactly why the hyena would ask for him of all people when there should be a huge line of students rushing to her, and all she had to do was ask. Well aware of her privilege, the happy clown laughed and said that those students were no fun. However, the touch-averse main character on the other hand seemed fun to do the test with. Our guy was speechless and had no idea what to say to that. Then, the black-haired protagonist pointed out that he had already started a group with his girl Red, and she was a little surprised to hear him speaking up for her. Blondie beamed and said that was fine too since there were spots open in her team anyway. That little rat was ready for everything, let alone the reward. The hyena girl did not realize that asking 2 losers to join her team would risk her grades. Then again, the nonchalant protagonist recalled that the rule was to not hate the player, but the game. So, the MC took some time to consider his options. Out of the corner of his eyes, the charcoal-haired protagonist shot a look at the little assassin to guess what she thought of all this. Red was a little hesitant, but she nodded since it was not like they were going to find anyone else and Blondie was at least pretty strong. So, our guy finally gave in and put himself in her care. The hyena was overjoyed and she told the strong MC that he was not allowed to back out now that he had said yes. Then, it occurred to the slow genius to ask who the other members of the group were. To no one's surprise, Blondie asked the slow poser if he knew who Leon was since he was super popular. Of course, the lazy background character knew exactly who Leon was and he swore in horror as he started to mentally evaporate since he had wanted to stay as far away from that dude as possible. Later on, Jeong-ma sat at his seat in class, trembling worse than a leaf in the wind. However, he shook not with fear but with rage and he growled, wondering just how bad of a crime he had committed in his past life to suffer so much in this one. Even if the gifted protagonist had wielded a knife for 30 years because of his job as a chef, he had only sliced fish. This was so unfair. Alright, it was ridiculous that the lazy protagonist was getting involved with the heroines. He did not think that was possible, and even though he may stand out from the crowd and bump into the girls a few times, they were eye candy, so the virgin did not mind them too much. However, to get involved with Mr. Sparkly Hero of a game that goes violently south in 3 years was a whole other story. The background character could not fathom getting involved with the protagonist's character, for one thing. The protagonist is way too bright for a shadowy guy like the MC. The shadow had zero clues on how things would pan out in the future because he had failed to finish the game, and it would be his fault one way or another. When our guy heard that the protagonist's character was involved, he immediately tried to change his group. However, the blonde which he had signed the contract with was not about to budge on their agreement. She had already put his name in the application before she had even asked his permission, and then she had submitted it immediately after. Not even sacrificing his virginity could get the loser out of this, and he shook with rage as he considered finding Blondie and slicing her up in vengeance. This was the first time in his life that he had ever been provoked to slice a woman. Suddenly, Red called out to Jeon-ma and she looked pretty haunted herself as she asked him if something was the matter. Our guy froze and Red pointed out that ever since the blonde dog girl had left, the loser had stopped looking very well. The little assassin was acting like the blonde had somehow made away with the black-haired protagonist's virginity, and he was silent as he searched for a good response. Then, he told his yandere pet that he had just been a little overwhelmed knowing that he would be taking the exam with the star class cadets. Red was surprised and instantly mellowed down, encouraging him, saying that she was sure that there was nobody in the star class stronger than he was. He nervously thanked her, and the genius recalled that he had been the one to ask the redhead to team up with him, so there was no way that he could leave the group without her in good conscience. Now that Jeon-ma had taken the time to think about it, he could not possibly ask for better people to take the test with. This was a good thing, a blessing, so the lazy opportunist told himself not to be pessimistic about the situation. So, the refreshed protagonist turned to the redhead and asked when and where they would be having the group meeting. The redhead recalled that Blondie had said that they would meet at the cafe in the protagonist building at 6. The sharp protagonist then realized that Red was not going to call the hyena girl by anything other than her hair color for now. It was nearly time, so our guy said that they might as well head off immediately, and Red beamed, agreeing with him at once. So, they took off and casually strolled through the halls of the academy, and eventually got to the door. A cup was slammed down on the table, and it was the little assassin sighing in relief as she slurped her avocado smoothie which she found so yummy. The MC watched her in amazement, knowing the green soup that she was drinking was worth 50,000 won. Those prices would get to him no matter how long he stayed at the academy. Then he nearly spat blood as he hailed Starbucks for being so good. Despite recoiling at the prices, Red figured that he was complimenting the brand that she was drinking from, and the redhead beamed as she happily agreed with him. Meanwhile, the loser reminded himself that he was an adult and he needed to practice some self-control. The only drink that was 10,000 won or below was espresso, so the guy had ordered it, but it tasted like horse poo. Since it was an outside company, the faculty cards did not work there, so the cheap protagonist would not be frequenting that place often. Suddenly, a phone began to ring, and it belonged to our guy. He checked out his messages and he had asked why Rachel and the gang were so late. The crazy blonde had replied that she was running late because she had to take care of the kids. The lazy opportunist and Little Red were already at the Starbucks meeting room, and the blonde hyena said that she would meet them there. Soon, the door opened and in strolled the blonde with a smoothie as she apologized for showing up so late. Behind her stood the true protagonist. The blonde asked the two if they had waited long, but our guy, who sat quietly in the corner, could only focus on the golden shine of the blonde-haired and blue-eyed menace behind the girl who'd been terrorizing him of late. If the protagonist was light, then the shadowy main character was definitely the darkness, and he stared at the protagonist in silent awe. Then the MC paused when he saw a face that he did not recognize, a nameless dude with orange hair and green eyes. The loser could not believe that the blonde girl had shown up with a delinquent on her team. However, the shiny protagonist strolled right up to our guy and he stretched out his hand to the shadow guy, saying that it was nice to meet him. The background wallpaper was silent at first, but then he stretched out his hand and introduced himself. The protagonist smiled, saying that he had been impressed by what he had seen at the subspace a few days earlier, and he felt assured knowing that the main character was going to be his group member for the exam. The loser could only think of how the protagonist had a voice with a perfect blend of intelligence and class. The shiny dude in front of him was definitely the protagonist character that our guy had played as in the past. Once everyone had ordered their drinks, introductions were in order, and the shiny blonde smiled as he considered introducing himself first. The blonde hyena was in full support of that motion. So, the hero went first and introduced himself as Leon Van Reinhardt, the group's leader and a student of the star class. He had ended up becoming the leader somehow, and while he was lacking, he looked forward to working with all of them. Jeon-ma swore internally once again as this hero just reeked of purity and his face was sparkling and glowing the entire time. There was no such thing as equality. Then, the hyena giggled that since everyone knew who she was, he would pass the introduction baton to the orange beside her, and he growled when she elbowed him. Next was the nameless guy, and Orange introduced himself as a student of the star class called Speed Weapon, and he said that he liked heroes. Now that the Dark Shadow took a closer look, he could clearly see the word hero tattooed on that guy's back. The judgy loser was unimpressed, and he could not believe that Orange was actually called Speed Weapon. This group was breaking down a lot of stereotypes that our guy had in mind for those who liked heroes, and he had expected Orange to explain way more. Then, Red shyly introduced herself as Chloe, auditor of the Wolf class, and she was here thanks to her crush. Then the blonde clown started acting creepy by noting how familiarly the redhead called her new prey, and the yandere nearly activated right then and there. However, Red showed remarkable restraint with a strong sigh as she said that it was a pleasure to meet everyone. Blondie was amazed that the redhead had patience and everyone else that her intro was rather well spoken. Then, Ma gave the dodgiest introduction there was by only saying his name and his class. Well, their shiny leader got started since things had gotten a little awkward. It was time to begin the meeting and the hero slid his laptop on the desk and it lit up in a brilliant PowerPoint presentation that left the dude extremely shocked. At their lunchtime, the Star class's instructor had distributed files to the group leaders, and what they were looking at now was a map of their examination site called Scopuli Island. First, the students would be teleported to the designated island through a subspace, but it would only be the gate that would be the subspace. The island itself was real so they could actually get injured by the demonic beasts. Then, the shiny hero zoomed in on the image further, and he showed his teammates the area that they had been assigned, which was the northeastern coast. 3 groups, including theirs, would be hunting mermen on that island. There was a limited number of mermen and hunting as many mermen as the limit would allow was the exam's objective, and as he spoke, all of his team members paid attention. Then, that was all, and the bright shiny dude asked if there were any questions. Everyone was silent at first. Then the orange-haired delinquent pointed out that Scopuli Island was known for containing mermaids, and he asked if there were risks concerning that. The shiny guy said that there was no need to worry since the instructors had already done their research in advance to ensure their safety. The delinquent accepted the response, so then Little Red asked a question and she asked if groups of the same zone could ambush or battle each other. The shiny guy pointed out that the exam's objective was to strictly exterminate the demonic beasts, so conflict between groups would likely lead to disqualification. Mr. Perfect asked if that answered Red's question and she nodded. However, our guy happened to know that they had an assassin in their group so that question had been necessary. That concluded the meeting for the day. All the team members were told to prepare themselves for the midterms, and that they would meet again the next day for their position meeting. Blondie was happy that the meeting was over and she happily dragged off her delinquent who growled about her stretching his clothes. The hero began to pack up his equipment and the Oreo cookie-haired main character lingered. He had ended up sitting in the corner so the light and the dark were now the only 2 left and it felt major awkward. So, the social coward made up his mind to hurry up and leave. Our guy began to stand and then a voice called out, "Excuse me." His eyes like knives slid to who had addressed him and he saw the protagonist had called with a serious expression on his face. Then, the shiny protagonist asked Ma where he had come from. "Where did you come from, Kang Ma?" That was the question that the shiny protagonist had suddenly asked the boy of darkness. The human shadow had frozen at the serious look on the pretty boy's face, and for a moment, our guy said nothing. Instead, the lazy loser wondered what was going on. Now that he thought about it, he had heard a similar question before, though this question was fundamentally different from back then. "Where did you come from?" The shiny guy's eyes looked a little dangerous and the main character could not tell at all what he was thinking, and the imposter syndrome genius wondered if the protagonist was literally asking where he was from. However, that could not be the case, since the blonde perfect boy could have asked what earlier while they were introducing themselves. The hesitant main character could only assume that the blonde had a reason to ask this question after everyone had left. Perhaps, the MC considered a possibility as he racked his brain for how to answer, so the shiny boy finally spoke up. First, the blonde apologized for popping that weird question out of nowhere, saying that he could not just help but think that the shadowy student was similar to him. Mr. Perfect said that with such a dark glow in his blue eyes that the lazy student became even more confused and wondered what he meant by similar. While it was true that the official language of the fantasy world was Korean due to the game, that did not mean that other cultures did not exist within the game. Anyone could tell that the main character was Korean. And then the shiny blonde suddenly told our guy to pretend like he had not heard anything. Then, the shiny blonde stood with a smile and began to walk away, saying that he would be leaving then. However, the MC suddenly reached out and grabbed his shoulder, calling the true protagonist by name. The protagonist hesitated, and the main character desperately asked just where the shiny perfect blonde had come from. Ma swore as he usually did when he found himself acting on impulse, as he had just grabbed the blonde without even thinking. However, if he did not get answers, he would not be able to get a wink of sleep. Finally, the blonde laughed and said that he came from Germany, and Oreo cookie hair was left speechless. Then, the blonde turned and walked away with our guy staring after him. He stared in confusion, wondering what was up with the weirdo protagonist. Later on, an object fell from the main character's hand and he found that this occurred because his hands were trembling. He glanced down at his hand, wondering if he was being paranoid. At that moment, a thought had crept into his head during the discussion with Mr. Bright and Shiny. The tar-haired guy wondered if the shiny protagonist had also come in from another world as well. As outlandish as it sounded, he could not help but wonder. There was no rule that said only one person could get dragged into the game's setting. Also, possessing the protagonist after getting transported to a new world was more probable than possessing an extra. While the blessing of the sword god was active, the black-haired main character's senses had been strangely heightened. So, the gifted student came to the decision to test it out, and he activated the blessing of the sword god, pulling out one of his sashimi knives. His eyes were pressed together and the talented genius focused with all of his might. His mind reached into the dark as he searched for answers, and he found that the blonde's existence was in fact of this world. Our guy was shocked, not only that he could get answers from the weird god, but at the answer that he had received. He had felt it again, the same sensation from when he had felt like a puppet in the blessing's hands. If Jeonma activated the blessings of the sword god and focused, then he could faintly hear a voice. He groaned and massaged his head, feeling a throbbing headache as just thinking about the situation was giving him a migraine that even bypassed the painless blessing. Regardless, the Leon that our guy had met that day was most definitely the same Leon that he played before. No actor in the world could replicate Leon so perfectly, from his bright and pure energy to his seriousness and determination when it came to taking charge. This made the tarpet-haired main character ponder more, and he wondered if the protagonist had really intended only to ask which country he had come from. Even then, Oreo Cookie Hair could not stop his mind but remembering the shiny boy's words and how he had thought that they were similar. None of what the black-haired MC knew explained what the blonde golden boy had meant by that. He considered looking at the K-Com wiki more to research and read up about the characters in his old life, but he did not have any interest in male characters back then, and when he checked it now, there was no info on Leon. Our guy sighed heavily, deciding to let it go since this would be the only time that he would get involved with Wonder Boy anyway. If something like this happened again, then he could ask the academy director about it. Now that he thought of her, the lazy main character recalled how the director had pouted about him not coming to see her of late. The shameless pervert had sulked and asked when the gifted student was going to run away with her. It was advisable that Jeonma keep thinking straightforwardly without any nonsense distracting him. It was strange how calm he could be in a situation that he wanted to avoid. He wondered if this was also an influence of his crazy blessing. At any rate, the loser pulled up his blessings just to have a second look at them. He was thinking so much about them that he might as well check. He noted that he was making smooth progress, and his mental fortitude and armament were still the same. But his physical fortitude increased a bit because of the training he did. The MC figured that his armament would increase once he got the sword that wanted. Then he wondered what the assimilation rate was and gasped when he realized it had gone up quite a lot from 2.5 to 6.8. Then, the lone wolf wondered if it was related to the fact that he had duked it out with both brother and sister of the assassin guild. It was annoying that the talented genius had no idea what he had done to level up, and it was not like he could ask someone else about it either. Then, the system told him that he had reached a certain number of blessing activations and adjustments would be made. Our guy was confused, and he saw that the blessing of painlessness had leveled up from 40 seconds to 40. He was shaken as he pointed at the screen in baffled shock. His painstaking and tortured labors had finally borne fruit, and the joyous main character laughed with joy as everything suddenly felt very great. Then, time flew by. The MC kept training no matter what, and he continued to attend all of the group meetings, interacting with the crew and having a swell time. With 3 days left, he continued his training with Red, who happily gave him more swordsmanship pointers. Then with 2 days left, the clown girl started moving in again and the yandere nearly lost her mind. One day before the start of the test, and Jeonma had not stopped his daily exercise as he fought and sweated to grow. His sweat hit the floor where he worked, and he sweated more as he swung his sword with more precision after many days of practice. The main character was sweating up a storm, and his sweat sparkled the more he learnt and improved. Then, Oreo Cookie Hair smiled in satisfaction after a long day of hard work. Finally, the day for the midterm had arrived and all the students gathered around. A subspace gate had been opened and it had a completely different vibe than the subspace for the training grounds. Then our guy was called to come over and he turned to see his group waiting for him, all strong men and women. The main defense from the left was played by the blonde clown grinned as she laughed that the lazy main character who usually preached punctuality was late that day. Their leader Leon, who was stationed in the middle, smiled brightly at the black-haired main character and called him over. Orange hair called weapon was their support from the right and he just waited for our guy to come around. And Chloe, who was their sub-DPS from the left with Blondie, happily greeted the MC this morning. The talented genius was the rearguard at the far right and he apologized for his tardiness. He could not help but marvel at the amazing equipment that they carried, and that the blonde had an S-rank gear Vermilion Phoenix halberd. It did not look like the protagonist had his bombing just yet, and speed weapons gear was a recorder for some reason. The underrated loser could not believe what that idiot was wearing around his neck. To make things worse, the orange delinquent totally saw him looking and started acting like he was itching for a fight. The blonde hyena whispered that it was actually one of the few S-rank equipment that aided with healing, and Jeonma could not believe that thing was that powerful. A healing S-rank armament was something that was ridiculously hard to get, even if one dumped tens of millions of one in-game. However, its appearance also contributed to its specs. The genius had no choice but to be rather impressed with the weapon and he rubbed his chin in admiration and newfound respect, studying the weapon. However, Orange got rather flustered and told him not to get so close. Then, an attention rang out that the first year midterms of the year 2043 would then commence. Seeing all of the students' faces, they all seemed prepared. They should all be familiar enough with the rules, so the wolf instructor would keep things brief. If there was something that they could not handle, the students were instructed to run away, as they were reminded that they were not yet heroes but cadets in training. They were told not to risk their necks for extra credit. The students smiled as they listened, and the teacher also informed them that if they were injured or wished to surrender at any time, then they could contact the instructor in charge. It looked like it was nearly time, so Shiny Boy said that it was time for them to prepare. The glowing golden boy told them not to be nervous and said that they would all do their best. The exam was finally starting and Jeon-ma got ready. Then, he noticed the redhead had gone rather silent and he asked her if something was wrong. However, the assassin asked if it was weird that he was now anxious about the test since she remembered that a mermaid could appear on the island. Our guy explained that the instructor said that the teachers had checked everything beforehand, so there was no need to worry. Now then, it was time for the students to step inside the game arena, and the subspace gate was now running. So, the smiling main character told Red that it was time for them to go and he patted her head. The redhead smiled, knowing that she should not worry because the talented genius was with them. She believed strongly in Jeon-ma, and as their team marched forward, she was sure that everything would be okay. However, suddenly the world went dark and the darkness stretched on long after the team had entered the test arena. A break-in the darkness was someone calling a name over and over again. There were words being spoken in the dark, flashing in and out in blurry lines, and Red realized that she could hear our guy's voice. He kept calling her name over and over again, until it was louder and louder. Chloe snapped out of her daze and was shocked as the genius asked if she could hear him. Her eyes widened as she realized that she had suddenly lost focus for a moment. Then she stared as the other teammates said that they could not contact the instructor in charge. They had landed in a cave and there was no connection. The crisis had come and someone was bleeding. The redhead was confused, but then she said before them a high-ranked mermaid. Just before the mermaid's appearance, the sky had been bright and beautiful over the beautiful Scopuli Island. There was a lot of coughing and hacking on the beach. For some reason, the team was feeling rather sick after stepping through the subspace. Then, the golden blonde turned to our guy, surprised that he seemed fine, and the talented genius explained that he generally did not get seasick. However, the pretty protagonist doubted that this was a seasickness issue. Suddenly, a merman showed up and it made a very surprised noise. Jeon-ma saw a merman for the first time and he was as horrified as he suspected that he would be. The creature was surprisingly smaller than he had suspected. The main character felt like an idiot for being so serious about it and that he might not even have to use his weapon at all. He had been planning to take it easy in the rearguard position anyway. The beautiful golden then said that there would be grown mermen once they reached their assigned area, and those mermen were not like these small ones. First, they had to go check out where the redhead had gone to scout, so that's where the team went. The team strolled through a forest and Leon reminded everyone to be careful while the observant Jeon-ma just monitored from the back. Then, he realized something. However, the shiny blonde called out that it seemed like the little assassin was around the area. Little Red zipped through the branches of the trees, using her full assassin powers, and she landed before them. The black-haired main character asked if the little assassin had just been climbing the trees on her way here, and the little redhead said that was the best so that she would not be noticed. Then, the shiny blonde asked Red how things were and what the situation was. The redhead started her report and said that there were about 500 meters ahead, and there was a cave there. The team easily found his cave and they confirmed from Red that it was the right cave. Inside the cave, they saw a gathering of golden eyes and it turned out to be a collection of fish-eyed mermen sitting around a burning fireplace. There seemed to be about 50 or 60 of them in the cave, and our guy noticed that it was definitely something to consider. If they hunted the mermen down, then they would definitely secure first place in the midterms. But for the leader, considering the safety of the team was important too. If it resulted in injuries, then they could be stuck in a cave with no outside communication. The genius wondered if they should take the risk or safe Dieter somewhere else. This decision was of course up to their team leader, Leon. The leader counted on Cleo to scout around when they landed on the island. Weapon was to handle the buff-type blessings and healing from the back. The cynic still found it interesting that Orange was a healer, and the delinquent had immediately gotten pressed, asking Jeon-ma what he had said, and yelling that the basics of a hero was to help others and that should be common knowledge. Then, our dude Jeon-ma was to guard the rear against any potential threats. The lazy student was absolutely grateful for the very sweet and easy job that he was getting. Meanwhile, the golden boy would lead everyone from the center. The team could not just rush in, and of course, the golden leader would join the offense if the situation called for it. Then, the crazy clown pointed out that she had been left out and she asked what she should do. The beaming golden prince beamed at her and told her something. Present day, the leader has made a decision. Rachel was called upon and the vicious blonde pulled forth of her spear. Her hand tightened on her mighty staff, and then she swung and let go, the spear firing like a lightning bolt. It shot off, creating a golden arc in the sky as it flew towards her chosen victim, and their golden eyes stared back. The spear hit dead center in the campfire, completely obliterating it. All the mermen stared shocked and confused as they wondered what on earth had just happened. They were rather slow, but they quickly gathered that they were under attack and they whipped their big bulbous eyes around to see a muscular figure with really large melons leaping right at them. The mermen were distraught as the figure was terrifying and she approached with murder in her eyes. Grinning wickedly, the blonde maniac landed in their midst and grabbed her spear, creating a remarkable arc as she spun in the cave, eliminating many mermen in one go. They were too shocked to even process their deaths as their heads went flying. Meanwhile, Jeong-ma watched her in admiration as he recalled that their brave leader had asked the blonde girl in one of their meetings if she could tear up all of their enemies. Of course, she could do that exceptionally well, and the blonde posed as she grinned back at them, replying in French that of course she could cut down anything. Then, Orange took up his recorder and began to play a note. He blew with all of his might into his glowing green recorder and his blessing immediately activated. The mermen were shocked to hear such amazing tunes firing their way. As the music attacked them from one side, blowing their minds, the hyena lady attacked from the other side, cutting them down like they were paper. As she advanced, she kept counting down her kills with mad glee in her eyes. Crazy Blonde counted 18, then 22 kills, and then 24, her joy never diminishing as she swirled and whirled. She beamed with joy, thanking Weapon for his blessing, as she had taken 25 kills down now. Everyone was amazed at her ruthlessness and skill, though the shiny leader just looked proud of her. Then, Red decided to show off as well and grabbed her own weapon. Unsheathing her mighty sword, she activated her own special blessing as pink magic danced off her weapon and body. She used the blessing of the cat. With one mighty slash, she had beheaded a whole line of mermen. She sliced 8 in one blow and boy did little Red look proud of her kill. More mermen charged at her, and she sliced the ugly creatures up in ribbons of flesh and blood. That made 10. Meanwhile, Crazy Hyena Blonde was pushing 45 while she swirled and whirled her way deeper and deeper into the cave. Now, the boys were kind of concerned as they watched the girls' progress. They were surprised that the girls were not stopping because at this rate they would go too deep into the cave. Then, Jeong-ma's eyes widened as he realized something. The two girls danced and slashed their ballet of battle as they fought in the cave, not one of them willing to slow down. Red was covered in pink while the hyena girl was encircled by golden magic, and then they both met in the middle to face a giant fish with legs, bigger than any of the other mermen. It almost looked like the girls were fighting each other at some point as they charged towards each other with the giant merman behind them. The beast roared and showed all of its dangerous and sharp teeth, and the two girls activated their powers as they landed before it. Within seconds, that giant monster of death was sliced and its body parts divorced, flying apart and filling the cave with sliced fish. Rachel grinned at Red, noting that the little assassin seemed a little faster than she had been before. Red glared back at the golden hyena and growled that she had been the one to take the big boss down. The blonde laughed and said that the little red assassin was funny as they jumped apart. Our guy was relieved that they were not trying to kill each other, but the girls stayed doing too much. Then, the shiny protagonist took down a few foes on his own, and the MC's attention switched. Leon had noted that the black-haired main character was worried about the two girls, but Jeong-ma pointed out that it seemed his concern was unnecessary. They had managed to take down all 60 mermen, and they had done it so fast. The shiny protagonist grinned and told Oreo Hair to put a bit more trust in his teammates. Since everything was settled, it was now time for them to leave and there were grunts of agreement. Decisiveness and leadership, as well as being the solid backbone of the team, made Leon an irreplaceable, an important center of the story. So, the protagonist's existence in the game seemed to be real. So, our guy once again contemplated the question that he had been asked, and he wondered if it had really been just a simple question about where he was from. Jeong-ma was so distracted that he had not seen the blue light that glinted in the cave. He stood there, knowing that he had not had to contribute much to the fight, so it was a relief when the bright light fired like a laser, coming from over our guy's shoulder and tearing into the protagonist's midsection. Everyone could only stare in shock, confusion and horror at the sudden attack when they had successfully eliminated all enemies. However, that was not exactly so, and now they all looked back to regard the lithe and beautiful enemy that had suddenly appeared. The team cried out their leader's name as he crashed to the ground, but behind them a bigger problem was brewing, and a feminine figure rose to the surface from the water. A beautiful purple demon mermaid had appeared, and she meant business. The blonde hyena panicked, shocked to see a mermaid of all things, and she asked why such a creature had appeared. They had scouted ahead and seen nothing, so the students could not imagine now where that thing could have come from. Jeong-ma was beyond horrified about the recent development, and he cursed internally, knowing that it had felt like things were going too smoothly. Given the situation, he did not know if they were to fight or run. If they were to poorly attempt to flee with the injured Leon, they might all end up wiped out. In that case, there was another option. Meanwhile, Rachel yelled at Weapon, asking him to try to contact the instructor about a mermaid showing up. However, they were not getting through as there was no connection inside the cave. The students had begun to tremble, and our guy cursed that they no longer had communication from the outside, and his teammates were panicking even more. It seemed the MC was the only one who was still clear-headed, and the blonde was surprised to hear that. Our guy immediately leapt to take charge, telling the recorder guy to pour out his blessing on Leon as soon as possible. Then, Jeong-ma called out to Chloe, snapping her out of her daze, and she stuttered out a response. He told her to get out of the cave and to alert the other cadets nearby to evacuate. She was also their escape route, so she had to go call the instructors as she was the only one who could slip away in this situation. Red was alarmed by these instructions, but he insisted that it was hard to flee with the injured protagonist, so the little assassin had to hurry before the mermen began to swarm again. She was hesitant, but she knew her given task was important, so she accepted it. The little redhead leapt away, and then Rachel returned to our guy, asking if he had a plan. Then she paused in horror and asked what he was doing. Even Orange yelled at him that he was insane. However, the crazy genius turned to the mermaid, telling the blonde hyena and the orange healer that he was leaving the small fries to them. They cursed, asking what the crazy genius was planning to do. However, the black-haired main character just closed his eyes. He had always disliked small fish because there was no skill involved in handling them. However, when it came to slicing big fish, he was exceptional at it. With joy, Guillaume pulled out his knife, for he had big fish to slice. Demons could utilize a unique power similar to humans in their blessings. Magic. The protagonist fell to just one normal attack with said power. This was the difference in strength between humans and demons. Guillaume could not say for sure that he would reign triumph, despite having the blessing of the sword god. Even in the original game, it was impossible to subdue a magic-utilizing demon without a party. The fact that he was supposed to solo a boss that usually required a full-scale raid was a terrible situation. Of course, he was going to curse when things got so bad so very fast. There was no way for him to back out of this now, and he silently considered his options. It would take around 10 minutes for Chloe to come back, and there was only one thing he could do while facing the mermaid that was smiling like he was fish food. His words and actions also gained an increased sense of authority, and restrictions would be applied to the blessing to adjust to the user's level. The blessing of the sword god was then activated, and our guy grinned as silver overtook his eyes. It had been quite a while since he had done some proper sashimi, and he was quite looking forward to it. The power as usual wished the sword god's blessing upon him. The fight had begun, with the blonde hyena charging forward and attacking the prey in front of her with a mighty fast slash. The fish with big bulbous eyes roared at her and charged. However, she stuck her spear far within its gut and through its gaping mouth, groaning all the while. The talented spear master had to fight back 3 mermen at once with her incredible strength, screaming and growling the entire time, as well as cursing as she pushed back the alarmed fish people. She yelled at them to get out of her way, sending a blast of power through them that knocked them back. Then, the blonde sighed with relief and wiped the sweat from her face. The orange-haired kid watched her from afar, considering giving Rachel a blessing boost. But healing the hero Leon was overwhelming enough, as the wound in his side was deep and bleeding. The wound was deep and it was not healing very quickly, but it was recovering regardless, and that was all that they could ask for. The orange record blower was aware that the jerk Guillaume was absurdly strong from the subspace duel that they had watched. Surely there was a limit when the first-year student was facing a giant malicious mermaid. There was no way our guy was not crazy to be able to stand before that giant fish woman and not run. Just watching them made the ginger feel as if his bones were splintering. It was much too late, but he considered trying to talk some sense into the MC and stopping him from doing something this stupid. However, as the mermaid raised her mighty webbed hand, tinged with magic, and brought it down with malicious intent, Kang Guillaume's ability activated and he sliced forward with overwhelming speed. He managed to dodge her first attack, bolting right at her with his swords drawn. The mermaid seemed to be a demonoid who primarily utilized long-distance attacks with the magic of water properties. While he did not know magic, the mermaid was still just a fish that happened to have flesh and bones. So, he was going to dive in, leaping at the powerful figure with all of his full chest, and he could cut that giant fish up into pieces. His eyes were whited out with focus, and even the mermaid looked shocked when our guy leapt. The MC sliced with ferocity, slashing through the mermaid, but she somehow dissolved like water, surprising him. He was alarmed when the mermaid suddenly turned her arm into a water drill and charged forward at the orange-haired healer. The poor recorder boy was terrified and frozen in place. He could not even compute moving out of the way. The ferocious fish was elated at the fear that she found in his eyes, and she excitedly rushed at him, but she had distracted herself, and her mouth fell open in a scream of pain. Our guy had zipped over there instantaneously. He was not about to let the mermaid get away with hurting their healer, and he cut her off before she could get to Orange Boy. Guillaume skidded to a stop as he landed, turning to face his screaming opponent. The cut had been irritatingly too shallow to be good enough, and he leapt off again, this time intending to cut her like he had been trained to cut fish. The mermaid was not having it and leapt back into the water in retreat, much to our dude's hatred and disdain. She truly was a cowardly mermaid, and predicting her movements was no easy task. She was making this entire fight so hard for him. Then, he wondered if she had deliberately gone for the ones who were injured. Regardless, he had to cut her down. Suddenly, someone called to our dude, and he turned in surprise to the recorder boy, who watched him speechless. The hero was also rather speechless as he clutched his wound. The MC sort of remembered they were there, and he asked if they were doing all right. The recorder boy was nervous, but he managed to stutter out that he was fine. Satisfied with that answer, our guy leapt into the fray once more, telling the healer that he was relying on him, and calling him a hero. Weapon was in disbelief as the mermaid leapt out of the water again, and the MC relentlessly attacked her. He had been called hero by Guillaume, and the boy's eyes widened. He recalled telling the black-haired boy that being a hero was cool. It involved justice and bravery and self-sacrifice and the ability to turn despondence into hope. However, despite entering the world's best hero training school, the orange-haired boy had not seen anyone who had the things that he had mentioned. Our guy had wondered if the healer would confess his love if he found someone like that. The healer said that he had not seen anyone like that in the dragon class anyway, which was why he had joined this group with Rachel, and since he was a supporter type, the team composition worked out well. He had been sure that he could find the hero that he was looking for in Leon. Our guy could not help but smile as he looked at the shiny protagonist, thinking that the healer was right. Weapon caught the MC idolizing too and he grinned sorry to say, but Jeon-ma was far from being a hero in his eyes, although he was strong. Even if he was, the black-haired main character would refuse to be a hero anyway. The orange-haired boy said that being a hero was not some kind of object for him to refuse, and even so, he would not be giving that title to our guy anyway. Now, the recorder boy looked at Kang Jeon-ma in a different light, and Loki cursed at him. The way our dude valiantly fought the giant beast, tearing piece after piece from her in lightning-fast moves. The mermaid even sent projectile purple fish at the MC and they zoomed at the talented fighter, intending to do great harm. However, he was able to smoothly dodge the attacks, flying over the projectile purple fish, and he mumbled that this felt a bit slow. Then, he realized that the projectile fish were following. Little Miss Mermaid was playing dirty. The dirty fish laughed like an evil villain as she shot more reprehensible attacks his way. But our dude sliced an X shape on the cave wall and broke through to the other side, the fish flying through the wall as well. They shot at him as he ran, chasing him down no matter his speed, and the mermaid grinned wickedly. She used her projectile purple fish to hunt him down. She grinned wickedly and turned her head, intending to send more projectiles towards the others, and the blonde hyena screamed, knowing the evil fish was aiming for their healer. The demonoid mermaid had been aiming there from the start and she stretched out her hand as she fired a blast at them, and Weapon once more feared that his time had come. However, suddenly our guy zoomed by, slicing her arm right off as the fish still zoomed after him in pursuit. He cursed as he had once again made a shallow cut. He could not take this beast down with only small cuts and he growled to himself to get himself together. The mermaid was shocked when her arm flew clean off and then she felt a new level of rage. The magic she had intended to fire got blasted in another direction and it smashed into the cave walls, tearing a whole beacon out into the island. The mermaid was furious with rage and she whistled and clicked in annoyance. Suddenly, the three fish she had sent Jeon-ma blasted right into her and the large fish was highly alarmed and very confused. Meanwhile, some of the students around the region noticed that their instructor Kim had arrived and the purple-haired sensei turned. They had also heard a very loud sound that was like a roar as well as a bam. The birds had taken to the air in a suspicious area as well. There had also been a flash of light before the student had seen the instructor, and it had started to rain. All of these were not very good signs and the teacher got serious as she stared in the direction that the sound had come from. The teacher then smiled at the students and said that they should get to the wounded and move quickly. Seeing that it had started raining, she told the students that they had likely seen lightning and heard thunder. The students immediately accepted this excuse and happily agreed that they should return to the academy as soon as possible, with the purple-haired teacher smiling the entire time. Meanwhile, the rain fell into the hole that had been created in the cave, and the orange-haired student continued playing his tunes to heal the fallen leader. There was silence in the cave and the fishmen looked alarmed by the sudden hole in their home. They ran and retreated, much to Rachel's surprise. The rain kept flooding into the cave and the students looked around as their foes seemed vanquished. But they were not about to let down their guard. Our guy groaned mentally about failing to land a fatal blow on the creature because he had to be conscious of Leon the entire time. The mermaid had likely been crushed under the debris after the cave collapsed, and she likely was not dead. Suddenly, there was a huge explosion from the debris to quickly confirm our guy's suspicions, and he grinned in exhaustion, knowing that stupid fish would not die from rocks alone. The mermaid appeared with her melons hanging out, and she looked furious. She looked like she had unlocked new forms of rage as she charged at Jeon-ma, and he threw aside his jacket. Then, he called out to Rachel, saying that since the fishmen were basically taken care of, he was leaving Weapon and Leon in her care. The blonde agreed and the healer looked hesitant. He could not believe it. But Kang Jeon-ma was really going to keep facing the demon head-on. He had thought that the knife-slicing genius had been nothing but a madman earlier, but now, it seemed the orange-haired boy was witnessing a legend in the making. Our guy could finally focus on defeating that big fish and that big fish alone. He had only 10 seconds left and he rolled up his sleeves so that he could use his time wisely. It was now time to make up for the lost time. The big fish gritted her teeth and growled at him, and then, once again, she charged at the crazy knife-wielding genius who told her to bring it on. He closed his eyes for a second and then they snapped open as he zoomed right at her, intending to cut everything down. Faster, faster, and faster, the redhead had to run even faster through the forest. She had no intention of stopping as she raced through the forest. The little red assassin ran, her sword in hand as she slashed through the forest, knocking out every obstacle that appeared in her way. She had run so fast and so hard that it felt like her legs were screaming at her now, begging the redhead for mercy. However, even if she had to use up her blessing to run, even if she could get even a sliver of help, she needed to find any form of help for her fallen comrades. Even so, running hurts. It hurt so bad and she was not even stopping to catch her breath. However, she would not slow, her thoughts filled with Jianma. He had told her to contact the instructors while they had stayed back to fight that impossible beast. The dark-haired guy was the strongest person that he had ever met in her life. However, he always found fighting arduous, and he was the kind to avoid drawing his blade whenever possible. He would only unsheath his difficult weapon when there was no other choice. It was because of this that she ran now. She also believed that the MC had made the best decision when it came to dealing with the situation. But Chloe was still bitter about the mermaid, wishing that she had been stronger. Suddenly, she heard an explosion from the mountain where she had left her comrades, her eyes wide in shock and horror. The redhead turned in horror, wondering what the blast had been. Her lip trembled as she hoped her darling crush was still alive. She raced forward, running even harder and faster, racing through the forest like nobody's business. Her feet skidded across the floor, and she ran even faster. Chloe could not fall here, she could not stop at this limit. The girl ran faster through the rain, even as rain fell from her eyes in despair. She needed to find somebody, anybody who could help, and she cried out, screaming if anyone was there, if anyone could help. Her eyes widened when she finally sensed something. She could not feel it clearly because her senses were a mess, but she could detect mermen ahead of her. Chloe's heart was filled with rage and disgust. Mermen were the last people she wanted to see right now, and she rushed forward with the intent to eliminate them, just to run right into a magnificent sword. Her eyes widened in shock at the sword that deflected hers, and even the blue-haired person who had stopped her was shocked. The redhead was relieved. Finally, she had run into a person. She apologized and then just collapsed on the floor without passing her message. The waterfall-haired girl was surprised, and her teammates cursed when they saw that, wondering if they had been attacked in an ambush. They yelled at the redhead, asking if she was insane and that they could not just let it slide and that she tried to hurt them. However, Waterfall Hair told them to hold their charge because the redhead looked familiar. The little assassin managed to weakly crack her lips and speak, telling them about what had happened to Jianma. The mountain was still smoking in the distance, and the blue-haired girl was horrified. Later, they would wonder if there would ever be a day as astonishing as this. The ginger-haired boy stared in wonder, noting that the MC looked like a skilled swordsman, handling a live fish and flopping on a chopping board with skill. The black-haired boy went beyond just fighting the demonoid. The talented sashimi knife wielder had overwhelmed it. The ginger was certain that the scene that was unfolding in front of them now would be something that would be etched in his memory for the rest of his days. He was witnessing the birth of a true hero. It was not like Jianma was moving as quickly like he did back at the subspace duel. With his precise and fast technique, he deflected attacks and closed in. The sashimi wielder sliced through his opponent without mercy, darkness thriving within him. His technique originated from the simple act of cutting, and the dark-haired boy sliced through the fish expertly, and its outcome was literally clear-cut. That giant fish fell apart like fallen paper. The two watching could not help but stare in shell-shocked awe. Even Rachel, who was the successors of the Spear clan and grew up among the strong, had not seen anything of this caliber. The blonde was speechless. At this rate, the mermaid might just fall. Suddenly, the blonde noticed something and yelled to weapon. The ginger straightened in shock, and the girl barely managed to shove him out of the way as a huge white blast came flying their way. She yelled at the boy to get his mind out of the clouds or they were surely going to die. The ginger was a little surprised about that, and then he gaped at the gigantic crater that had been created by the blast that they had just dodged. It was insane. The boy had nearly forgotten where he was from and how surreal the sight was. The surroundings had suddenly changed, and their opponent was a demonoid who utilized magic. A blade against magic would not have been a good matchup to begin with, even if he currently had the upper hand. Eventually, Jianma would start to struggle. The ginger then worried that their opponent used magic that could not be dealt with, and even the dark-haired boy seemed to consider the possibility. However, he still stood in challenge, his knife out as he faced the opponent. The mermaid was still standing despite getting sliced up consistently. She was a huge pain, and she thought the same of her opponents. The angry purple fish then attacked them with the needle squall and roared at them. Her attack came flashing at them, along with her slimy bouncing melons as she aimed again to kill. There was a flash of purple in the rain as she faced the MC who stood in her path. Suddenly, there came the collective sound of snapping. The mermaid waved her hand in Jianma's direction, her teeth gritted with malice, and purple slashes flew right at the young lad as he stood facing the approaching strikes. The young student leapt and raced, moving faster than the incoming attack. The slashes all crashed into the mountainside, narrowly missing him. The sashimi knife that Jianma held smoke from the attack, a serious frown on his face as he noticed this. The fighter kicked and slashed his attack right back at the creature, slicing through her. The mermaid's eyes widened in shock as Jianma became larger than life, his look almost demonic as he launched his attack at the quivering fish. The mermaid screamed in alarm and rage, her scream of pain echoing through the mountain cave as yet another slash sliced through her. Suddenly, the boy with Oreo-colored hair had his eyes widened, because suddenly appeared the most rolling, confused pile of mermen coming towards him. The mermaid growled wickedly and then suddenly powered up by tossing something glowing and purple down her gullet. Then, her neck powered up with glowing light like a toad cannon was bubbling in her chest. Then, her jaw unhinged and her mouth became a gaping chasm of purple power, fired directly at the main character. Weapon yelled for him to get out of the way, but the young lad knew that he could not avoid the blast on time. Staring at the blast coming right at him, the scene went white and it felt like he was transported to another world. In that world, the main character stood in a calm sea. He stood confused in the silence, staring out into the open and still world of white and blue. His feet were deep inside the water, but the MC was speechless, and he knew not where he was. He caught the water in his hands, staring in confusion when something caught his attention. There was suddenly a flash of pink, like the mermaid's blast was cutting through his very slowly, slicing through the perfect piece of white and blue. Jeonma's eyes widened and he stared out at the horizon, and a voice spoke, telling him to slice. The boy replied that he did it, he had sliced. Little sparks of red flickered within the darkness, and he reached for a sashimi knife, grabbing it tight in his hand. Then, the young lad sliced. The mermaid's shot seemed to slice through the young lad, the rain still pouring heavily in the gaping cave without a roof. The main character could slice, and he did, severing the creature's head right from its body. The magic had been severed right at its core and the mermaid's head fell. Blood stained the floor before Jeonma's feet and the mermaid's body lay fallen, drenched and dried up like a fish out of water. The young student stood over the creature's corpse like a dark executioner with his knife in hand. Silently, he regarded his fallen foe as the rain continued to pour. The mermaid struggled to speak, gurgling and glubbing as she did. The other two students immediately tensed, worried that she would launch yet another attack at them. However, suddenly there was spinning and the mermaid's body rolled on the sand, completely dead and defeated. The dried fish's severed upper half rolled, and Weapon's eyes widened as he realized that his newly beloved hero had won the battle. A freshman sashimi knife wielder had defeated a demonoid overpowered creature by himself. The others could not help but feel a little intimidated as they stared at the student's back in awe. Suddenly, there was a splash of blood and the young lad fell to his knees, his hand clutching his chest. The blonde hyena immediately recognized something was going on and she ran immediately to Jeonma. The ginger was relieved that Leon was fine, and then he paused in alarm. This was because the orange-haired boy had noticed that the merman who had run away may have happened to return once more. The lad turned on the alarm but was relieved to see an approaching blue-haired figure. He sighed in relief that it was about time, and before him was Waterfall Hair and her team, one of them carrying the slumped body of the redhead girl. The students were shocked and alarmed to see the diced-up fish body before them and the remnant of the team in chaos, with the blonde still struggling to leave Jeonma. They wondered if they were really looking at the decimated body of a mermaid and why a mermaid was there. Everything had been destroyed to bits, and the blonde hyena pulled the Oreo-haired boy close to her chest as she called out to him desperately. The waterfall-haired girl could not believe the blonde was sticking to the young lad like that. Then, the girl to the group leader who was the blonde, now standing to his feet. Leon laughed nervously and the blue-haired girl assessed that most of the team members looked like they had one foot in the grave, yet the team leader was pristine and spotless. The blonde boy had an absurd amount of luck. The genius swordsman informed the blonde leader that she had made contact with the academy, and the instructors would be with them in an hour at the earliest. Then, the young girl asked just what had happened there. The ginger was speechless at first and then he cursed at their good-for-nothing teachers who were supposed to have explored the darn island beforehand. The genius swords lady already knew the rules and she demanded that they properly explain just what had happened there. Weapon did not take kindly to her words and he asked if the swords lady really had the audacity to be ordering him around right now. Of course, their blue-haired savior snapped and asked why the ginger always had to perceive things so weirdly. This was a request, just a request, not an order, and she wanted answers. Well, it was not like he would believe what he had to say anyway, but he would answer since she had only just asked. The orange-haired boy grinned as he prepared to explain things since that was his speciality anyway. So, they did explain it and the blue-haired swords lady put all the information that she had heard together. Apparently, a mermaid had appeared out of nowhere during their mission and the dark-haired boy who was now unconscious had defeated it alone. The ginger groaned and said that was exactly what had happened, and he wondered what else she was expecting from his explanation. The blue-haired girl was speechless. A freshman of the academy had killed a demonoid who had appeared out of nowhere on his own. That was a very rare story and was barely believable. The tales that her grandfather had told her when she was younger were even more realistic than that story. However, as ridiculous as that story was, it seemed to actually be the truth. She could not imagine why the survivors of such a terrifying encounter would lie about something like that, giving all of the praise to Jeonma of all people. It really did sound like a story that came out of a legend. As the descendant of the acclaimed hero, Baylor Joquin, and his disciple, Aaron Niblung, those radiant roots had let her attribute herself to a special class since birth. In other words, she was of a bloodline of masterpieces. Regardless, she had put incredible effort into not being overshadowed by the impressive roots of her impressive family tree, and the young girl had worked hard. That was how she had her talents flourish and how she had gotten this far. However, the young lady now stared ahead as she considered Kang Jeonma. It was ridiculous how large of a gap there was between their skills and she had mixed feelings of fear, dread, and admiration. Perhaps she had just been an ordinary person all along when faced with such a brilliant level of talent. She asked her teammate to use her healing blessing on him, and the healer girl immediately agreed to it. A green light enveloped the slumped unconscious boy. Although he was tatted and at death's door, Kang Jeong-ma, who was the same age as she was, fought a demonoid alone and emerged victorious. The waterfall-haired girl then stared at the unconscious boy with the slightest looks of contempt etched on her face as she regarded him. The ginger called to her and asked if she really had contacted the academy earlier, and the blue-haired girl confessed that she had. For now, the orange-haired boy thought that it would be better not to tell the instructors what happened in detail after all. The genius swords lady was surprised to hear this and asked why, to which the ginger replied that the teachers had supposedly scouted the island before the mission they had been sent to. If that was the case, as the blue-haired girl agreed that it was, then the ginger had to admit that it was strange. Even though Scopuli Island was large, a demonoid popping out of a cave that could easily be noticed by cadets, such a thing did not add up with the search that should have been done earlier. Even the waterfall-haired girl fell silent as she realized that this was true. It was just a guess, but it made the air heavy and dark with speculation. The blonde boy, Leon, then asked the ginger-called weapon if he thought that there was someone from the demon faction within the academy who would make such a thing happen. There was silence at such a blatant accusation, and then the ginger hurried to say that was not what he meant. However, they could also not rule out that possibility. It was a really chilling speculation, and it was undeniable that this cave was not easy for cadets to miss. Just as Speedweapon had said, if it were not for Kang Jeong-ma, Leon's group would have been long torn to shreds by the demonoid. They wondered how such a mistake could have been made by their professors. There definitely were conflicts both large and small in the 7-year truce, but never once did the demons dare to touch the cadets of the Jokwon Academy. There was also a clause in the truce stating that such an act could be a justification for war. The talented swordswoman's eyes widened in horror as she realized something horrible. Her dark thoughts were dispelled by a gentle touch on her shoulder, and the ginger said that he knew what she was thinking of, but he gently told her that she was blowing things out of proportion. Of course, it was not a bad thing to be wary of the possibility of a spy within the academy, but it was far too soon to jump to conclusions about things like that. They were not silly conspiracy theorists after all. Leon then pointed out the importance of their stories matching up when the teachers came around. If there was really a spy in the academy, then Jeong-ma would definitely become a target once they heard that he defeated a demonoid alone. This was true, and though the ginger did not think it was right to keep this under wraps, considering how much the boy did for them, they had to protect him. If that was how they felt, Abel then suggested that they could all just talk to her grandfather about this first. They were surprised that she had suggested the Sword Emperor, and so some time passed. That evening, all of the students had returned to the academy. A curtain fluttered in the wind at the window of Jeong-ma's hospital bed. The poor main character had only just awoken to the sound of the carefree laughter of students. The young lad wondered if he was in a hospital now, and he stared at his hand as if trying to figure out if he had truly survived that encounter. He was truly alive after all, despite the mermaid's best efforts. The wicked creature of purple light had shot something out right before it had died, a magic sphere aimed straight at him. It was not an attack that he could dodge, yet he had been able to see it. Without thinking, the genius with the sashimi knife had been able to cut through it like a like, and the magic was severed into 2 halves before bursting. It had definitely been water. The magic had been water. However, the boy struggled to figure out what that sensation had been. After he had activated the sword god's blessings, he had felt things that he could not possibly describe. Then, Jeong-ma recalled his blessing that had used to feel more like a curse. Just then, his status window popped up and he had leveled up a bit on certain strengths. His mental fortitude, for instance, had increased by 1. He did not get scared when facing the mermaid, so he guessed that was the reason why, and the effects were nice. Finally, the young black-haired boy reached out and noted that the assimilation rate of his power had gone up to 7.2%. He began to wonder if this had unlocked when he drew his knife while fighting the monster. The line on the mermaid's magic had been sliced too, and he wondered if that contributed, oblivious to the bespectacled figure that had opened the door to his hospital room. It popped in the clingy head, who grabbed him in a happy hug, crying out in relief. She said that she had been worried that something horrible happened, and she wailed, swearing that she was going to pop every single one of the useless instructors who had supposedly explored the area. She was so relieved that he was unhurt. The boy begged for the director to let up, and she sulked that she was happy to see him awake. She had nearly forgotten that she brought something with her, and she quickly searched around in her purse for the item, sure that she had put it near the opening. The black-haired boy wondered if it was a dimensional pocket, and then the director crowed with success as she had found what she had been looking for. She pulled it out with joy, saying that the young lad had earned the midterm reward, the Murasame blade. Jeong-ma stared at the blade in awe. It was a B-rank sword, a Japanese sword that meant rain shower, and it was said to possess an edge that glistened like dew. It was a level 25 sword with a really high attack level. The director really hoped that the young lad liked it. Then she apologized for giving this sword to him in a place like this, as he should have gotten it officially. The boy was just happy to get the sword, and then the principal detected someone sneaking around at the back. She yelled at the old geezer, asking what he was suddenly being so shy for, and the young lad looked up in surprise as she yelled for the old man to come in. The old man stepped in, scolding Medea for calling him an old geezer even though he had asked her not to do that. He cleared his throat, and the director scoffed that he would not let her act like a young girl. It was a strange sense of deja vu for Jeong-ma, as the last time he had used his powers excessively, those two had also been there. Once again, the director of the academy and the Sword Emperor were at his hospital bed, and he asked what had brought them there. The director explained that she had heard everything from his teammates and that on behalf of the Jokwon Academy, she would like to apologize from the bottom of her heart. The beautiful lady bowed in apology, and even the old man lowered his head a little in shame, much to the young lad's alarm. The academy was to blame for everything that had happened during the midterms. Because of that, he and his teammates, no, everyone who was there had nearly lost their lives. The Oreo-haired boy was shocked to hear as the director, Media Poison, swore on her honor as the director of Jokwon Academy to uncover the truth behind this incident. The old man acknowledged that the young lad had saved the cadets, and for a moment the boy was speechless. Then, he just mumbled that he had only done what he could. The director was amused and said that while his actions were nothing short of remarkable, they needed to keep the incident under wraps until they had found out the full truth. She was ashamed to say this as the director of the academy, but the mastermind behind this event was within the academy. She was really sorry to Jeong-ma, and she knew that doing this would not be enough, but the young boy smiled and said that he understood perfectly. The director smiled in amazement, saying that the young lad should act like a kid sometimes and throw a tantrum or two as he had earned. The boy sometimes acted like an old man trapped in a teenager's body, which was not far from the truth. Later, the old man and the director left the room, leaving the young talented genius alone. The two walked in silence with a grim look on their faces as they considered the implications behind the recent attack. The director was the first to stop. She called her senior, calling him Sieg, and asked if he could remember the day that they had met for the first time after enrolling in the academy. Back then, the old man had been lying on a bench in the field, and she had told him to shove it. In response, the old man had drawn his sword without a word. What was it that he had said? Something along the lines of telling her not to order him around, with typical 8th grader syndrome. The old man mumbled that he did not remember such an embarrassing memory. The lady smiled in amusement with the slightest of sadness coloring her eyes. It felt as if that encounter had happened just yesterday, yet she had already spent 60 years at the academy. Goodness, she really had lived long. Yet, it was laughable how she had not even filled a tenth of the Jokwon Academy's history. Back when they had enrolled, this place, the academy, was already ancient and filled to the brim with history. While there had been big and small incidents, the academy nurtured and protected its cadets for 700 years. Yet, Media colored green with rage, her hair dancing in her aura, and the glass of the window before them shattered. A protective shield protected them from the raining shards as she closed her eyes in concentration. However, the director still could barely hold back her anger, triggered by what had occurred to the students under their protection. Before the midterms had started, she had received reports that they had completed multiple preliminary surveys of the island. Even if it was rare, the Scopuli Island was known as a ground for mermaid sightings, so she had taken every precaution when it came to ensuring the students' safety. However, things had still ended up like this. Noticing her turmoil, the old man reached out and gently touched her shoulder as he called to her. The director smiled, apologizing for getting lost in thought, and the old man stared, knowing that her smile was fake. Then, the director switched personalities and cooed, saying that the young dark-haired student was so amazing though. He had taken down that mermaid all by himself, and she was very impressed by that, while the old man cursed and called her a dang old lady. The director cooed and asked the man what he thought of the young student, and the old man was speechless. In truth, the boy was a natural-born talent. They had seen countless names hailed as the chosen ones of their era, only for them to lose their light like a meteor, a temporary brilliance. In families of heroes desperate for glory and honor, the word genius was often recklessly thrown around when a child showed the slightest bit of aberrance or promise. It was a word that he had forbidden the use of, even for his precious granddaughter Abel. However, if it was the boy with a talent so unfathomable that he had decimated a mermaid solo, then the word genius could only apply to that boy. If Jeong-ma eventually accumulated experience, the old man could not help but wonder just how far he would go. If it was Kang Jeong-ma, the old man wondered if he could reach the place that he had dreamed of. The old man began to walk ahead, much to the director's surprise, but he just told her to stay put at the academy for now. The director smiled at his encouragement, and she agreed but reminded him that he was going to help her clean stuff up. He mumbled that he did not recall such things, and she rudely asked if he had suddenly gone senile. However, he insisted that he did not remember. Meanwhile, back in Wolf class, Jeong-ma went over all that he knew so far. The fact that he had severed the demonoid's head back on Scopuli Island seemed to have been kept under wraps, as per the headmaster's instructions. It was a bit awkward to say this, but it might be that his classmates were so carefree because he had stopped the mermaid. After his discharge, the first thing he had done was visit the school's forge to reshape and enhance Murasame. In truth, the sacred sword was just a metal rod to him, considering the sword god's blessing, so the reforging was necessary. The young student had asked for an enhancement of his weapon, and his request was confirmed, since he had come during the 700th anniversary event. The blacksmith would not even charge him, and he asked the boy to return in a week. The blacksmith Volander was brimming with enthusiasm, and the student had gotten lucky. He thanked the smith, and now he could only hope for a successful enhancement. Suddenly, someone called to him, and he turned in surprise to see his obvious #1 fan. Chloe was elated to see that he had been discharged and she happily asked how he was feeling now. She hopped over with a crutch and he asked her how she was doing. The redhead laughed and showed her broken leg, explaining that things had ended up like this, and thanks to the emergency treatment from Speedweapon. Though she could not really remember his name, the doctors said that she would be able to walk without crutches in a week. That was news worth celebrating and the little assassin was pleased. She was also an auditor after all, so of course her body was built different. Then, she giggled and apologized for getting a little too excited. And the dark-haired boy was also glad to see that she was doing better. Even if it was true that he alone had taken down the mermaid, it had not been through his efforts alone. The boy asked if there had been anything unusual and the assassin confessed to having heard that the director and the elders were at odds. Everyone had done their part in getting them out of that sticky situation. Chloe's rescue call, Rachel's merman clearing, and Speed's healing and blessing had helped tremendously during the fight. They could not say that Leon had contributed much as he had successfully gotten incapacitated before the fight had even begun. He had barely commanded or directed the way the fight would go either. Now, Jiao-ma was concerned and wondered how the blonde was even going to defeat the Demon King with that kind of attitude, as being that useless in a serious battle was a one-way ticket to the netherworld. He then wondered if the blonde had been so useless since he had gotten injured first. Suddenly, someone appeared at the door of class and yelled at everyone to stop what they were doing. Their wolf class teacher was back and he yelled for everyone to be quiet and to sit down. There were a few very important announcements to be made before the training assembly. This might be sudden, but for the time being in their class, there would be someone co-instructing with him. He cleared his throat and then prepared to introduce them. The students were surprised to get a co-instructor out of the blue, and some of them even found the situation rather annoying. In walked the Sword Emperor himself in all of his white and pristine glory. The room was shocked to see him stride in, with a serious expression on his face. The students were alarmed, wondering why the Sword Emperor had come to their class, and they thought that the whole situation was so cool. Then, the man with golden eyes then looked up and the black-haired boy was stunned, wondering just why the old geezer was there. Later that night, inside of a room with a square window, a grown man was getting knocked around. The man begged, saying that he was sorry when a small hand grabbed the chin of the bleeding man. The lady with white hair then punched the man again, sending him flying. The man begged the instructor Kim that he was really sorry. However, the white-haired instructor covered in purple huffed at the elder. She huffed with eyes glowing purple, saying that the 5th Corps commander was enraged. And with that last panel, we're finally up to date once again with this manhwa. I hope you guys have been enjoying the story thus far as usual, and look forward to seeing more of it in the future. And of course, if you're new to the channel and enjoyed this content, be sure to subscribe for daily news and uploads. Until next time.